Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. Let's talk about that project you've been holding off on for far too long. You know the one, that comprehensive gallery of pizza-themed underwear. Or maybe you're trying to sell some pizza-themed underwear and you need an online storefront. Or perhaps you need to put a menu online for your local restaurant which sells underwear-themed pizza. What am I talking about? Okay, maybe your ambitions aren't quite that weird, or maybe they are. Either way, this is where our friends at Squarespace come in. I've personally always been intimidated at the idea of getting my own domain and my own little slice of the internet, but it took me just a handful of minutes to get down the basics once I checked out Squarespace myself. It really is that easy. They walk you through everything. And after that, it was just super fun customizing everything to my heart's content. Heck, if you already have a domain name, you could just transfer it over with their easy-to-use tools and do whatever you want with it. And if you're wanting to take whatever project you're working on seriously, the tools to track your growth, put together your own ad campaigns, integrate with social media platforms, everything you need to be a functioning business is right here and just as easy to understand. It's very little effort to get something clean and professional up in front of the world. Trust me, nothing feels quite as cool as having your own domain on a business card. And to make it even easier, if you head over to squarespace.com/Game Apologist, you will get 10% off your first purchase. Thank you again to Squarespace for supporting the channel, and let's get back to it. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. And Sonic 2 isn't a bad game. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Share this with all your friends and family, even though they probably don't give a rat's puckered patoot about video games or any of your hobbies, you little weirdo. Why am I even doing this episode? It's Sonic 2. Doesn't need me to come to its defense. This was released only a year after the original game. Sonic 2 propelled the Hedgehog to peak popularity. That brief moment in time when Sega was outselling the untouchable, unstoppable Nintendo. Now, this moment in game history may have come and gone as quickly as the Hedgehog himself, but it's an important moment all the same. It was here that Sonic would forever cement himself in gaming history, regardless of how bad things would get down the line. Sonic became more than a video game. He became a full-on entertainment icon. The legendary Archie comic run began around this time, as well as the cult classic Saturday Morning series, and that other one. The first game was the turning point for Sega, but with Sonic 2, the world truly fell in love with the Hedgehog. No, I don't care if people are starting to second guess its quality. I've already rambled on about this crap for a half hour in the first Sonic video. We really don't need another video stroking the spiky ego of this game. It's good! Who am I kidding? I love talking about this crap, and I sure as hell have plenty to talk about when it comes to this radical pincushion. Besides, I said we'd be looking at every single Sonic game, and this is next on the list. Now, normally, I like to tackle all the negatives in a game before getting to all the positives, but I'll be honest with you guys, there's really not a lot of bad here. Game isn't perfect, not saying that at all, but these are more nitpicks than anything else, so we're just gonna sprinkle them in as we go along. If you're jumping in fresh, how you doing? Welcome, thanks for coming by, but if you have some time to spare, check out the first Sonic video, because I'll be referencing that every now and then, like right now for instance. Why is this game so much more beloved than its predecessor? What's different in Sonic 2 when compared to Sonic 1? Well, right off the bat, the spin dash. Probably the most important addition this game has to offer the gameplay of the series, which is pretty impressive considering all the other stuff we're going to get into later. The spin dash alone makes this game superior to the original. Having trouble getting momentum? Just make your own. Awesome. Now you could argue that this takes something away from the challenge of building momentum and the reward that comes with it and all blah 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 blah. Whatever. The spin dash is incredibly satisfying. This game wants to keep you moving quick, and you can tell that not just with the spin dash, but also with the level design. Where the first game still had a lot of trappings of traditional platformers, the sequel sheds all of the fat. Just comparing the first zone of this game to the first zone of the previous title, you can see it's very much the same. Well, aesthetically anyway. Which is a complaint you'll hear more and more often these days among Sonic fans. That being, we take too many trips to Green Hill or Green Hill-like levels in the Sonic games. Well, they do that for a couple of reasons. First, it's establishing an iconic theme. Sonic's known for his checkered dirt and spiky vegetation. Comparing Emerald Hill to Green Hill, you could mistake the two, yeah. But how many times do you have to run through generic Mushroom Kingdom levels in Mario? What's this? Castlevania set in another castle? Samus is still running around in caves? Kirby's still on Dreamland? What is this crap? The Green Hill aesthetic is a tradition for these games. It's colorful, it's inviting, it's a good way to kick your game off. Just deal with it, you're gonna be fine. And in the case of the sequel, keeping the similar design helps the differences between Emerald Hill and Green Hill stand out that much more. Compared to the first game, you may notice just how much faster Sonic feels in 2, or at least how much quicker you're rolling through these levels. That's partially due to the fact that there are now only 2 acts to run through instead of 3, and there's a lot less to explore, at least vertically. And while we're still in Emerald Hill, let's tackle another common complaint. Does it fall in line with that common conception that Sonic games have great first zones and little else afterwards? Bitch, please. Think of Sonic 1 as a playground. First game starts you off in this fantastic jungle gym, but as you proceed, all you're left with are crappy old swings, teeter-totters, and maybe a tractor tire. And yeah, they can be fun on their own, but who cares when you have that baller jungle gym? But where Sonic 1 is a playground, all of Sonic 2 is an amusement park. Each zone its own unique, colorful roller coaster. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Emerald Hill is actually one of the weaker stages when compared to the rest of the game. They've clearly learned from their mistakes from Sonic 1 and extended the fun past the first level. Instead of the slow, plodding pace of the original game's second stage, Marble Zone, we instead get Sonic 2's Chemical Plant, where they amp up the speed even further. There are a couple of spots where you can run right into an enemy, plunge into a pink watery death, and newcomers will have a stressful time with that infamous rising water section, but you are playing a video game and it will require you to face some challenges. None of this is terribly designed. The third stage, Aquatic Ruin, seems to be the answer to the watery mess of Labyrinth Zone from the first game. You still have to trudge through water if you take the lower path, but if you play well enough, you'll never even see the stuff. Plus, it's just much prettier. By now, if the game wasn't clear in its intention to improve every single aspect from the original game, along comes the fourth level, Casino Night Zone, a massive step up from Springyard Zone. At this point in the first game, that being the fourth zone, the difficulty spikes and the speed takes a literal dive as you waterboard the Spiklops. But by the time you reach that same point in the sequel, they've already gotten their water hazards out of the way for the rest of the game. Now it's time to play around. There's a lot more to see, explore, and do, mixing in pinball elements with Las Vegas slots. Yay, crippling gambling addiction, yay. There is one single enemy type and it shows up only a handful of times. The most dangerous portion of this zone is potentially being crushed by a platform if you're not paying attention, or more likely, just running out of time. Unlike just about every other level in this game, there's a lot to explore here. I would constantly get distracted by the pinball tables or slot machines. This level is, to me, the standout of the entire game, and it's no wonder this thing would be a constant through the rest of the series. Now, we're not going to compare every single zone to the first game selection. That's not the point of the series. I just wanted to point out the sequel's attempts to fix the problems of the first game's level designs without completely abandoning the concepts established by the first outing. The next handful of stages in Sonic 2 are great and have plenty of unique features, like Mystic Cave's fantastic music or Oil Ocean's oil. Sonic 2 also keeps a much more consistent difficulty through the entire adventure. Again, each zone has its own hazards and designs to work around, but nothing too demanding. Honestly, once you get the hang of Chemical Plant and Aquatic Ruin, the game just kind of plateaus in challenge, but it keeps it fun and breezy through the latter half of the game. Well, most of the way through. It's not until you get to Metropolis Zone does this game begin to lose its mind. It's like every frustrating idea from the second half of Sonic 1 had been hiding and waiting for you here in this stage. Don't let that music fool you. It's high energy and it's fun, yeah, but you're gonna be here a while and it gets very annoying. Because for whatever reason, this zone has 3 acts instead of 2, and they're huge. And it's full of these pain-in-the-ass badniks. You're either gonna run into the stupid crab with his stupid arm reach, or the stupid Staryu, which may or may not activate and throw shrapnel your way, or this piece of garbage stupid Mantis and his stupid boomerang blade bullshit. No, keep watching. You sit right there. I had to go through this. No, I had to do this. You're sitting right there. Look how long this takes. This is complete insanity. I'm not really sure what the level designers were thinking when they were creating this stage. Maybe it's made to trick you into thinking this is the last level of the game? Possibly, but honestly, my main gripe isn't really even the challenge. It's this game's complete disrespect for my time, which is such a jarring shift when you compare it to the prior zones. And it's here where one of the seemingly smaller changes made in Sonic 2 actually ends up being a much bigger issue than you might have realized. And by bigger, I mean that quite literally. The Sonic sprite is way bigger than it was in the first game. And it's not like he's actually grown another foot or anything like that. He's still the same height as he was in the original game. The camera, if you can call that, is just closer to Sonic, which means everything else is closer to Sonic, which means they're limiting your field of vision, which means you're more likely likely to be hit by an off-screen menace. That's a nasty problem for a game designed to zip you through the stages as fast as possible, and it's especially bad for a level that demands you to jump blindly up onto a platform. Even if you know that crappy little robot is up there, what are you supposed to do about it? Maybe you'll get lucky and it's turned away or it misses you, but it's clearly put here just to piss you off. Plus, this area almost requires you to reset its stupid gimmicks. How far back do I have to go before that stupid screw comes back down? Does this ruin the rest of the experience? No, and honestly, the trial and error gameplay is well regulated thanks to the shields and the iconic ring health system. And while the enemy placement is annoying, rarely will it lead you to your death. Rings are plentiful, and you should be well aware of how that works by this point in the game. And the pitfall deaths aren't too frequent. This level will actually loop itself a lot of the time instead of just flat out killing you. Something I've always loved about these games is how they always give you something new the entire adventure, and that remains true once you leave Metropolis. But unfortunately, the last couple levels have some frustrations in them as well. Sky Chase does what no Sonic game should do, and forces you to go at the level's pace, not your own. It's unique, certainly, and these little turtle bots are just about the best thing the series has ever created, but it's awkward, and if you die, well, you don't have any checkpoints up here. Sorry, pal. But hey, it's not exactly hard, and it's over pretty quickly. Thankfully, this is only one act long, as is the next stage, Wing Fortress. This level, I've got some mixed feelings about. You're still doing stuff you haven't seen in any other part of the game, but it does pull some nonsense that really isn't up to skill, like flinging you towards empty pits. Great, super neat, thanks. This might be the great grandpappy of all the cheap pitfall deaths that you'll be finding in later 3D Sonic games. A staple I'm not very fond of, but we'll get to that in due time. I remember having a lot of problems in this stage just because I didn't know what to do next. Can I pass under that fire safely? Where the hell do I go now? What is... But this is technically the last zone you're gonna have to play through, so it's gonna give you some grief. If nothing else, this does feel completely different from every other stage in the game, and I remember this certainly felt epic when I was a kid. The music's a little cheesy, but it does a good job telling you that you're near the end of your journey. And then we come to the final zone, the Death Egg Zone, and the last two fights of the game. And no rings. Alright, so if you don't know what you're doing, these fights are gonna stress the ever-living hell out of you. I remember my first time here as a kid. That creepy music track, that corridor that spits you immediately into a boss fight. This is Silver Sonic. Now, I love Dark Mirror villains. Those are basically just evil copies of a hero character. I know it's an overused trope in fiction, but I don't care. I've always loved it. So having a Sonic robot left me with some mixed emotions. One of them being, holy crap, this is a Sonic robot and that's awesome. And the other being, holy crap, I'm going to die. And you probably will. But even if you get past this guy, you still have to deal with Robotnik and his crazy imposing mech. This final fight gave me all kinds of hell as a kid. I could never get the timing down to hit him without getting insta-killed by those stupid spiky mitts, and before long I'd be hitting the game over screen. And let me tell you just how much fun it is to be thrown back to the very beginning of the game after you worked your way up to this point. It's not fun. Now if you're finding yourself stressed and getting wrecked, just pause the game and take a break. You can't be impatient here if this is your first encounter. It's the last boss. It's tough as hell. Once you get the pattern down for these two little bastards, things actually get a little easier. Just take your time, get confident in your movement, and you'll beat these two in no time. Now, fans are split about this final encounter. Some feel it's a fair challenge. Others feel the difficulty spike is just a bit much, especially considering the rest of the game is nowhere near this hard. It made sense to have no rings in Sonic 1, but here, feels pretty inconsistent with the rest of the game, but it does give you quite the sense of accomplishment once you conquer Robotnik for the final time. And with that, you beat the game. And depending on how many Chaos Emeralds you got, you'll either be mocked again or get a better screen. Spoilers, this screen, I'm embarrassed to say, is something I did not see until I was an adult, because I never had the patience to collect all of the emeralds in this game. If you remember in the first game, if you collect 50 rings and can make your way to the end without getting hit, you can have access to a bonus stage. Beat all 6 of these stages and you get these shiny little suckers. And the good ending. They bring back the bonus stages in Sonic 2, but like the rest of the game, they've revamped everything when compared to the first. You now have 7 emeralds to collect instead of 6, and instead of collecting the 50 rings and accessing the special stage at the end of the act, you now get multiple shots at the gems at the checkpoints. If you have enough rings, a little halo of sparkles will appear above you and you can hop into it and you'll be greeted with the iconic half-pipe runway bonus stage. Completely different from the dreamlike pinball stuff from Sonic 1. So, there are some serious pros and cons to all of this, and I'll try to break it down as best as possible. See, these star posts now serve 2 purposes, and in turn this becomes a double-edged sword. What do I mean? Well, a problem comes from the placement of the star posts on the map. Every now and then they'll set them up like a normal checkpoint, like midway through a level or right before a boss fight, which is fine for a checkpoint. And sometimes they put them on these speedways so you can zip right through them, which is fine for a checkpoint. But because there are times that the game just zips you right through them, them, that means you have no chance of getting into a special stage. And because these are also entrances for the special stage, these star posts will show up in weird spots you have to go completely out of your way to get to. There are levels I went through without ever seeing a single star post, which isn't great if you die and have to start at the beginning of the level again. But there are other checkpoints that are set up just a few seconds after the start of a level, or set on a platform right above the other. Now, if you're emerald hunting, that's perfectly fine, but as checkpoints, that makes zero sense. On the flip side, if you encounter a star post further into the level before touching any previous star posts, any of the previous ones you missed will automatically have been activated. And that's great as a checkpoint, because that means the game will put you in the furthest point in the level if you ever die. But as a special stage entrance, you just missed out on all of those chances to get a Chaos Emerald, making it completely pointless to backtrack. Not that you can most of the time anyway, these levels are so focused on speedways, you'll often find it impossible to go back. And even if you get into a special stage, good luck grabbing all 7 emeralds. First couple bonus stages are easy enough, but after that you're gonna have to rely a lot on memorization to get through these frustrating stages. I know this game technically gives you way more chances to get the emerald than the first game, but honestly, the first game is nowhere near as luck-based as these are. And Sonic 2's bonus stages are and good luck keeping hold of anything in these levels with that little shit heel right in your blue pin cushion. But more on him in a minute. The half-pipe special stages in this game are by far the most frustrating of the classic series, but I feel that they were done this way for very specific reasons. It's a little sloppy and has room for improvement, sure, but I think I can see where the developers were going for here. First, well, the design was just cool. I know that doesn't excuse the frustration, and just because a game is old doesn't mean it can't be critiqued, but I feel it's important to understand how these games were designed back then, and appreciate when developers were trying crazy new tricks in their games. Completely changing the perspective and giving the sense of running through a 3D environment was really cool, especially since the Genesis couldn't do stuff like that silly rotating nonsense of the Super Nintendo's Mode 7. Classic Sonic games always pushed the Genesis in ways that no other games could, and these stages are just another example of that. And the bonus stages do a decent job of ramping up the difficulty. And since these bonus stages are so focused on quick reactions and memorization, it will never skip ahead to another special stage if you fail the one you're on. So if you jump into a star post and fail, the next star post you jump into will be the exact same stage. You only progress to the next bonus stage if you get the emerald in the current one. That's incredibly helpful if you're trying to memorize these things one at a time. And these stages are also hard for a very good reason. Unlike the first game, which didn't give you much of anything once you got all the emeralds, this game gives you Super Sonic. Which, yeah, I know, blatant ripoff, but whatever. Super Sonic looks super neato. Oh, and he also completely breaks the game. Yeah, this dude wrecks everything. He's invulnerable and even faster than before. The only things that will kill him is drowning in water, being crushed, or falling into a bottomless pit. And yes, it does drain rings and you could potentially run out, but whatever. This was the ultimate prize of the game, and back then it was one hell of a treat. See, if you're new to this game and you could just grab all 7 emeralds with relative ease, then this is your entire game. You have no challenge left until the final battle, and you're not going to be ready for it when you've been breezing through everything else with no problem whatsoever. But if you've mastered this game and you know the layout of these stages like the back of your hand, you could have Super Sonic as early as the second zone. That's insane. This was clearly made to challenge determined players and reward them with a god mode to go nuts in levels they're probably very familiar with at this point. So no, the special stages aren't perfect, but I feel they're more than justified. Besides, you could do what I did as a kid and just not care. The game plays perfectly fine on its own without ever bothering with the emeralds. If you've never played the game before, I recommend just running through without even bothering with the special stages. Game's still a lot of fun, and you can get through it without being needlessly frustrated. Once you're ready for more of a challenge, give it a shot. But once you do, be sure to go into the options menu and select Sonic only, because the default choice of the 2 characters is just going to make things needlessly harder. So yeah, we might as well talk about this little bastard. Miles Prower. Miles Prower. Yes, I see the pun, fine. But this naming convention makes no sense to me. Sonic the Hedgehog. Knuckles the Echidna. Shadow the Hedgehog. Rouge the Boot. Bat. Rouge the Bat. Miles the Prower. No, that makes no sense. That makes no sense at all. Miles Tails Prower? Tails, that's just his nickname. No, I'm serious. Look it up. That's just his nickname. Why is that just his nickname? Why do they even bother with the why? Sonic isn't a nickname, he's just fast. And it's not just an appendage thing either. Knuckles is just Knuckles. No stupid puns. Here's my exaggerated feature. It's my name. My species is my title. Done. Why not just Tails the Fox? He makes no sense to me. Never did when I was little either. I mean, he does, but it's just too much. Okay, look. I had grown accustomed to Sonic Team taking what I would call an animal and then turning it into something completely unrecognizable. I was really young when I first came across Sonic. As a young boy in Iowa, Iowa, I had not, up until that point, ever even heard of a hedgehog. I knew what a hedge was. I sure as hell knew what hogs were. So you can understand my confusion when I first discovered the name of this radically wonderful cartoon character. What is this crazy blue guy with the wacky shark fins on his head? Sonic. What a cool name. Sonic the Hedgehog. Look how proud that title is. It's leaping out at you. Sonic the Hedgehog. What the hell is a hedgehog? Oh, this? The baby porcupine? That's a hedgehog? Okay, well the name on the real animal alone makes no sense, let alone this smirking son of a bitch. How do you look at that and then get this? It's crazy. It's outlandish. And I loved it. But then you get to the second game, and this brand new character, and it's a fox. I mean, that's very clearly a fox. That's one basic ass fox right there. This is what every other cartoon fox ever created looks like. This is such a weird contrast to the crazy design of Sonic. Remember how I spent like 10 minutes in the last video talking about how rad his design was? I've got nothing here. There's nothing interesting about the design of Tails. He even has two separate eyes. That's disgusting. Why is he even called Tails? What the hell's happening? How is he doing that? Oh, that's okay. He's got two tails, and he can use them as a propeller. Well, that's just dumb as hell. Okay. Bashing aside, the introduction to Miles the Prowler was a big selling point for the second game. He didn't really do anything, just kind of followed you around, and could be kind of helpful. You could damage enemies and collect rings, but never take away from your ring count if you ever got hit. Unless, of course, you're in a special stage where he can take damage and can take away from your total rings. Oh, and they require you to get even more than if you were just playing Sonic by yourself, because he's just so helpful. So what the hell is the point of Tails? Well, as the oldest brother in my household, that answer is easy. This is little brother mode. This is little sister mode. This is significant other mode. This is parent mode. Mario had his Luigi. Ever since the very first Mario game, you could play the green version of the famous plumber. Granted, you couldn't play him at the same time. You had to take turns with every level, or when one of you died or whatever, I can't really remember. The point is, it involves somebody else into the mix. Sonic couldn't pull any of this off, at least not in any traditional sense. If you took turns like Mario, well, that slowed the pace down of a very speedy game. They wanted Sonic to be faster than ever. They couldn't make players wait as the other took their turn to finish an act. And if they had two players on the screen at the exact same time with the exact same camera priority, well, obviously you'd slow the game down even further the moment you forced the camera to battle between the two of you. No, the only way to make this work was to either do a split screen race, or just have some whatever character that never took attention away from the Sonic player, or cost Sonic any rings or deaths. So Sega went with both of those options. Have a younger sibling who wants to play too? Just hand them the second controller. They can go hog wild without ever taking away from your experience. Now, this sucks for any competent player, but that's what the split screen mode is for. So no, Tails isn't my favorite character, but I certainly respect the little guy. Even if you didn't have anybody else to play with and you were just a fan of the fox, you could play him by himself. I mean, you couldn't make him fly, but whatever, they'd fix that in later games, which we're gonna get to soon, because this is basically all I have to say about Sonic 2. This was kind of a rambling mess that got off topic of the game itself, but like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of bad to get into here. This is still a favorite of many Sonic fans out there, and for good reason. There's a wide variety of levels, all with their own unique styles, layouts, and challenges. This game feels much more confident in its design, which complements the Hedgehog's attitude wonderfully. It celebrates his speed, and instead of removing the experimental designs from the first game, they refined them to better suit the speed of the Hedgehog. And look, I don't care if you like Super Mario World more than Sonic 2, or Mega Man, or any of that nonsense. This game is still great, but you probably knew that before you got into this video. Are there problems? Yes. Sonic 2 may be a more refined Sonic experience, but I don't think it's quite as refined when compared to the likes of Mario World. But that's how gamers have always seen it, right? Sonic has never been as polished as Mario, but he's never been as boring either. That's part of the charm. His games are chaotic and a little rough around the edges, but even today there's still plenty of fun. If you haven't played this game in a while, or this is your first time picking it up, I will always recommend experiencing it with a controller, but if you don't have one handy, the mobile port is surprisingly fantastic. I still prefer buttons, but really the mobile versions are the best way to play these games if you only have a touchscreen to work with. They make some massive improvements to the original and added some cool extras. Even the half-pipe stages are completely redone and a little more tolerable. And weirdly enough, Sonic translates a lot better to touchscreens than most other traditional platformers thanks to the super simple controls and forgiving ring death health system. It takes a special kind of developer to take a game that was never intended to be played on the phone, and in many ways somehow improve the experience. But we'll be talking more about those guys in the future. For now, this is all I got for Sonic 2. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. But if you've been following along with this coverage of classic Sonic titles, so far we've had no real trouble finding the good in, well, great games. And we still have a little ways to go before For now, let's focus on what may be the first actual divisive game in the mainline Sonic series, Sonic CD. Released on the Sega CD, an add-on for the Sega Genesis that really deserves its own episode, Sonic CD is often the first title you'll hear when asking for recommendations for this weird quasi-system. But if that's the case, what makes it so divisive? Well, a few things, but in this debate it's mostly among Sonic fans, and really it's generally over where this game stands in rankings when compared to other classic Sonic titles. As it is by itself, it's a really good game, so we'll be tackling this with the bias of a Sonic fan, a real challenge for me, let me tell you. So if you're on the outside looking in, I'll do my best to give you an understanding of why fans debate this title even today. I recommend checking out my videos covering Sonic 1 and 2 if you haven't yet, because I'm going to be referencing those games a lot this time around. The divisive nature of this game really reinforces the theme of duality found within the game and the real-world production of the title. Right at the beginning of this game, way back even in the conception stage, this game was set on a divergent path. It's like a parallel universe Sonic 2. That's because the developers behind the original Sonic game were split in two, then formed their own separate groups and went on to develop two Sonic sequels at the same time. Yuji Naka and Sega Technical Institute would work on Sonic 2 in America, while Naoto Oishima got his own team and went to work on CD in Japan. This also, strangely enough, kind of parallels the dual sequel development of Sonic's rival, Mario. And that duality continues within the game itself. Two versions of the future, two different endings, two different soundtracks, even two different Sonics. But we'll get into all that later as we pick apart this game. Anyway, we now have two different sequels to Sonic the Hedgehog, a game with very simple mechanics and a strong first outing, but one that could be improved upon. The two sequels would expand the original game and tackle its issues in wildly different ways. Like I said in my first video, a common gripe about Sonic 1 was that Green Hill was the best level of the game. A tropical jungle gym where the player could get used to Sonic's physics and momentum on a multi-layered map full of places to explore. The problem being that once that opening zone was completed, you were left with a more traditional linear platforming experience, or levels that never fully utilized Sonic's abilities. Sonic 2 solved this by practically remaking the first game. It streamlined a lot of its levels to keep the player moving as quickly as possible, removing a lot of the exploration and vertical nature of Green Hill Zone, and reworking a lot of the mechanics and themes that were introduced through the first game, giving them simplified but distinctive themes and layouts. This makes Sonic 2 much more accessible, and in turn, it feels like it's meant to replace the original game. You could play Sonic 2 without ever touching the first game and be perfectly fine. Sonic CD, on the other hand, feels like it went the complete opposite way in terms of design. And because of this, in some ways, it feels more like a true sequel than Sonic 2 does. If I had to sum it up in one statement, Sonic CD is made for Sonic gamers. Meaning you're probably going to have a much better time with this if you've had prior experience with the Hedgehog. Not for any narrative reasons. Classic Sonic has always been light on story. This one has Sonic trying to rescue a brand new character in a brand new location. Sonic's literally on a different planet in this game, so no real continuity to worry about. No, this game feels like if you were a fan of the first Sonic game and wanted more of that game, well, CD would be right up your alley. Sonic CD was released on the Sega CD after all, an add-on to the Sega Genesis. It wasn't likely that your very first experience with the Hedgehog would be with this title when Sonic 1 and 2 were already available on the base system. You'd be picking up this monstrosity to get even more Sonic, and that's exactly what this game is. A whole lot more Sonic. Or Sonic 1, anyway. Sonic CD doesn't mean to refine, but just add more of everything. It brought the design philosophy of Green Hill and applied it to every single level of this game, and then it just got excessive with it. And this is one of the major reasons why this game is so divisive to so many Sonic fans. All the visual details that made Green Hill pop are now everywhere through the entire game, but it also makes the game feel a little bit dated. The design is cluttered, chaotic, and incredibly 90s. Every level looks like it'd be right at home on the cover of a Trapper Keeper. Like so many things from the early 90s, a lot of these designs are throwing too many ideas together. Barely cohesive, messy experiments with no focal point for your eye to follow. The colors are vibrant, the backgrounds are incredibly detailed, but it's all over-designed and messy. And I feel like this is in direct contrast with Sonic's design. I went into this in great detail in my first Sonic video, so I'll try to keep it short, but a point I made about the characters looked at, even if there were obvious 90s ideas at play, they kept it simple enough to make it iconic and timeless. These levels, on the other hand, are so loud that they could glitch out and you probably wouldn't even notice a difference. And it's not just in the aesthetics that feel over-designed, but the level layouts as well. I've said it plenty, Green Hill in Sonic 1 is a jungle gym. It's less about running to the end really quickly, at first at least, and more about using your speed to play around and explore the many gimmicks. But once you learned how Sonic played and how this world works, then you could very easily zip through the zone in a matter of seconds. The rest of Sonic 1 feels underdeveloped in comparison to the first zone, and Sonic CD solves this by turning every level into Green Hill Zone. Not in theme, at least not after Palm Tree Panic, but just in the sense that they are jam-packed with things to do. There is a massive emphasis on exploration through this entire game. All these levels feel like two-dimensional mountains. For a game that requires you to move horizontally to complete levels, it's incredibly vertical in design, and they become full-on labyrinths in later stages. Unlike Sonic 2, this game wants you to backtrack. It wants you to eat up as much of the allotted 10 minutes as possible. And that's where it kind of loses the whole point of Green Hill. Unless you're very committed to speedrunning this thing and dedicate some time and talent, you're going to find it somewhat difficult to zip through any of CD's levels. But it's not without purpose. Exploration is now an important part of the new gameplay gimmick: time travel. There are actually 4 versions of every zone built into this game: past, present, good future, and bad future. To get the good future, you are required to do some exploring. They didn't put in all this effort just so you could rush your spiny butt through this entire game without appreciating all of their hard work. Actually, finding a nice clear space to speed up is a challenge within itself, as speed is required to move you through time. Once you hit a past or future signpost, you need speed to activate the mechanic. Once you hit the necessary velocity, bright sparks will flash behind Sonic, and it's important to keep him going while the sparks are going off. As you'll notice, the little time icon will begin to flicker. If you come to a stop during this crucial period, the sign will vanish, and with it, your portal into the past or future, meaning you've got to do some more exploring to find another sign, find another clear path to stay at top speed, and then get into the past so you can make out with Sonic's mom. Should I keep referencing Back to the Future? I mean, I got this in Doctor Who. That's the only time travel references I know to make here. You're actually running through time to find robot generators. You take this sucker out in the past, and it destroys all remaining robots and makes a good future for that act, which are renamed zones in this game, even though that term had already been established, so I don't really know why they changed it. It's another needless complication. Speaking of weird changes, there is a weird little difference they made with the robots in this game. Normally in a Sonic game, you destroy these suckers and a little animal pops out. In this game, they swapped out the little animals with flowers. Not entirely important, but it's there. I don't know if it's just because these levels are larger in this game than the others, but it does feel like there are less enemies in this game compared to other classic Sonic games. And the flowers are actually an interesting way to keep track of how many baddies there are in each level. Since flowers can't scamper away like the animals do in the other games, these almost act like a trail of breadcrumbs to let you know where you've already explored, which can be really helpful when you're trying to track down a generator. And once you do destroy a generator, it destroys all the other robots in the level, and now the landscape will be sprinkled with fresh vegetation. But if you do miss your little animals, you can also track down a secondary machine which projects a hologram that, oh my god. We'll get more in depth with this woodland critter curb stomper a little later, but for now, all you need to know is you have to wreck these holograms like you would a generator, and you'll now have animals dancing around through the land. It doesn't really do anything, but if you want to feel like a Disney princess, you certainly have this option. While I don't mind this weird little change, I do kind of mind that they renamed the acts into zones. I know this point is incredibly nitpicky, but acts and zones were another little way that Sonic Team used to stand out from other platformers of the day. Instead of levels, these were zones, and that kind of put a weird ownership on this design. I know this is a small detail, but it feels like a needless complication. In fact, this game feels like it's full of needless complications, as you'll also see in Sonic's new moves. They have a spin dash like Sonic 2, but for whatever reason, it doesn't share that excellent revving animation. It's just a standard ball, and it's incredibly gimped to Sonic 2's version. You only get one set speed, you can't rev it up to make it go faster, and it's never as fast as Sonic 2's. They try to make up for this by adding the super peel out, which instead of pressing down an A, you now press up an A. And it's basically the same as a spin dash, you're just not in ball form. Now the animation looks awesome, and it does give you more speed than the spin dash, but it also lacks the protection provided by the spin dash. You can barrel through robots while you're rolled up, but the peel out leaves you vulnerable to take damage at high speeds. Now again, it's important to note that this wasn't made after Sonic 2. It was made at the same time and across the world during a time when the internet wasn't exactly a huge thing. Who knows how many notes were shared between the two separate development teams? And maybe they were trying to do some risk-reward thing by having players choose between more speed or more defense. I don't really know. But the complexity doesn't stop there. A lot of the fans feel the new gimmick also makes progress somewhat tedious. The time traveling has led to some gripes I see fairly often among Sonic fans. Some just feel it's far too different from traditional Sonic gameplay, and since levels are designed around the mechanic, it leads to a less enjoyable experience if you're trying to play this like a normal Sonic game. That's just a complaint to these particular critics. There are other fans who love this mechanic, but even among these fans I see
some consistent complaints pop up from time to time, namely with the future versions of each zone. Are you still with me? Alright, well hang on, it's about to get even more confusing, so try to keep up. Each level starts you off in the present, and you're required to go into the past if you want to destroy a robot generator to ensure the level has a good future. So you have reason to be in the past and present, but the game provides no real purpose to explore the future version of each level, because there's nothing in that particular time zone for you to track down. If anything, it acts as something of a punishment if you roll through the wrong sign and you don't slow down fast enough before the time travel kicks in, and sends your TARDIS colored hedgehog into the future, adding yet another layer of finding a sign, finding a space to pick up speed, going back in time, where you get to the present, where you have to find a sign, find some space to pick up speed, go back in time all over again, all while eating up precious time you could be using to hunt down a generator. I'm pretty okay with this setup. If you don't take care and watch your speed while you have a future sign, the game launches you forward in time and shows you what will happen to this world if you don't track down that generator. It's always dark and dreary. These bad futures aren't designed to be pleasant. Unlike Sonic 1 and 2, it shows there are actual repercussions to this world if Sonic doesn't do any of the secondary objectives. And really, as much time as you spend hunting down these generators, I feel like adding another objective in the future would just be tedious. I'm just fine not having any extra crap to do in the future. I feel like these particular complaints probably come from fans who have played this game to death, know where everything is already, and would just like something else to do. For me, even though I've beaten Sonic City more than a handful of times over the years, I still have a hard time keeping track of every single robot generator. By the time I've found everything, I'm more than ready to be done with that level. Like Sonic 1, these zones can overstay their welcome. I really don't mind not having even more to do in the future versions of each stage, and I feel the developers did a fairly decent job giving the future versions some meaning in this setup, not only acting as a punishment and therefore adding a layer of challenge, but also how it's implemented into the third act of every zone. And yes, I'm still going to call them zones and acts, deal with it. The third act is interesting for a couple of reasons. Like I said up front, the developers of Sonic CD and Sonic 2 tackled issues with the first game in very different ways, one of which was the time you would spend in each zone. Sonic 1 had 3 acts, and they would overstay their welcome sometimes. Giving you 3 different levels with the same theme and layouts can get a bit tedious. Sonic 2 sorted this out by simply chopping out that third act, leaving only 2 acts for each zone. Sonic CD would tackle this issue in an entirely different fashion. Like Sonic 1, each zone is split up into 3 acts, but unlike the first game, where the third act is a whole other level on its own, in CD, it's basically a boss room. You have very little platforming and almost no challenge to cope with before your showdown with Robotnik. I actually love this. It gives a sense of drama to the fight. Sonic 2's boss fights were just at the end of the second act, and it felt like you just accidentally ran into this doofus while he's out running errands. Sonic CD's third acts were usually built around the battle, and the little bit of land leading up to the fight just builds up tension. Giving the third act the singular purpose of serving the boss battle was a fantastic solution to the tedium, but they also serve a secondary purpose. The third act of each zone always takes place in the future version of that zone, and because of this, the environments act as something of a scorecard. If you zip through the level without bothering with any of the secondary objectives, you'd get a bleak, bad future. This imposing atmosphere would add to the tension of the upcoming battle, and even if you wreck Robotnik's current ride, it never really feels like you truly won. The damage was already done. Stopping Robotnik now wouldn't change what he's already done. But if you manage to bust both generators in the 2 previous acts, the future would be this bright, cheerful fusion of nature and technology. Animals would be dancing around, almost as if they're cheering you on. Even if Robotnik's here, they ain't leaving. If they're not scared, why should you be? He's just one last piece of trash to clean up before you carry on to the next area. Of course, if you wanted a more traditional Sonic experience, and you wanted a good ending without dealing with all this time travel nonsense, you could still play this game exactly like Sonic 1, and just collect 50 rings, jump into a giant warp ring at the end of the act, and play through bonus stages to collect Chaos Time Stones. More pointless renaming of crap. Like most Sonic games, the bonus stage is radically different from the others. In CD's case, they took advantage of the tricks that the Genesis could never do, and basically ripped off Super Nintendo's Mode 7. The objective here is to break all the UFOs within a time limit, be mindful of speed boosters and fans, and win the day. I like these stages, but I also like old clunky attempts at 3D environments in games. The biggest problem I had was the depth perception in the original version of the game. Since the UFOs and Sonic are 2-dimensional sprites on a 3D plane, it can be a little tricky to land a hit, but maybe that was just me. I still enjoy them all the same. And that's about it when it comes to gameplay, but there is one last major point of contention between fans when it comes to this game: the music. Yes, even in the soundtrack, we find yet another needless complication. For whatever reason, Sonic CD's American release got its own soundtrack, leaving the original one for Japanese and European audiences. The only real point of contention fans have is, which one sounds better. Oh yeah, and how the music of the past versions of each stage remains completely unchanged in the American version, so I guess it's kinda jarring and some people don't like that. There's not much else to say there, it just comes down to personal taste. I think generally most Sonic fans lean in favor of the Japanese soundtrack, but I don't know, I think they're both pretty good. Actually, let's hang on this point for just a minute. I'm kinda glad this game came out with two unique sets of music. It shows how important a soundtrack can be for a video game. Playing with one version sets a completely different tone from the other. The Japanese original has a lot more rhythm, melodies infused with 90s record scratches and voice samples, and it makes you want to move, as any good Sonic soundtrack should. The American soundtrack, on the other hand, does its best to match the music with its surroundings. It really downplays a lot of the energy to give you some more ambiance. It's incredible how the music changes how a level can feel. I'll show you what I mean, take a listen. This is the Japanese version of Collision Chaos. Makes you feel like you're walking into a 90s dance club. But then you try the American version, and it's this tense, dreary piece, and suddenly everything feels more imposing, all because of the music. And if you're curious as to which one I prefer, well, I grew up with the American version, so I have a bit of a bias towards that soundtrack. Like the levels themselves, the Japanese music is soaking in 90s design, which you could argue makes it a better match. But while it is full of heart-pounding energy, I sometimes find it to be a bit much, especially during the slog of that last level. I'm trying to navigate a maze of scrap metal, just calm down. I generally prefer the American tracks because I spend a lot of time in these levels just exploring. The music tends to be less distracting and doesn't give me a sense of urgency when I'm trying to track down generators, but it really comes down to what I'm in the mood for at the time, and sometimes my preferences just change from level to level. That said, some of the American tracks have just stuck with me so hard as a child and will always blow their Japanese counterparts right out of the water. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy some Japanese stuff, and honestly I much prefer the Japanese main theme over America's Sonic Boom, even if it has a ridiculous name. Toot Toot Sonic Warrior. That's the name. That's what it's called. I have no jokes. What more could I add? Look at that stupid mess of words. Someone was paid to sing those words. Wasn't it worth listening to all this talk about music just so we could get to this point? Toot Toot Sonic Warrior. Toot Toot indeed. But yeah, like I said, outside of that track, some American versions of the music are simply better, for me at any rate. The special stage music in the Japanese edition is just a mess of noise. I prefer the otherworldly nature of the American one. And I'm sorry, the boss fight music for the American version is just better. It's mechanical, creepy, and imposing. And in Japan, it's everything wrong with 90s music all in one track. And while I have grown to appreciate the Japanese version of the Bad Future of Stardust Speedway, for me, there is simply no topping the desperate, dark melody of the American version when it comes time to run the iconic race against Metal Sonic. might as well talk about this guy. This is Metal Sonic, or Mecha Sonic as I knew him back in the day thanks to a certain comic book, or if you are a UK fan, Metallics. Look, whatever you want to call this thing, it's basically a robotic doppelganger of Sonic, and a new antagonist for this series. Now, robot doubles and evil twins are nothing new in fiction, and Sonic already had more than a couple robo-clones by this point. But unlike those generic piles of scrap, Kazuyuki Hoshino, a character designer who worked on the game, would create something that would not only rival Sonic in speed, but also in style. Like I've said previously in my other Sonic video and even in this one, I feel Sonic's design was a brilliant mix of contemporary coolness and timeless charm. Hoshino's Metal Sonic seemed to take on the same design philosophy. Instead of being a pile of metal plates formed together in the shape of Sonic, Metal Sonic would take the simple, standout features of Sonic's design and form something with its own identity. It's blue, but now with a chrome finish. Really, the entire color scheme is just as simple as Sonic's. Just replace the white and the skin pigmentation with silver and hints of yellow. Metal even has his own Cyclops eye, but it inverts the white and adds sinister glowing red pupils. Instead of Sonic's bare belly, Metal has an empty hole for air intake for that jet engine that he uses as his source of speed. He has skinny arms and legs with exaggerated hands and feet like Sonic, but instead of being all fun and noodly, Metal has rigid joints of thin, cold metal, almost giving it a skeletal look. Even Sonic's iconic spikes are repurposed into Metal's own iconic crescent-shaped quills. And while he does have speed, he doesn't run. Thanks to that aforementioned jet engine, he eerily hovers or blasts through the air. All this brings together something that looks like Sonic, but is very clearly not Sonic. It's not just a robot, it's something supernatural, something sinister. It looks like a skeletal ghost of Sonic. It keeps that simple but easily identifiable look of the hedgehog, but instead of attitude, we get something that looks cold and dangerous. He doesn't have an iconic smirk, not even an evil grin like this stupid schmuck right here. It's an emotionless killing machine. Who knew a robotic hedgehog could look so intimidating? But Metal isn't memorable in design alone. The role he plays in this game cemented him as one of the greatest Sonic villains of all time for many of us fans back in the day. Outside of the holograms and the quick cutscene in the second stage where he nabs Amy, who we'll get to in a moment, you really don't see this guy for most of your adventure. Honestly, the only actual interaction with him takes place on the second to last level and is over in just a couple of minutes. But man, what a couple of minutes they are. These brief glimpses at this cool and creepy robot just builds the anticipation for the inevitable showdown. Metal Sonic's on the cover of the game, regardless of the region you played it in. This guy was clearly meant to be a big deal. No way all of this buildup was for another run-of-the-mill boss fight where you hop on something a few times till it blows up. The boss fights in Sonic CD, like everything else in this game, are unlike any other battles in the classic Sonic series, for the most part anyway. That clever treadmill challenge, Collision Chaos's pinball battle that put Sonic 2's Casino Night boss to shame, and of course, the infamous showdown with Metal Sonic. Instead of having an actual fight with Metal Sonic, you raced him through a hazardous final act of Stardust Speedway. You have to navigate this level while avoiding spikes, as well as Metal Sonic's electric shield and speed boost. A simple concept that fits perfectly with the entire philosophy of the franchise. Now, I've got to be honest with you guys, I'm not one of these fans that considers CD the best of the series. I don't even think it's in my top 5. That said, the race against Metal Sonic is hands down my favorite boss encounter for this entire series. Yes, even compared to the grandiose final battles in other titles, future boss races, or even rematches with Metal Sonic. To me, nothing tops this original encounter. I just find it kind of ironic that Sonic 2 built the entire game around emphasizing Sonic's speed, but gave you a static, run-of-the-mill battle with a giant, clunky robot double. But here in Sonic CD, the game that slows down Sonic more than any other classic Sonic games, and it gives you a robot double that actually challenges Sonic's speed. And as common as these robo-clones tend to be in the series, it's a shame we really only see this race concept used here. It's also a shame that the next and final boss encounter is so pathetic in comparison. The boss fights in this game are all over the place, bringing in some of the weakest and some of the best of the classic series all within the same game. Everything feels like it's building up to the showdown with Metal Sonic, and everything after that is just cleanup. All this attention to Metal Sonic seems to have left little else for the other new character, Amy Rose. Just as Sega seemed to take a great deal of inspiration from Mickey Mouse when designing Sonic, they also seem to take a great deal from Minnie Mouse when designing Amy, namely by taking the same character design but slapping on a dress. Nothing really stands out about this character. I mean, they don't even get her name right in the American manual, and she's really only here for you to save her. I'm not really sure why she's here at all. I thought the whole saving the planet from the bad future while driving home an environmental message was good enough on its own. A message that's pervasive in all the classic games, but in other titles, the zones start off in a more colorful, inviting regions of nature, but eventually lead you to more mechanical environments as the game progresses, upping the challenge while making things feel more hostile as life and the natural world faded from the zones. In Sonic CD, they still kind of carry that subtle storytelling, but it's not exactly consistent from zone to zone, especially with that messy design I mentioned earlier. But they still use the environmental message all the same. They just built it into the time travel mechanic, giving the player a much more active role in saving the natural environment. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, Amy, I completely forgot. Honestly, I even forgot she was even kidnapped until you save her at the end of the race with Metal. Oh well, at least they flesh her out a little bit more in future games, so we'll get back to her when the time comes. Even though I spent a great deal more time talking about Metal Sonic, that's really all I got for Amy. Sonic CD seems to be full of these highs and lows, as you might have noticed with my flip-flopping through this entire episode. And considering how long we've spent talking about this game, without ever really breaking down levels like I've done with the past 2 Sonic episodes, yeah, you can see how this title is a bit divisive. Sonic CD is weird. It's unique. It's full of that experimental charm that's pervasive through this entire franchise. You can see the developers had fun in the weird little Easter egg pictures. Or they're working some things out. I'd even mention these awesome cutscenes from Toei, which really stood out back in the day. From the cutscenes, the music, the level designs, the time traveling, the boss fights, those weird little Easter eggs, Sonic CD was unlike any other classic Sonic game. And really, still is unlike any Sonic game, period. Even Sonic 4 Episode 2, which they touted as the direct sequel, plays nothing like CD. Yeah, you do get to fight Metal a couple more times, but it's not like they revisited the time travel mechanic or anything. But we'll deal with that game in its own episode. I know I bounced around a lot in this episode, and I try to sprinkle in my own personal opinion as much as possible. Still, it might be hard to read how I actually feel about this game. So to wrap things up, I'll just tell you that I don't think this game is perfect, or even the best of the classic series. But despite the messy aesthetic and sometimes confusing level layout, I don't think this is a game to skip. It shows that even the classic Sonic formula, which is just run to the end of the level alive, maybe collect some emeralds if you feel like it, even this simple design can be used in wonderfully unique ways. It might not be my favorite, but I love that it exists. I love that I have a classic Sonic game that asks me to tackle these mechanics in wildly different ways. Go in with an open mind, a desire to explore, and a little bit of patience, and it's going to be a grand old time. And with that, we come to the end of another episode. I've been Nick, and I'm sorry for wasting your time. Toot toot, Sonic Warriors. Toot toot. Don't call it a comeback. I mean, you could probably call it a sobering up after a 2-decade-long bender, but don't call it a comeback. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. So, as you can imagine, I am a massive Sonic fan. Like millions of others, the first time I saw the Blueberry Beast from the East speed across the checkered loops of Green Hill Zone, I wanted to run right alongside gaming's favorite pincushion. And I haven't looked back since. Sonic came out in the world already dominated by Mario and Mega Man, yet he still sped his way to the top of the platforming world in my eyes, building off the spiny backs of stellar entries that continue to get better and better with each release, culminating in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, my favorite game of all time. I had stayed with Sonic on this journey for this long, and he had never let me down. So of course I was excited for the Sega Saturn. That would be my go-to system when it was time to part ways with the 16-bit generation. 3D gaming was all the rage at the time. Sega's rival, Nintendo, and the new contender, the Sony PlayStation, were all about it. The Saturn could produce 3D games, but even back then we were well aware it would not be able to pack the same punch as its rivals. And that was totally fine for me. Look, whatever anyone wants to tell you these days, we were well aware that 3D games looked like crap back then. This isn't a realization with age. When I saw what the PlayStation was and what it could produce, I was not about it. But the Saturn apparently would focus on what already worked. 2D game. I had grown up loving that and wanted more of that. Great, sign me up. I can't wait to see what Sonic has to offer. 23 years. 23 years! That's how long we've had to wait for Sonic to truly return to form. Not saying there hasn't been some fantastic stuff in the meantime, don't get me wrong, but for whatever reason, Sega could never recapture the magic that was the Genesis Sonic games. They tried many times, with some attempts more successful than others, but it seems they had to wait for the fans to grow up to find what this series has been lacking for so long. And that's where Sonic Mania comes in. And really, I can't think of a more fitting title to describe the fervor surrounding the release of this game. Sonic Mania is great, and that's probably no surprise to you. Everyone else is exclaiming the same, and they have far bigger audiences than I do. GameSpot's reviewer declared this the greatest Sonic game ever made. Jim Sterling, famous among Sonic fans for not enjoying the beloved Sonic colors, absolutely adores this game. Even IG, Sonic was never good N, has given this game an 8.7, a great score. For 2 decades, Sonic has been the butt of every joke in gaming culture. But it's as if overnight, all the Hedgehog haters just disappeared. They used to laugh and call him names, never let him play any Hedgehog games, but the bright light of Mania has shone through all the crap to remind everyone that Sonic was not only good, but for a brief moment, he was king. So yes, Mania certainly has no place on a show called The Game Apologist. But like I said on every other episode that covers a good Sonic game, we have to cover all of it to understand where everything goes wrong. And while I would have liked this episode to come out after a couple of other episodes, my personal life has been terrible. Oh my, get out of and priorities fell apart. Not trying to overshare here, but I say this for a couple of reasons. One, just to anybody who's watching these videos as they come out, I wanted to release the Mania episode in a timely fashion while we're all still talking about it. And two, the history with the hog and what's going on with me at the current moment is to let you guys know that while this is kind of a review, understand that this comes with an extreme bias. Sonic Mania is the reason I bought a Sega Saturn. Sonic Mania is the reason I've remained a fan that could wait for 23 years for a game like this. A game I've dreamt about. A game I never thought could happen. A game that's coming out at a time in my life where I desperately need a distraction. I need this game to be good. I don't normally cover brand new games, especially with this show, because I feel that people need to calm down from the initial impressions before passing final judgment. And fans like myself have been waiting for this game for a very long time, so it can be easy to interpret my opinions as fanboy hype or nostalgic curmudgeonry when I compare it to previous games. I want you guys to understand all this while going into the rest of the video. Now look, if you just want a review that's going to give you the general consensus of what everyone else wants to hear, well, you've got IGN for that. But if you want to know the thoughts of someone who has actually loved these games their whole life, someone who knows the Sonic series inside and out, someone who can give you some insightful views and some really in-depth analysis, well, I'm sure Johnny has a video out there somewhere, but before you click on that, I'm more than happy to provide. So quick overview, what is Sonic Mania? Well, it's kind of like a soft reboot, the Jurassic World or Episode 7 of the Sonic series. It's trying out some new things, but basically just reworking what's been lying dormant for years in a new package just to prove that they could take up the reins of this franchise. At its core, it's another fast-paced two-dimensional platformer where you run from left to right across loops, pits, and the like, while you collect life-saving rings, jump on robots, spin giant pictures of your face. It's a Sonic game. If you don't know how those work, well, you've got all the internet at your disposal. Go crazy. Or you can just watch my other Sonic videos if you want. Please do that. I need people, please. I need your attention so bad. But you probably don't need me to tell you how a Sonic game plays. And again, you don't need me to tell you that this particular one is fantastic. Everyone agrees. So much so that plenty of people are calling this the best Sonic game ever made. Even if you're not a Sonic fan, this is the game to play to fully understand why this hedgehog is so beloved. But is it? Well, this is the Game Apologist. We have to understand the bad before we get into the good. So what bad is there? Well, not much, but there are plenty of reviewers saying that this game has some small hiccups, like getting trapped in random spots of the level or the music randomly cutting out. Nothing a reset can't fix, and nothing that's going to ruin your overall experience, but I understand the annoyance. And I know this is weird, but the music cutting out is strangely nostalgic to me. That's an issue I would come across every now and then while playing my Sega Saturn. I doubt the glitch was intentional, but that was a strange way to dig up memories. Others point out that there are just flaws in general with classic Sonic gameplay, be it running into an enemy, having to give up control on occasion, the difficulty spike of later stages, you know, the normal noise. And yeah, I see what you mean. So for example, that stupid water shaft and chemical plant has killed the crap out of me multiple times. Not by drowning, never by drowning, but by simply hitting the speed booster and being launched to my death by those stupid freaking blocks. Then you couldn't just... You couldn't space these out a little bit better? And yes, sometimes you don't have anything to do but sit back and enjoy the loop-de-loops for a second, but this game does a spectacular job of balancing the platforming and breakneck speed better than, well, I think better than any other Sonic game. And as for the difficulty spikes, well, I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, that's how platformers work. They start off easier and become more challenging as the game progresses, and I thought this game did a wonderful job amping up the difficulty as it went on. And... let's see, what else? Oh, the new drop dash. Some people don't like that very much. I've heard some people say it's underutilized, and I've heard other people saying that it's gotten them killed many times. To the latter, I don't know how you're managing to kill yourselves, but you can always play with Tails if you're going to be a baby about it. And as for the underutilized, yeah, that's a good thing. You remember the last time they tried to force you to play with new movesets? It's distracting. The drop dash is clearly meant for speedrunners. It's a simple mechanic that lets you hit the ground with a spin dash, but you need to keep the jump button held down until Sonic makes contact with the earth. I've never accidentally induced a drop dash. I've always had to actively go for it. And really, when I tried to adapt into my moveset, it became very natural very quickly. I love it. Granted, I understand if you've accidentally done it before. I can see how it happens. But not to get too spoilery, if you beat the game, you can play other ways, or you can just use one of the other characters. Otherwise, that's about it when it comes to general complaints. So with that said, is it the best Sonic game ever made? Well, I don't really know how much of an authority GameSpot's reviewer is when it comes to Sonic. I mean, he seems to know his stuff and he's a paid professional, and I'm just some jerk on YouTube, so what do I know? But I feel like GameSpot's been a bit quick on the greatest of all time declarations this year, as you might have seen in my other video. Now, don't get me wrong, like I've said and will say 1,000 times in this video, I love this game. This is the game I've always dreamt about. This is the game I've always wanted. This is almost as perfect of a Sonic experience as I could have ever hoped for. But I don't think this is the best Sonic game ever made. Nor do I think this is the first game you should play if you're jumping into this series, because this game is not made for newcomers. Does it have some of the greatest level design in the series? Some of the greatest boss battles? And the most refined controls we've ever seen? Possibly. Can newcomers jump in and have a great time? Absolutely. But that said, this is a Sonic game made by Sonic fans for Sonic fans. This game is made with a level of love, attention, and passion we have never seen before with this series. And because of that, it's a little selfish. Green Hill is the playground it always has been, but it's full of so much more to do, and it comes with an intimidating mini-boss fight at the end of the first act. This mini-boss is harder than the actual first boss of the first game. And when you get to Mania's first real boss fight, it's the final boss from Sonic 2. It's repurposed, yes, and it's awesome for someone like me, but this is an insane amount of stuff to throw at a brand new Sonic player. And the game never lets up. All of the levels have a lot to do in them, and there are a lot of levels. And almost all of the bosses have an insane level of intricacy and last for a long time. Seriously, almost all of them would have been considered endgame battles for earlier Sonic games. And surprise, surprise, Metal Sonic is once again the best fight in this game. Again, all of this is awesome for someone like me. Someone who's grown up with these games and has been desperately wanting more, but more in the sense of more challenge for someone who's already mastered the mechanics of the games I've been playing for 25 years. But a newcomer? Again, I'm sure they're gonna have plenty of fun, but this is made for Sonic fans. And not just because this game is filled to the brim with clever nods and Easter eggs, but because this game puts those tried and true skills to the test. This mixes in a lot of old levels, sure, but it also mixes in a lot of unique gimmicks with each zone. And since these guys have been dreaming up ways to tweak said levels for over 20 years, they're expanded into so much more than they ever originally were meant to be, even going so far as to mix in elements from other older levels. I guarantee I had an easier time with some of these obstacles just because I've played them to death in other games. But for a newbie, this is a lot to learn. It's never overwhelming and it's never a mess. This game is brilliantly designed, but you'll probably do a lot better against the Sonic 2 chicken shooters or CD's annoying electric grates while exploring Sonic & Knuckles' flying battery zone just because you've played those games before and you know how to handle them. While I can pick up the simple story of Mania without any prior knowledge, there's still little things you might be confused about, namely with the Time Stone. To an outsider, how is that stupid gem any different from the ones you're collecting in the special stages? I have a gem? Why can't I invert colors and warp or whatever the hell that other thing does? I have Time Stones and Chaos Emeralds in the same game, man. I love it so much! So no, I don't think this is the game to show for first-time Sonic players. If they're gonna play anything, have them play Sonic 1. At the very least, the first level of Sonic 1, which is still far and away one of the greatest opening levels ever made in gaming history. After that, have them jump onto Sonic 2 or Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and if they like those games and want to try something a little bit different, Sonic CD. After all that, then I would play Mania. You'll not only be ready for the challenge, but you'll get all of these loving references, and it's technically a continuation of the classic game's storyline. So yes, with all of this said, I also obviously don't feel that this is the greatest Sonic game ever made. This is. And yes, I've had 23 years as opposed to a couple of days to form that particular opinion, but just hear me out. Brilliant boss fights and levels aside, Sonic 3 and Knuckles has an incredibly important element that Mania severely lacks: cohesion. Everything flows together brilliantly in Sonic 3. A consistent theme, art style, soundtrack, gameplay, and I'll gush more about that game in its own episode. But my point is, this cohesion guided the player through the loops, runways, and narrative while expertly ramping up the difficulty without ever becoming overwhelming. For the first time in the series, it made sense how Sonic got from zone to zone. The emeralds mattered to the overall narrative, and in turn, amped up their importance. And it all culminated in one of the only boss battles that made sense for Super Sonic, or if you're good enough, Hypersonic, an awesome secondary form we have never seen since this game. Mania, on the other hand, feels like a strange hodgepodge of levels. And I mean, that's well and fine because that's exactly what it is. But for someone like me, not the greatest of the series. Maybe the greatest hits of the series. Plenty of people call Sonic Mania the true Sonic 4, but to me it's more like a Sonic Jam 2. Maybe it's just me, but I notice a drastic difference in the art styles while jumping from zone to zone in Mania. The chrome-like sheen of Sonic 3 and Knuckles levels, the over-designed messes of CD's levels. Also, good job Mania for making Metallic Madness actually manageable. I mean, it's not a big deal. And again, I love it, but if we're going to be talking about the greatest of the series, I feel like that matters. And while I feel like the challenge makes a decent ramp up in Mania, the boss fights are way too long and all over the place in terms of challenge. Again, I love them, but by the time you get to the final encounter, as good as it is, it feels, well, a little underwhelming when you consider some of the fights that came before. Sonic 3 had a nice, steady uptick with each and every encounter with Robotnik, with the final few fights feeling more drastic and dynamic, and the final fight unlike anything else in the series. And those zone and act transitions, they're back in Mania. Sometimes. I feel like they wanted their cake and eat it too on this front, because this is never consistent. Sometimes we see Sonic and pals go to the next level, sometimes the screen cuts to black, sometimes they stand and pose once they hit the goalpost, other times they speed right on past because that looks cool, only to then awkwardly walk back onto the screen once the second act starts. I have to keep stressing that none of this actually matters. These are just silly little animations, but it's just another example why I feel Sonic 3 is better. 3 was trying to be its own game. Mania is trying to be all of the other games. And again, that's great! For me, none of this is a negative in my book. I love seeing all the old levels. I love the few new ones. I enjoy these crazy elaborate boss fights and these expansive maps. I just feel, pound for pound, Sonic 3 Knuckles still remains the greatest this series has ever been. But the fact that fans are even debating this should tell you something about Mania on the whole. Regardless of where you stand on that debate, this is a fantastic game. And a very important one to boot, because we have not seen the classic gameplay done like this for a very long time. It's mind-boggling. For over 20 years, Sega could never make the games feel as good as they did. Mania not only makes it feel as good, but it improves upon it. The Collector's Edition might have Sonic propped on a Genesis, but make no mistake, this game is caught in the swervy S-shaped ring of the Sega Saturn. You'll hear it all over the place in these reviews. It feels like a long-lost 2D Sonic game for the Sega Saturn. The sprites have extra animation. The maps are far more lively than they've ever been. They even bring back crunchy, low-polygon graphics for the 3D stages and some other level trappings, exactly like the Saturn did. And I'm sure I'm not the only one to notice how much of T-Lope's amazing soundtrack reminds them of Knights, Klonoa, or other 32-bit era platformers. This game is more powerful than any other Genesis Sonic game. It could not fit onto a Genesis card, but I would bet good money that this could fit on a Sega Saturn CD just fine. I mean, really look at that file size. The actual Sonic Sega Saturn games took up more memory than this thing. And for real, I paid so much money just to have a Sega Saturn version of this game. Oh my god. The team behind Mania did not set out to make another Genesis game. They set out to make a Sega Saturn game. And that's important, because it would not have been enough to just recreate the classic games with a safe, bare-bones Sonic game. We already got that with Sonic Advance. The team behind Mania grew up loving Sonic games. Like me, they probably also got their hands on Sega Saturns with the same hopes, waiting for a stellar Sonic game that would never come to pass. And while there were games to love on Saturn, it left Sonic fans wanting, teasing us with cameos, spin-offs, or repackaging what we've already had. Even the ridiculous Genesis add-ons had their own Sonic games. How could they skip on an entire console? The Saturn was a commercial failure, and Sega would make one more glorious shot at the console wars with the Sega Dreamcast, bringing with it Sonic Adventure, the series' first full attempt at making the transition into 3D. But with it, it marked the end of classic Sonic. Really, the last time we would see the classic Sonic style would be with Sonic R of all things. The Sega Saturn did not have much going for it, but kids like myself developed something of a Sega Stockholm Syndrome. We embraced the little we could and squeezed every ounce of enjoyment out of it. The system never got to reach its full potential. I mean, neither did the Dreamcast, but at least we got a couple of solid Sonic games out of it. The lack of a mainline Sonic on the Saturn is a glaring hole in Sega's history, or at least that's how I've always felt. But considering how unpopular the system was, I just assumed I was some weirdo strangely fixated on a garbage machine. Mania shows me that I was not alone in that thought, and I'm so so grateful that there were other fans out there who actually did something about it. Despite my comparisons to Sonic 3 or my concern for newer gamers, I love this game. I love it so much. It picked up where the classic series left off as if the 21st century never happened, and I love it. I love the level choices. I love the complicated bosses. I love the extensive maps. I love having blue spheres back. I love all the cool unlockables it gives. I love that they're unlockables and not some stupid DLC. I love those crunchy lo-fi polygons. I love that this feels like a Sega Saturn game getting a ton of love and attention that it never would have back in 1995. I don't care if all of this praise is coming from fair-weather fans. I love the joy and enthusiasm this game evokes. It's oozing with love and personality in each and every pixel. I don't care if it's not perfect. I don't need it to follow a rigid structure of rules like Mario. I don't need it to be soul-crushingly hard like Mega Man. And I sure as hell don't need it in 4K like Crash Bandicoot. This game is just an absolute joy. It is so happy to be here, and we are so happy to have it. Because what I love most of all is how I have to keep reminding myself that this is a brand new Sonic game. A game that has finally nailed the classic gameplay to the point where I was never distracted. I was right back in the zone and as comfortable with this entry as I would have been with any of the other games. It's like I've been playing this game since 1995. So thank you, Christian Whitehead, Stealth, T-Lopes, everyone at Pagoda Games. You guys are the best of the best when it comes to Sonic fans. And Sonic fans are notorious for being one of the worst fan bases in geek culture. But nowhere this week am I seeing any jokes about the Sonic cycle or cringy fan art, which I'm sure we'll get back to once the DeviantArt simulator comes out. This game is important. It shows what the fan base is capable of, despite how embarrassing it can be to be a Sonic fan. A handful of the fans rose above it and showed everyone what this fan base is capable of, what my beloved Saturn was capable of, what Sonic is capable of. Sonic was always and will always be good, and if you don't agree, you can call the cops. Mania, in my book, is not the best Sonic game ever made, but it is a clear sign that this team is well on their way to create the best Sonic game. The next time Sega's bold enough to slap a number behind Sonic's name, they better have these guys behind the wheel. And spoilers, I am aware of the connection the true ending of this game has with Sonic Forces, and I understand why that's rubbing people the wrong way. For me, I'm gonna play Forces anyway, but I do find it annoying that it does make Mania feel like the appetizer to Force's main course when, let's be real here, Mania is going to outsell and outperform Forces on every single level. Only one of these two games is going to be up for a Game of the Year nod. And how crazy is it that we not only have a Sonic game, but like a long-lost Sega Saturn game in 2017 that's going to be talked about at the very least when it comes to Game of the Year. That's what makes this game so special, not only to the Sonic fans, but to gaming as a whole. I've seen so many lists of gaming franchises that need to die, and I've seen so many other lists of the worst gaming consoles of all time. And you better believe that Sonic and the Saturn show up on those every single time. But here we are with the Sega Saturn Sonic game that's just resonating with all of us. Everybody's having a great time with this game. Look, I didn't make this video to pick fights with any other Sonic fans. We have enough infighting as it is. I was just giving my own personal opinion on it. This game doesn't need to be the best of the series, and even if you think it is, good for you. It's a great choice. Just for the first time in a long time, I feel good about the future of this franchise, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Hello there, I'm Nick, and today I'm quickly going to go over my initial thoughts on Sonic Mania Plus. It's great. Shocking, I know. I actually got lucky and got this game a day early, which is surprising since Amazon was a few days late to deliver the Sonic Mania Collection Edition to me last year, so I ended up buying the digital version on my Xbox just so I could pretend I bought some slight variation, and because I couldn't wait 2 freaking days just to play this thing. But I got this one early and on the Switch. What I'm saying is I own 3 copies of this game. And you might notice I'm not actually showing you any recorded footage, and I'm just using the game's promotional material. That's because my Switch's power supply is literally in another state at the moment, and while I could very easily spend the $5 extra to upgrade my PS4 or Xbox One copy, I'm not really inclined to spend any more money because I have 3 copies of this game! Is it worth the $5 upgrade if you already own Mania? Well, that depends. For hardcore Sonic fans, obviously you've already purchased it and these words are wasted on you. In fact, you probably bought yourself the physical copy, even though it's $30 on its own. And yeah, sure, you already bought the special edition of the vanilla game last year, but now it comes in a shiny box with a reversible Genesis cover, even though it would make more sense to be a reversible Saturn cover. But my point is, you already have 3 copies of this game. I don't need to tell the hardcore Sonic fanbase this is worth their time. Obviously, this is worth your time, but I should make it absolutely clear that this is for people who love Mania and want any kind of excuse to jump back in. If you bought the original game last year because of the hype, or you wanted a quick nostalgic fix, and you rolled through the main game once and never bothered with the emeralds, I'd probably skip it. There's not much here for you to enjoy. What you get with your $5 are Mighty and Ray, 2 characters long overdue for a return to the series, one of which was never in a proper side-scrolling Sonic-style game. Now, classic Sonic works because of the simplicity of the controls. You need to do everything you're capable of doing with one button and the directional pad. So I was really curious to see how these two would work with such limitations in place, and I'm happy to say they pulled them off quite well. I could have done without the direct correlation to Super Mario World's cape, but Ray's gliding ability works quite well, and honestly a little smoother than the plumber. Granted, none of the levels really feel designed around the mechanic, but I need to play around with the game a little bit more to get a better opinion on that. I know some levels force me to use it in clever ways to reach spots I wanted to get to. Mighty seems a little better designed. He has modern Sonic's Insta-Stomp, which can ram you through certain spots in the ground, which by itself is fine, but he's also invulnerable to spikes and small projectiles in ball form. I thought it was really clever. It's hard to mess with the traversal outside of what Knuckles and Tails already provide, so adding some protection from common hazards proved very valuable in spots I gotta play as Mighty. I say spots I gotta play him because this game also comes with an encore mode and does some things I was not expecting from this update. Instead of lives in this mode, you instead have the party of 5 playable characters to work with. That's it. You play Sonic in the returning Angel Island zone, and then you pick Ray or Mighty, and from there you will constantly have 2 characters on screen at any given time, provided you keep them alive a la Donkey Kong Country. And also like Kong, you can swap between the 2 characters with a press of a button, just so long as you're standing still. You can rescue even more characters via character monitors or the new pinball bonus stage that swaps out Blue Sphere. Now all of this comes at the sacrifice of building specific levels for specific characters, but I thought this was a really smart way to try out all of the characters without having to play through the same game 5 times over. They even provide some new monitors that randomly swap out playable characters with someone else in your roster if you have them available. It's fantastic. That system aside, the rest of Encore mode is basically New Game Plus. I get it. You get what you'd expect from such a mode. Some variations in the level layouts, and I really need to give this game a little more time, because while a lot of the levels just seem like palette swaps, and side note, Stardust Speedway's second act colored like Sonic CD's original Bad Future was a wonderful touch. Well done, guys. Anyway, yeah, while a lot of these levels feel like palette swaps, I did notice some of the levels seemed a little more challenging than before. But hey, it could have just been a bad run. I don't know, that's why this is just an initial impressions video. I also have to say it's initial impressions because so far, in my 7 attempts to get the emeralds, I currently have 0. They updated the giant ring locations and the bonus levels within, and they are hard. It's been a long time since I've been challenged by a Sonic bonus stage, so I'm excited to master these and see what they unlock. And that's about all I've tried so far. I haven't touched the multiplayer, and I need to do a really deep dive on these other tweaks and mechanics. But this is everything I noticed in my first playthrough. My first thoughts are, yeah, level transitions and new characters are pretty nice, but it's basically the same game and I'm perfectly content with that. I feel justified in my purchase. This game deserves to be on a shelf. I love the art book and the holographic cover and the Genesis art, and I love the new tweaks. Not really for what they add to this game, but because it shows me how many more ideas these guys have. They don't need to rely on callbacks or nostalgia to make a great game. They know how to not only remix what we already have, but also add to this simple gameplay style in unique and wonderful ways. A celebration of past and future is a good way of describing this game. And all that said, how great are those Sonic Mania adventure shorts? That final episode, oh my goodness. As a Metal Sonic fan, I was very happy. Nice touch with that Super Saiyan sound effect, by the way. I'm gonna do a deeper dive on the future of classic Sonic and actually all things Sonic, pretty soon here. There are some interesting things I think need to be discussed. And while I did spend a lot of my original Mania review comparing this to Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and I know there are some of you out there wondering if I've changed my stance on that, well, I didn't really want to use this video to take away from my enjoyment of Plus. I just wanted to run through quick and tell you how I felt. And afterwards, I'll do a deeper look. I still want to get my analysis of Sonic 3 and Knuckles and really master Mania Plus and see if that rumored DLC actually comes to pass before I do anything else. That, and I still have dinosaurs on the brain, so you're just gonna have to deal with that.
Oh my god, dinosaurs are still awesome!
That's the basic premise for the sequel to Jurassic Park. Godzilla! Wait, no, sorry, just, they just look so much alike. How could you not mix these two up?
That's a lot of fish.
Let's try that again. The long-awaited sequel to Jurassic Park, The Lost World. Nailed it. But just like that joke, The Lost World didn't quite make the landing.
The school cut you from the team?
Well, Dad, I can't seem to perform gymnastics without murdering something. So yes, they cut me from the team. To many, the sequel didn't hold up to the standards set up by its predecessor, and neither did its games. Now, unlike the first episode where I showcased a whole bunch of games the entire way through, we're really going to only focus on one this time around. And don't worry, we will get to the rest and certainly get to those spin-off games, but trust me when I tell you they really deserve their own episodes. Now, every major console for the time had a version of Lost World, but today we are going to focus on the PlayStation and Sega Saturn version. Like the movie itself, hype was through the roof for this game. This was for a few reasons. This would be our first 3D Jurassic Park game. Steven Spielberg was pretty hands-on with the production on top of directing the movie. There's this orchestra and who cares? You get to play the T-Rex! This was all anybody was talking about leading up to the release of the game. And they certainly made it a huge selling point. I mean, it's on the back of the box. We have games like Ark now, but even in today's extensive gaming experiences, controlling the Tyrant Lizard King is still something of a rarity. And it certainly was back in 1997. People were ready to cause a ruckus and gobble down screaming human lives, never to see their loved ones ever again. Their last moments of existence surrounded on all sides by giant daggers of teeth, choking on hot, rotting breath as their fragile bones are crushed, with nothing left to be buried but the fecal matter of a long-dead monster. Sounds awesome, right? Well, too bad. You have to wait 30 freaking levels before you got the chance to do any of that. And unfortunately, the T-Rex had some of the worst levels in the game. But why'd you have to wait so long to get there? Well, as it turns out, the T-Rex was not the only playable character. You actually had a total of 5, which sounds fine, certainly, but you didn't exactly have a choice on who you got to play. You actually had to play through with 3 other characters and all of their levels just to get the chance to try out this dinky-armed monster. Plus, the game wasn't exactly easy. Level design wasn't top-notch, enemies would respawn, and you had no saves or checkpoints. On top of all that, the game was a side-scroller. I can't speak for anybody else at the time, but as a kid who didn't know any better, I was expecting free-roaming 3-dimensional movement, as this was all the rage at the time. This design choice was especially problematic for their own crown jewel, the playable Rex, who already had severely limited movement, especially compared to every other character you just got done playing. I mean, you play the Raptor right before the big guy, and you could zip around stabbing fools like nobody's business. So throwing a big bulky T-Rex on a 2D plane was not exactly ideal. All that and the fact that we are not looking at this as a brand new game. That's something you're going to hear me talk about time and again with games on this show, especially from this particular era of gaming. You have to be willing to be somewhat open-minded when playing a PlayStation 1 game. Controls and graphics in this era were still very experimental, so now this game has time working against it as well. Unless you're someone like me and somewhat nostalgic for choppy, poorly rendered polygons, your eyes will have a hard time taking in a lot of the games from this age. So, knowing all this, is there any good to be found? Well, yes, quite a bit actually. Let's jump in from the beginning.
Got some.
Playing this game now, we do have a couple of things to our advantage. We can temper expectations, come in with some patience, and if you don't have the desire to rush straight to the Rex, this will help you immensely. And if you really need to get that fixed, well, passcodes exist. Also, depending on what version you're playing, you're going to get one of 2 things. The normal game starts you off with the green little compy, but if you're playing with the special edition greatest hits version of the game, you start off with the Rex. We'll get more into this version in a little bit, but right now let's focus on the compy. The opening for the first dinosaur, while low quality, still looks pretty cool. And you get these neat little openings for every single character. I've always loved using the fossil as your first introduction to the character. The first being, like we said, the green little Compsognathus. This character was often considered something of an annoyance, just another roadblock between you and the cooler characters. But here at the beginning, I'd argue we're introduced to some of the very best elements of the game. The compy has a wide array of animations and controls, and it's a lot of fun figuring out what each button does. Some of these feel completely pointless. What's he even doing there? But I love the attention to detail. It makes the little dude feel more alive. Even all these years later, this still looks pretty impressive, and it's just so damn cute. Look at it ripping the throat out of this stupid fool. Oh. The compy feels fast and fluid, and the eating mechanics to regain health are just awesome. I actually enjoy playing this character a lot more now than I ever did as a kid. There was a time when I thought these levels seemed poorly designed, but honestly they don't seem so bad these days. They are less than perfect, I'm not saying they are. The lack of checkpoints in the original version of this game are annoying at first, yes, but all these years later, I did not have nearly as many hardships getting from point A to point B. And these levels aren't exactly long either, lasting only a couple of minutes for the most part, and none of them are dull. The compy's levels have a vast array of challenges from one to the next. Basic platforming in one, dodging the feet of a brachiosaurus in the other, swimming among aquatic predators, being chased down by a Carnotaurus, sneaking past a Deinonychus, dodging missiles from the hunter. There's a crazy amount of variety in just this one character, and his scale compared to the rest of the world makes you really appreciate the dangers. It makes them all a little more satisfying as they later become little more than appetizers as you move up the food chain. I was on the edge of my seat with each and every one of these early levels, and what were once an annoying chore is now one of my favorite parts of this game. I also find it pretty cool that you have to outmaneuver the hunter as a boss before you're allowed to play him. The shift from one playable character to the next is somewhat jarring, and I must admit I immediately missed the little dinosaur once we parted ways. I would have happily played a full game with the compy alone, but the hunter is still a fun romp on his own. Definitely a weaker portion of the game for me, and it can be somewhat frustrating until you get the hang of the grappler and the weapons. All the same, this game plays much better than I remember, and it's still satisfying to blast through some of these creatures that were impossible to kill just a few levels prior. The hunter is fine, but I'd be lying to you if I said I cared all that much compared to what comes next. Same as today, as when I was a kid, I was most excited to take control of these sickle claws and get back to using humans as scratching poles. I remember being a kid, putting down the Genesis version of Jurassic Park, worried I would never get a chance to play Raptor ever again. Thankfully, Lost World has some awesome Raptor levels, and just like the compy, they get a little too detailed with the controls and animation. But just look at that, why did they include this? The poor guy's already dead. Yes, I do like the variety of the compy much more these days, and yes, the Raptor is basically the compy with some slight tweaks, and yes, this is hardly the first time Jurassic Park games let you take control of the Predator that was made so popular by this franchise. I get that, but I still don't care. The Raptor feels amazing. All the mechanics of the wee little compy, except now you can dish it out on people and Deinonychus, who are basically smaller velociraptors, even though the real-life velociraptors were much smaller in comparison, and you're basically playing a small Utah Raptor. But Velociraptor is a cool name, and who cares? Let's go foot stab some people. The Raptor stages feature the indoors and then spending the rest of your time in a burning forest. I would have liked a little more to look at, but oh well. I really appreciate how every single character has their own theme. The Raptor also has one of the only bosses in the game, which admittingly is an absolute pain until you get the hang of it, because the game really doesn't tell you how to win. Once you figure it out, it takes mere minutes, and once you dispatch your enemy, the ground begins to shake, announcing the arrival of what everybody's been waiting for. Finally, we've come to the T-Rex. And yeah, he does kind of suck. It basically plays like a tank version of the Raptor and Compy. The lack of mobility, while understandable, is immediately felt, especially in such an enclosed environment. While the Rex can take more damage, you're also a bigger target. Raptors on all sides, lava, Stegosaurus, and Triceratops, they're all a bit of a pain, and you're going to be dying a bunch as the Rex. For a while, you're going to be frustrated, but once you get the hang of things, you will feel powerful. You will feel unleashed, unburdened from all the challenges that led up to this point. But for a while, yes, you're going to feel completely restricted, attacked from all sides, too big to dodge hazards, and not even really a match for the enemies that only the Rex can face. I was constantly backtracking to munch on other animals just to face the Stegosaurus, and the Triceratops was an absolute nightmare. All that said, it's still a lot of fun to throw around raptors and people alike. Feels great defeating a challenging enemy or wrecking base camps. It's far from perfect, but it still can be a lot of fun. It's just a shame that you couldn't appreciate the terror of the Rex from a prey's perspective. Yeah, you never run into the T-Rex as an enemy leading up to this point. Well, that's where our final character comes in. Sarah Harding is the only human movie character in this game, and she's only here a few levels. Plays a lot like the Hunter, except now you have to deal with oh dear. And yes, these levels are very stressful. Jumping into Sarah's levels made me understand and appreciate the Hunter, which felt very out of place compared to the dinosaurs. Here, Sarah is basically running for her life, right up until the final showdown where you have to face two Rexes at once. But thanks to understanding the Hunter's mechanics, once I had a few frustrating deaths out of the way, I got the hang of these last few levels and felt bolstered to complete it thanks to this booming orchestra playing in the background. And yeah, that's a major strong suit of this game as well. The music is still some of the best I've ever heard in any game. The game's composer, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering this name, Michael Giacchino, created a masterful soundtrack. This would be his first major composition for any project, and Steven Spielberg was so impressed with the music, he put a proper orchestra into the project. Giacchino would end up scoring Medal of Honor right after this. Then Warpath, a Jurassic Park fighting game, and yes, that will get its own episode, and a whole bunch of other projects including games, shows, and movies. In fact, he was brought back onto the franchise as he scored Jurassic World, a fantastic composer with a great track record. But back to the music specifically made for this game. Every character has a theme that fits perfectly to their personality and playstyle. The Compy, light and mischievous. The Hunter, well, somewhat militant and, alright, a little bland, but still consistent for the character. The Velociraptor, dangerous and cunning. The T-Rex, terrifying and powerful. And Sarah's is just, well, almost heroic to a cheesy level. By the time you get to her levels, the music is practically telling you that you're almost there, just a little bit farther and you have conquered this harrowing challenge. Despite the flaws, there was very clearly a genuine effort put into this game. This wasn't a rushed licensed product all too common to come out alongside movies. And you also have to give them props for going back to the game with the greatest hits version to fix some of the flaws. When a PlayStation game hits a particular amount of sales, they would reprint it as a greatest hits title. Normally it's the exact same game, only difference being less art on the disc and an ugly neon green band instead of the normal black. For Lost World's team, they took the opportunity to go back and tweak a few things. The life bar was extended, checkpoints were added, and a quick level featuring the original Rexy kicked things off, just so you wouldn't have to wait so long to try it out. Genuine care and effort was put into this project, and it shows. And if you wanted a little extra challenge, you could collect DNA strands in every level. And what did this unlock if you managed to collect every single one in every single level?
Is this on? Can you hear me? It's on. Hello. If you can hear me, congratulations. Way to go. Way to go. You made it through. You made it through. You spent all that time, and now you're done. You did it. That's quite an achievement. My gosh, you looked a 20-foot carnivore right in the eye, and you've lived to tell about it. Well, you are something. Thank you. Thank you for sticking with it, for not giving up. That is really something. Now, you know what you should do? Turn the thing off, for heaven's sakes, and go outside. You know, breathe the air, take a walk, call a member of the opposite sex. You know what I'm talking about. You know, you have a whole life out there. Get the stink blown off you. Just go. Go, really. Turn off. You. I mean, really. What was that? Hello. Okay, I go.
Oh dear. Jeff Goldblum clearly has no idea what's happening here. You can almost hear Spielberg right off camera, in between takes, asking him to make a quick little something for this stupid game based off the movie. He's in the middle of making a movie. He doesn't give a steaming pile of dinosaur crap about how many whatevers you've collected. Oh, look at you. Look at all this effort. Congratulations. Look at all this time you'll never get back. Hey, look at me making millions of dollars. Nobody will ever remember you. Oh, and would you look at what I found while making this video.
In the PlayStation 1, there was a Lost World video game, and you recorded a secret ending for it. Do you remember this? It's 1 minute long. I have it here if you want to take a look here,
I always
sir.
like to see footage of myself.
It's on. Hello. If you can hear me, congratulations. Now, you know what you should do? Turn the thing off, for heaven's sakes, and go outside. You know, breathe the air, take a walk, call a member of the opposite sex. You know what I'm talking about. You know, you have a whole life out there. Get the stink blown off you.
Get the stink blown off you said, Jeff.
I made that up. So anyway, we're there in Kauai once again, and I think, yes, they said, hey, you know, what is this? Video game. Okay, turn the camera on, and I, you know, did my stuff. Get the stink blown off you. I still say that to my young son, Charlie.
Just I trust you with the filming to hey, just go, just improvise the Malcolm. I assume it wasn't Spielberg behind the camera for that.
He's a little too...
I understand.
I cannot wait to hear this man through all of Jurassic World Evolution. So that was The Lost World. Imperfect then, imperfect now. But probably not as bad as you remember. I still think the game would have been better with proper 3D movement, but it's not like a whole lot of 3D games from those years hold up too well. The side-scrolling is easy to understand and pick up, and despite the dated graphics and somewhat mismanaged level design, it plays just fine. Also, weird quick note, I played the Japanese Saturn version as well, and while Saturn's version doesn't look anywhere near as good as the PlayStation's, especially 20 years later, it actually has something the PlayStation version does not. You can save your game. It's possibly on the American version as well, but I don't have that version on hand anymore, and I can't seem to find any information on that particular feature. So if you're interested in playing this, I do recommend tracking down the greatest hits version. And no, you won't get that sweet hologram cover, but you might as well play the best version possible. And of course, we will be back, not only with Jurassic Park, but The Lost World as well, as there's a whole lot of other games we still have to cover. But for now, that's all I got for you. Go play some bad games, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, hey.
Hello there, I'm Nick, and I'm pretty sure I forgot to do an intro for my last episode. Oh well. This is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. Now, we already covered The Lost World for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, so let's not waste any time and check out the rest of the games that share the same title. 4 years is a long time to wait for a movie, and it can be an eternity in the gaming world. By 1997, we had already begun our shift into the third dimension, but we were still in that odd transitional stage from one gaming generation to the next, same as we were with Jurassic Park in '93. Lost World's gaming equivalent would be a varied experience depending on what you played with, and God help you if your gaming experience was on the Gamecom. This version of the game is part side-scrolling shooter, part driving game, and all bad. Like, really bad. Everything on this console is really bad. Like, we will have to do a whole episode on this machine on its own. For now, let's focus on Lost World. Just look at this thing. Do you want to play this? The controls barely respond. The music is just sad beeps. And this game runs at 5 frames a second, which reminds me, hey, thanks game for going out of your way to show Sarah slowly lay down every time she gets hit. Are you taking damage or taking a nap? No, you go ahead and just lay down. I'll wait. You poor thing, how would I ever expect you to survive against a baby stegosaurus? In the movie I seem to remember Sarah nearly giving one of these things a freaking stroke with the camera. The ghosts of Fatal Frame don't even react this badly. But one of these walks at you in this game, and guys, I just can't do it. What are you doing? Just grab on the ledge. Just stick your fingers out and just grab the ledge. Rolling fucking tempo! To my knowledge, this is the only version of Lost World that gives you control of Muldoon 2 Electric Boogaloo. It's a shame that the control they give you is pure crap, but hey, that's still pretty neat, right? If there's anything good to say, the dinosaurs are wonderfully detailed, and I really love the animated backgrounds, and they at least try to vary up the gameplay. It's I don't know, it's strangely charming. I can only recommend this game to fans of this franchise or collectors of the console. But let me be clear, this is really bad. If you're not a weirdo like me, you're not gonna find any enjoyment from it. There's also a R-Zone release and a handheld, but come on man, I can only play Apologist for so much here. The R-Zone is just a Tiger handheld you strap to your face. It's more of a toy than an actual video game. Maybe someday down the road we'll do a deeper dive, but for now, just know it existed. Moving on. Lost World for the Game Boy. Like the 2 previous Jurassic Park games on the Game Boy, the game has you shooting dinosaurs while you collect a certain amount of items on each stage. And also like the 2 previous games, it looks and feels completely different from every other Game Boy Jurassic Park game. So, is it bad? Well, the physics are weird. Your character feels heavy, but can still accelerate a little too quickly. I mean, it's playable, but it's so bland and boring, there's barely anything here to talk about. Honestly, it's a little more reminiscent of Jurassic Park for Sega Genesis, but only in terms of movement and weaponry, which I guess is kinda neat, but as I learned as a child, I'm willing to put up with a lot of crap if it means I get to look at some awesome dinosaurs. And in this particular case,
What Nintendo?
This game looks like crap. I want to look at cool dinosaurs, and I can't look at cool dinosaurs. Okay, here's what the T-Rex looked like in the previous Jurassic Park Game Boy game. Look at that! It's like a lost form of Shin Godzilla 20 years early. But in the Lost World, well, Barney the dinosaur makes a cameo. Get out of here with this nonsense. I also don't like how the lime green clashes with the gray of the cart. That's not important to anything, I just don't like how it looks. Now, to be completely fair, you can get used to the controls, and it's extremely generous with health drops. Honestly, it's a perfectly fine game. Average, yeah, but that's more than most movie games were ever willing to attempt. Also, can we just take a moment to appreciate the vindictive little Stegosaurus, who doesn't just run into you and carry on with its day, but actually grinds you into the ground. Be sure to get all the human off your feet before you walk into the house, sweetie. Oh, and these game over screens? Every form of death gets its own unique game over screen. Everything from the T-Rex to the wee little bat. And oh, that's just embarrassing. Next is the Game Gear. This game is interesting for a couple of reasons. This was the final release for the Game Gear in North America, and while it doesn't play exactly like the Jurassic Park Game Gear game, it's not too far off in terms of playstyle. This is a platformer with a wide variety of levels and challenges, making this the closest thing we got to a proper sequel in terms of gameplay. So what's bad about it? Well, there's baryonyx. Nah, I'm just kidding, I love them. I mean, it's a very basic video game. You're gonna be hearing that that a lot in this episode. Once you strip out the dinosaurs, there's nothing to write home about here. But it does have dinosaurs. Very detailed dinosaurs. At least what you could expect from a Game Gear. They even let you play a compy, and he is an absolute hoot. Even if he only stands like a foot tall, but still somehow has doorways built specifically for him on man-made structures, yeah, the scale's a little off here. And I love the boss fights. Even the Dilophosaurus, who didn't even show up in the Lost World, gets a full-on boss fight in this game. They even reference the books with the camouflaging Carnotaurus. Out of the handhelds, this is far and away my favorite of the bunch. Let's move on to the other console game we have yet to cover. Because yes, even in '97, they were making games for the Sega Genesis, still lingering well into the lifespan of the next generation of consoles. I remember being disappointed by this game when I was young because I wanted it to be more like the original Genesis games. It's not, like at all. But playing it again, I noticed that this played a lot more like the Super Nintendo version of Jurassic Park, just like the Game Boy Lost World played a lot more like the Genesis Jurassic Park. Again, they're mostly their own games. They had different developers, but it's still kind of interesting and confusing. While this is an overhead shooter, there are some significant differences from the Ocean games. The island is split between 4 sections with nearly 20 missions to complete. You play a hunter who has to capture dinosaurs while stopping other hunters from catching dinosaurs. Your arsenal is basic fare: shotgun, tasers, grenades, you name it. You also get access to vehicles to speed up your adventure, and you get to go whitewater rafting. The Genesis game was brought to us by Appaloosa, a well-regarded developer of the day who brought us the likes of the Echo games, even that one, and Colibri, a shooter where you get to play a hummingbird. Alright. Oh, and they also made South Park and Jaws Unleashed. Yeah, you'll be seeing these guys again on this show. But hey, there's not a whole lot to whine about here. Going by critics, this was the best regarded Lost World game of the consoles, even compared to its more powerful counterpart, which we got into in the last episode. Still, let's get to the bad. Now, as a kid, I was not a fan of the bird eye view. I hated the pre-rendered dinosaurs, and I didn't enjoy how aimless it felt, which is weird when you consider how much I enjoyed the Super Nintendo Jurassic Park game. But in previous games, you had a variety of structures and landmarks. You gotta switch up playstyles when you entered buildings. This game is just an unending forest, but those are really the only complaints I could give you. This is actually a really impressive cart. It pushed this old system to its limits graphically, thanks to these guys being more than familiar with the hardware, and it plays great. They even have a cool little cooperative mode where I couldn't get anyone to play with me, so I guess we just won't talk about it. So let's talk about the arcade game instead. Maybe I just noticed it more often because I loved it, but I remember seeing this game everywhere when I was a kid, and I was always super pumped to play it whenever I had the chance. This was made by Sega, who were making big waves with their House of the Dead series, so they just did it again, but with dinosaurs. Replacing the undead with raptors might sound weird, but it was more common than you might think. It's your basic on-rails like-gun shooter, but is there anything bad to say about it? Nope. Or if there's anything to gripe about, you could say it's short or lacks gameplay variety or the voice acting's cheesy. I don't know. What do you expect from something like this? This was all designed to be a short, adrenaline-fueled arcade experience. And while poopy buttholes might seem somewhat crude for the series, keep in mind that outside of the Lost World movie, every other movie in this franchise features massive piles of dino crap. This arcade game was simply keeping that proud tradition alive. And it teaches kids the proper way to wipe, with bullets. As for the rest, this game looked insanely good when it first hit arcades. There was a reason this was everywhere. It was so beloved, it got a re-release special version in Japan that featured the San Diego scene from the movie, a scene which, ironically enough, feels right at home on a video game. Yet this weird special Japanese exclusive arcade edition is the only place where you get that scene in game form. It was also heavily considered for a port to the Dreamcast in 2000. That's 3 years after the release of the movie. And while it never came to pass, that's how well loved this game was. I know it's doubtful, but I would really love to figure out a re-release of this game. And on that high note, that covers every other Lost World game, but not every other spin-off from the Lost World. There's still a lot of Jurassic games to get to, and we will in good time. But until then, I've been Nick, and I'm sorry for wasting your time.
Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. 2017 has been one of the greatest years in gaming history. Indies are flourishing, spectacular new IPs reminded us we don't always need sequels, but we also have sequels reminding us that the best can get even better. A fantastic new system was released, Skyrim's still here, and we've seen the return of some of the most beloved platformers in gaming history. 2017 has been so good to us that even Sonic the Hedgehog has been welcomed back with open arms. And then Sonic Forces came out. You just had to screw this up, didn't you? For the uninitiated, Sonic Forces is the latest in the long-running series, this time bringing a darker tone as we see the world taken over by Dr. Egg, just let us call him Robotnik for the love of God, man, and it's up to Sonic, and not Sonic to take it back. Gameplay is split between these 3 or sometimes 2 characters at the same time, and also features the return of the popular boost formula, as well as a handful of momentum-based classic platforming with classic Sonic. The game also features the 3rd character, an avatar you can create yourself. You guys remember when this game was coming out and we all thought it was Bubsy? God, how ridiculous that would have been. Who would want Bubsy back? Who would want Bubsy back? Who would want Bubsy back? Who would ask for this? Why did you do this, dude? Now, the avatar plays a lot like modern Sonic, with levels split between running corridors and 2D platforming, but it swaps out the speed boost for a grappling hook that lets you do whatever a spider can, as well as a wispin gun that mows down enemies in your favorite flavor of death.
Red, orange, green, blue, and turquoise.
So they have something for every kind of fan in this one game. The boost gameplay has been gone long enough for it to be missed, Classic Sonic is here for us old school fans, and DeviantArt gets to throw all their cringy creations into this new avatar character. Even the often overlooked fans of the early 2000 days get some love with the return of the darker, more serious storytelling. In theory, this sounds like all signs are pointing to the perfect package for Sonic fans. But if you've been a Sonic fan as long as I have, you come to see these as warning signs. Look at all the different ways they can screw this up. As quick as critics were to praise Sonic Mania, they were just as quick to jump back on the hate train with the release of Forces. But to be completely fair, not everybody says this is a totally terrible game. It's divisive, certainly, but I feel a lot more people are more about this game than anything else. It's Sonic Team, what were we really expecting? This was never going to be a masterpiece, and casual Sonic fans seem to like it okay. Even Jim, Sonic Colors is a 4.0 Sterling, likes this game, which is... Man, I like this guy's videos, but I just can't peg his tastes at all. Never mind. Truth be told, it might just be getting a harder time coming off the heels of Sonic Mania. Forces feels like a rushed sequel to Sonic Generations, and if this came out a year after that game, I feel angry fans would be much more forgiving on this title. But this came out 6 years later, even though it feels like a rushed sequel that came out 6 months later. Despite that gap in time, this game is worse on almost every single level. Hey Sonic fans, we heard you were getting sick and tired of seeing Green Hill Zone in each and every game we've been releasing, so we're gonna put it in this game in 3 separate levels. Great! Not that it's gonna play anywhere near as well as literally any other version of this same stinking level you've seen for 25 years. And if you weren't tired of Green Hill, don't worry, you can also be tired of Chemical Plant Zone. And the Death Egg's back for some reason. But maybe I'm exaggerating the overuse of Green Hill. I mean, these levels are so short, they almost combine to a normal length level in any other video game. Yep, in a game series that literally rewards you for being able to blast through levels in under a minute, fans are complaining about these levels being too short. See, the thing about being able to speed through older Sonic levels is the fact that you needed to really understand the game's mechanics and level layout to make the best time. It wasn't likely you'd roll through any of these stages that quickly on your first run through. In Sonic Forces, not only is that a very likely possibility on your first playthrough, the game starts you off recommending hard mode. Even with that, you're probably going to end that level with an S ranking. There's little to no effort required for a solid chunk of this game. And look, maybe this is weird and just me, but a game starting me off in hard mode is telling me that it's just bunk from the beginning. Hard mode's usually an excuse for replayability, returning players who've mastered the mechanics of the game and want a little bit more challenge. When your hard mode's the standard and it's not hard, what's even the point of having a normal mode at all? So 6 years after the beloved Generations, we get levels that are bland, short, and reuse assets from those older games. I mean, there are new sections here, but like the infamous Sonic 4, while they show you some really cool stuff going on in the background, they don't really utilize it in the main course. Even if this game had fantastic level design, getting through them would still be a chore, as the only real challenge in this game is fighting these god-awful physics. I've said it before and I will say it again, I still feel they nailed Sonic's movement in the original Sonic Adventure game super hard. He had a nice sense of momentum and had this big floaty jump that gave you complete control over where he landed. Game isn't perfect, but I thought the controls were a fantastic transition from the 2D mechanics. But all these years later in this game, when you make these characters jump, it feels a lot like throwing a large rock and hoping you know where it's going to land. I've died more often from missing jumps onto platforms than any other way in this game. Yeah, it's hard to get on the platforms in this platforming game. And it doesn't help that you have to keep swapping playstyles from level to level. Play as modern Sonic and all you really need to do is boost to beat the level. Switch to the avatar and it feels about the same, but you can't boost. Instead, you have these grapple points that are sometimes automated, and then you have this gun that just never runs out of ammo. I don't even know why it's here. But then you also get levels where you play as Sonic and the avatar at the same time, where you can combine all the abilities, which makes me wonder, why didn't you just have one character? And within these levels, you'll once again be swapping between these running corridor sections and these clunky 2D sections, which, I'll be real with you guys, I've never liked. The shift is jarring, the gameplay is clunky, and it's even worse in Sonic Forces since precision has been thrown right out the window. It just makes me wish I was playing the classic games. Oh, but lucky me! This old school fan has to shut his stupid mouth because classic Sonic is back for a handful of levels, and now he plays like trash. So if the 2D sections within the other levels weren't jarring enough, you now have to completely switch up playstyles every now and again with this terrible emulation of old school Sonic. It pretends to have momentum, but it clearly doesn't. It's trying to be the classic games without ever really understanding what made them so great, which isn't a good look when you release 2 months after one of the greatest games in the series. And I'm sorry guys, it is fair to make those comparisons. Not only did this release 2 months after Mania, but this is a continuation of Mania's story. The Sonic in Mania is the same Sonic in Sonic Forces. You remember how I said Mania felt like an alternate dimension where the 90s never ended, the Saturn got a good Sonic game, and his franchise didn't become a joke to all of the gaming world? Well, it's like that Sonic popped over to the real world and saw what actually happened to the series.
Behold, Sonic, behold your legacy and weep!
I'm out of here.
Oh God, take me with you!
I can't believe I'm saying this, but this game would have been better without classic Sonic. I mean, he really doesn't even add anything to the story. Not that it's a story worth telling anyway. I mean, yeah, the story's simple enough. Dr. Omelette is taking over the world. Go get it back. I could lambast the sorry attempt at a darker tone, point out how ridiculous it is to have all these rainbow animals talk about coping with death and survival, because really it is quite silly, but my actual problem is the missed potential. So I'm gonna have to go full Sonic dork here, so bear with me. Bear with me, because you can actually be a bear in the character creator. Oh my god! This is not the first time we've seen Eggman take over the world in this franchise. Way back in the day, us American kids were treated to the Sonic Saturday morning cartoon. In this show, Robotnik had taken over Mobius, the name of Sonic's planet. A massive amount of the world had been turned into a dreary industrial wasteland, the citizens having been roboticized, which is a method of exactly what it sounds like, turning organic beings into robotic slaves, a terrifying twist on using animals as a power source from the games, and a clever way to avoid mass genocide of fuzzy animal people in a kids show. Sonic was part of a ragtag group called the Freedom Fighters, the last line of defense between Robotnik and his complete rule over Mobius. The show ended after only a couple of seasons, but would spiritually continue on in the Archie Sonic comic series, which lasted all the way up until late 2016. It wasn't great at first, but over the years, thanks to clever writing, they managed to bring in a brilliant mix of the best ideas from the American side of Sonic's history with the more game-centered designs from Japan. So now, at the end of 2017, the longest running comic based in video games is finally dead, as well as the fantastic characters and plots created for American fans, and would have the games incorporated from such a storied history. Chili dogs. I mean, that sounds like a terrible choice of food to pick up right after a run, but I'm sure his metabolism can handle it. Are you serious, Sonic Team? Are you serious? You can reference this, and this, but you guys couldn't bring nothing from the show or comics? This would have been so easy. You have all the rights to all these characters, and you couldn't even give a name to a stupid world. And oh my god, this level select is a mess. I'm sorry guys, I know I'm being super biased here, but this game's world is so bland. It has no identity, literally none. They don't even have the guts to call it Earth, let alone Mobius. And all these generic placeholder soldiers could have easily been the Freedom Fighters. We are told the stakes are high. We are told things are dire. And I would probably care if this was the third act to a much longer game leading up to this point, or like the third game in a trilogy. Even with everything on fire, Eggman never actually feels like a threat. You just jump from one thing to the next until the game unceremoniously ends. There's even a point where Infinite sends our heroes into some negative dimension, and then we're out like 2 minutes later. There's no lasting effect to any of this nonsense. Yes, I know, kids game, but if you're gonna take a darker tone, then own it. The cartoon and comics weren't perfect, but the dark tone made sense for the narrative. Things were dreary, but Sonic was like this bright blue beacon of hope who stood out amongst this drab world. Even the other Freedom Fighters had muted colors, making our hero stand out that much more. And Robotnik was terrifying. He had the presence of Darth Vader when he walked onto the scene. In this game, Eggman is as cartoonishly silly as ever. Look, I know this seems silly. I'm not saying they need to make a bunch of callbacks to old cartoons. My point is, you can tell an engaging narrative that makes you care about characters, even if they're walking, talking animal people. And I wouldn't care about this story so much if it wasn't in my freaking face the entire way through. If they're gonna put so much focus on this stupid story, then make me care about the world and its inhabitants. 2 out of your 3 playable characters don't even speak. I've always thought the silent protagonist in a world full of chatterboxes was always really weird, but at least you could stay consistent. And yes, I know why classic Sonic or the Avatar don't speak. I'm just saying this mixture makes no sense. There's no focus. Is this an end-of-the-world narrative that culminates in an ultimate showdown between 2 enemies? Is this a continuation of Sonic Mania, focusing on the power of the Phantom Ruby across all worlds and how it needs to be stopped? Or maybe it's a tale of a fearful little nobody who rises above all the odds to fight alongside the greats and save the world? Well, yeah, it tries to tell those stories, but it tries to tell them all at once, and it stumbles. If this had been organized into 3 separate campaigns in the style of Sonic Adventure, then I think you'd have a much more compelling narrative, or in this case, narratives, and you'd have time to get a handle on the different playstyles and physics, instead of having to jump to another character every 2 minutes. And then maybe having 2 mute characters wouldn't be so jarring. But as it stands now, I don't even care about the character who never shuts up. Modern Sonic blathers on and on, even with the world falling apart around him, and I don't really think he cares. Let me show you what I mean. At the start of the game, Sonic is captured and tortured for 6 months. All of his friends think he's dead. Yes, I am serious. I am not kidding. So what kind of sad, broken state is he in when we finally see him again for the first... Exactly the same. He's exactly the same. Not even a quill out of place. This isn't a kid's game, come on, man. In the cartoon, he was allowed to cry. He was allowed to react. He was allowed to feel. Here, he's just a toy with a button you press to spew out one-liners.
Dramatic moment.
And going into this game, I was genuinely interested to see how he'd interact with all these other characters. All of his old enemies get their own trailer. Chaos is back. Shadow switch sides. Metal Sonic's always a pleasure to see. And then Zebra? Who cares? This guy's back too. Oh, and then it turns out they're all just copies. Spoilers, who cares? Who cares? They're not even here. And you only fight 2 of them. Chaos is back. I want to fight Chaos. Why not fight Zebra, Zack, whatever? So what do? Do I just jump? What is happening? How does this stupid bee work? This game never shuts up at any other point with stupid hints and other nonsense. Why can't you tell me? And the new guy, Infinite, seems pretty cool, but what is he? Is he a creation in the lab? A faceless jerk who throws a temper tantrum because the other emo kid called him a name? Because it's not exactly clear on that. Oh, but they tell you in the stupid comic book they released on the internet. I don't care. I don't care. For real, as stupid as his reasoning is for hating Shadow, at least there's something of a rivalry there. But in this game, you only fight against Infinite with Sonic or the Avatar, which I guess has a history because he was scared. What? Who cares? Who cares? You just beat him and he leaves. Who cares? Spoilers, shut up! And speaking of this creative character crap, it's dumb. I don't like Avatar characters. I don't like them. It feels like pandering fan fiction. This cringe-inducing nonsense. You're just best buddies, hanging out with my best pal Sonic while the world's falling apart. Sonic doesn't even know your stupid name, you stupid idiot, stupid face. Everything this game tries to do, we've seen done way better within its own franchise. I've seen better stories told with these characters in every other medium. If these games are gonna make me sit through a tale, then hire somebody who knows how to tell a decent story. You've had the longest running comic series for any game character. That broke Guinness World Records. There have been countless TV shows, and there's a fairly decent one running right now. It's been long enough. Sonic games can do better than this. And story aside, the gameplay. What happened here? These are the same people who made Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations. They advertised that before we saw anything else in this game. And it doesn't help that this game released 6 years after the last game featuring this gameplay. 2 months after a Sonic game that cost a fraction of what this one did and also fared way better with fans and critics. And only a week after Mario's glorious return to 3D. I said it in my first video that I was worried they would screw something up before the release of this game, and here we are. And I also ragged on Super Mario World for like 3 minutes. That's one of the greatest games ever made. I did that for you, Sonic. I said Mario made dinosaurs lame. And what does Nintendo do? Oh my god. Sega, what are you guys doing over there? I just want these games to be good. Sega, this is one of the last things keeping you relevant. Figure it out. Ugh. Okay, sorry. Normally this would be much easier to shrug off the bat if this was some random bargain bin game that I'd picked up for $1, or something that's been notoriously crappy for years, but that's just not the case here. This is a relatively new release in a series that's been given so many second chances to right the ship, a series I've been a fan of my whole life, so I'm going to be a little bit harsh when they screw things up. And the way I make it sound, this sounds like the worst game in the world, but that's just not the case. I'm just frustrated. I've seen these guys do better, and I expect better. But let's say you're not some grown man complaining on YouTube about a furry blue boy. Let's say you don't really care when this came out compared to other games in the franchise. Or maybe you're just a parent trying to find something cheap for their kids. Maybe you just want to know how this game stands on its own. Is the game as broken as I make it out to be? While the physics aren't perfect, and while the story is bland and all over the place, it's still fine. It's absolutely playable. Now granted, if you're trying to get this for your kid and you're expecting a Sonic game in the style you grew up with, you're probably going to run into a situation where you're asking yourself, did that little red rat boy just say Sonic's been murdered? But hey, look, they've pulled this stunt like 3 other times before, and it's gotten a lot weirder than this, so I'm sure you're not scarring your kids too much. Jokes aside, I do feel this particular Sonic game is going to resonate just fine with kids. Yes, the levels are annoyingly short, but I do feel the length of them will go down better with a younger audience. And they do get a little lengthier in later portions of the game. But for the most part, these levels usually focus on one particular gimmick. So if you like the water slide, well, you can just jump right to that. And speaking of the levels, there are some cool ideas going on here. You can tell a lot of work went into the aesthetics of each area. The white cityscapes look slick, a jungle casino is a nice mix of old tropes, and I love how it looks. And while Chemical Plant and Green Hill have overstayed their welcomes, seeing old Sonic stages in an almost post-apocalyptic setting is actually kinda cool. I mean, that's the closest I got to caring about this world and its destruction. They offered some new looks at old favorites. Flying over frosty refineries and Chemical Plant felt like they grabbed environments straight out of the Fallout series. And gripes aside, I have to admit, this old fan likes seeing Death Egg again. They basically recreated the Death Egg zone from Sonic and Knuckles, which was an absolute treat for me. And yeah, look, classic Sonic doesn't play as well as he does in Mania, or Generations. I still always enjoy seeing that little pot-belly version, no matter how out of place he is. As for the other characters, modern Sonic isn't quite as fun as I remember, but if you like the boost gameplay, this does the job fine. And the Avatar, well, like I said, I don't like custom characters in narratives. I'd rather see a character grow, have an arc, something, whatever. For me, the Avatar was the low point of the game. Didn't like the stages, and I don't like this cringe-inducing power of friendship crap. But I also understand why people absolutely adore this character. Look, when it comes right down to it, the Avatar was a brilliant play. The Sonic fanbase is fairly notorious for their fan-made characters, and it only makes sense to capitalize on that. And as Jim, how do you like this more than colors, Sterling, pointed out, in a world full of loot crates and microtransactions, Sonic Forces practically drowns you in customizations for your character. Even after beating the game and hopping back in to capture some more footage for this video, I was still being thrown gloves, shoes, and bodysuits like a party store was going out of business. The appeal of the customizable character is, well, the customization. And while I feel there was more they could do in terms of options, this is certainly a healthy start. Even I had a lot of fun mixing and matching clothes. And hey, even if you've never wondered what it'd be like to be best friends with Sonic while you're bird people, you could just do what I did and design them off of real pets. That's what I did, because Ghosty Ghost is the ghosty most. Hi, baby boy. Do you want to run around with Sonic the Hedgehog? No, because that'd be really weird. But hey, that's still an option. The rest of the cast is a little more melodramatic than normal, but hey, it was still nice to see them emote, or be here at all, really. Sonic's cast has been downplayed pretty hard for the past decade, and I can't really blame Sega for that, but it feels like they're slowly being reintroduced to the series. Tails actually gets a story about coping with loss and connecting with classic Sonic. Knuckles gets to step up into a leadership role, which is a nice change of pace from that. The others get some screen time, but obviously the main attraction is the 3 playable characters. In terms of these 3, I've got to admit, it's been fascinating checking out other reviews, because nobody seems consistent on which one is their favorite. Some feel classic Sonic is the worst, while I've heard others praising him for being the best part of the game, and same with the Avatar character. Some feel it gets way too much attention, and to others, I'm sure it's the entire reason they bought this game. Modern Sonic seems to coast by without too many people feeling one way or the other about him, but what about me? I've moaned and complained and played Apologist for all 3 of them, so which do I feel is the best playable character in the game? Well, to me, there's only one obvious answer. Seriously. No, seriously. Look, I've seen all the other jokes, I get it. I know how annoyingly close this game was to being Shadow the Hedgehog 2, but okay, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I think this would have been way better if this was the sequel to Shadow the Hedgehog. I like this character, alright? I don't care if you feel he's the bringer of the Sonic apocalypse, but I think he looks cool. I think his stereotypical stoic anime rival attitude is a nice change of pace compared to the rest of the happy-go-lucky animal people. I like Shadow, and this game would have been much better if they kept the focus on him. So this game allows you to grab some free DLC in the form of a prequel story called Episode Shadow. These are 3 levels where you get to play the Hedgehog, and maybe it's because I had already beaten the game at this point and had a better handle on these wonky physics, but I felt that these 3 levels were some of the best design in this entire game. They were still short, but they provided a little more variety and challenge to the point where I didn't really notice. They also show the origin of Infinite here. Kind of. I mean, it's lame, but like I said up front, it at least establishes some form of connection between characters here. In the main game, all these relationships are so disjointed. Sonic becomes best friends with your stupid avatar, while his actual best friend thinks he's dead for half of the game, so he connects with an alternate version of Sonic, who is completely disconnected with everybody else in this world, and none of them have a connection to this new villain. And like I complained about earlier, none of them have any established connections to all these fake villains. But here in Shadow's story is the one place they establish any kind of beef. And I would have loved to see that expanded on. Focusing on Shadow would have provided, well, focus. And since he's not Sonic, you could have slowly introduced new mechanics through the game that Sonic would never have been allowed to use, such as the Wisp Gun, which feels similar to that other Shadow game without it being a real gun. Sega, seriously, what were you thinking? I mean, come on, look, even the title of the game would have been better if they called it Shadow Forces. It's a tad generic, but you have to admit my point stands. Even the logo's in his color scheme, come on! I know this is Sonic's 25th anniversary and the name sells, but we already had Mania to celebrate the legacy. How cool would this game have been if they'd scaled back all this extra nonsense and focused on Shadow taking back the world from his new rival while Sonic was out of commission? That sounds kinda cool. This game could have been Shadow's redemption. Also, seriously, where was he for those 6 months? Ugh, oh well, that's just my take. Maybe this DLC was testing the waters to see if the public would take to it. Well, I for one did. And hey, I'm also happy to report that the music's pretty great. It doesn't always work for me. I could do without vocals in most of these tracks, and classic Sonic stages just make me sad. But when they nail it, they nail it. While Infinite seems to be a bit divisive among fans, his theme certainly isn't. I mean, listen to the covers from this one song. When everything you know has gone through. That's kind of how I feel about this game overall. When they nail it, they remind us why people fell in love with this kind of Sonic game. It's a cinematic, adrenaline-fueled roller coaster at the best of times. And while it never flies completely off the rails, it's definitely in need of a tune-up. Look, fellow Sonic nerds, I'm a classic fan first and foremost, and I was not happy with this game when I first finished it. Ultimately, I'm still not very happy with it, but that doesn't mean I want the 3D games to get wiped off the face of the planet. We can have good Sonic games regardless of which kind is your favorite. And we can have good Sonic stories told regardless of the media you enjoy them in. This game could have been, should have been the great uniter for Sonic fans, instead of a physical reminder of how disjointed it is. And I get it, people writing on this game too hard might mean that we don't get to see the boost formula again, or maybe the classic games are all we get from now on, and maybe you're not the biggest fan of those. But like I've said, I've seen these games do way better than this, and they need to evolve. They shouldn't be making something that's worse than a game that they created 6 years ago. Regardless of its classic or boost or adventure, I just want these games to be consistently good. And giving them constant passes whenever they deliver subpar content is not going to make that happen. There are really cool ideas in this game, and I hope they expand upon them. But I'm back to being cautiously optimistic. Unless they do something truly amazing, the next game from this team won't be a day one purchase from me. And for real, we can all agree that having Super Sonic as paid DLC is complete garbage, right? I mean, the social media team was making fun of loot crates and they still pulled crap like this? I mean, come on, man, it's the exact same animations from the last game. Well, that's really all I have to say. Ultimately, yeah, I'd say this is a meh game. I didn't hate it, but I wish I didn't spend $40 on it, especially since it's already on sale. And clearly Sega knew they had a bit of a dud on their hands too. They didn't even release preview copies. Get as defensive as you want, but this team clearly knew that they'd screwed up along the way. But yeah, as for this Sonic fan, I'll come back to it eventually, and I'll have some fun with it. I don't just want to play classic Sonic games, but until they give me something better, I'm just gonna go back to Sonic Mania. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the boobs in bad games. Something I've always appreciated about console gaming was the feeling that this particular medium was growing up right alongside me. Now technically, it started long before I existed, but thanks to the radical changes we see in each console generation, it's easy for anybody to correlate any particular console with a different time in their life. For me and many others, I started off on the NES, which I personally correlate with my early childhood. Then you move on to Genesis and SNES, then the somewhat rough transition into the teenage years with the Saturn, N64, and PlayStation, all the way up to adulthood with the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, where it feels like we're only kinda keeping tabs on generational shifts. Kinda like we're only kinda keeping tabs on our ages, because who cares anyway, we're all going to die. But there's a very embarrassing and awkward era in the middle of all that. One where the hormones kick in and you begin to realize the glory of the female form, or well, whatever your personal preference may be. A magical age of discovery, and yes, we're talking about this. I'm sorry, I am so sorry. Maybe it's because I've aged out of the demographic, but it feels like the early 2000s seemed obsessed with sex. And when I say sex, I mean marketing to the young straight American male. Really, it's kind of crazy what movies and games were getting away with. For a long time, games had been attacked for including offensive content. Of course, we got over the violence rather quickly, but pixelated jigglebits? God forbid. Still, at some point in this particular generation, we got over having nudity in our video games. And once that got the A-OK, it felt like the floodgates opened and the breast began to fly free. Because that, of course, is what I mean by nudity. The female nipple. We live in a really silly world. Have you ever just stupidly blurted out some dumb, offensive joke just to fit in with a crowd? No, just me. Of course it's just me. It's always just me. Well, that's basically what this game is. A desperate plea for attention from a dying company. And believe it or not, this game's release is far from the worst of it, but we'll get to that another time. Before we go anywhere else, you might be wondering what this game actually is. Might be hard to discern from that subtle title, but this is actually a BMX game. Weird, right? This play, similar in the style, originated and made famous by the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. You roll around on a map completing tasks such as accumulating a certain amount of points through bike tricks, nailing combos, collecting items within a time limit, escorting prostitutes, forcing yourself upon aliens, you know, the standard fare. What made this particular game stand out, or at least attempt to, was not the BMX portion, but the 3 remaining X's that made up the latter half of the title. Yes, this is another pointless Tony Hawk clone, but does Tony show you his tatas? I didn't think so. So when you strip away all the, well, strippers, you're left with yet another action sports game. Or is it? Because this wasn't made by some first-time developers. This was made by Z-Axis. Now, if you've never heard of this team, nobody can really blame you. They weren't exactly Neversoft, but they were an admirable runner-up in the action sports genre. They had previously made the criminally underrated aggressive Inline, Thrasher Skate and Destroy, and more famously, the first 2 Dave Mirra freestyle BMX games. As popular as action sports had become in those years, it was still hard to make any money if you didn't have Tony on the cover. Still, these guys managed to make their mark and put a unique spin on the genre every time they came out with a new game, even to the point that the Tony Hawk games began to copy some of their designs. Do you think Pro Skater 4 was the first to ditch the time limit in favor of a more open-ended mission-based formula? Nope. That was Aggressive Inline, again made by Z-Axis, and actually released the same year as BMX XXX. So the game had a talented development team behind the wheel, an aggressive marketing campaign targeted directly at their demographic at a time when the industry was up to its ears in GTAs and pro skaters, while the likes of sex comedies ruled the box office and Jackass dominated the airwaves. It showed up on the covers of IGN Unplugged and Game Informer, featured on every kind of game publication, even made its rounds on the mainstream press. Granted, not all of the press saw the game's crude content as a good thing, but hey, any press is good press, right? Oh. Despite the developer's pedigree and the crazy amount of attention, the game released to low scores and low sales. But why? What's so bad about this game? Well, to many, that's pretty obvious. The game is crude and offensive. It objectifies women, makes fun of homeless people, and, well, I mean, it's pretty rude to just about everybody.
The sheep balloons are humping again!
This is problematic for some very obvious reasons. And if you find any of this stuff offensive, I can hardly blame you. It doesn't really bother me, but I'm picking this game up long after it's any kind of relevant. And I'm a straight white guy who grew up in the middle of the country, so take that opinion for what it's worth. Regardless of what any of us find offensive, this game is very obviously trying to be just that. Being controversial is an easy way to drum up attention, as the Grand Theft Auto series proves with each new release. But once you get past the controversy, you need to have a well-crafted, innovative game, which Grand Theft Auto tends to be. BMX, on the other hand, well, it lets you know exactly what you're in for in the first opening seconds. Yeah, that sums up this game so much better than anything else I can tell you. As this poor guy demonstrated, the game's a wreck. It's a confusing mess. Right before this schmuck becomes BFFs with the pavement, Z-Axis plugs an Oscar Wilde quote right below their logo. So the first things you see when you pop in your booby bike game is this quote, followed immediately by Faceplant McGee here, and then the camera having a conniption fit as it jumps between footage of bikers bailing and strippers. Okay, well, let's just get past all this. The game advertised the ability to play naked women, so let's hop into the character creator and see what kind of sexy... Okay. Baldy McBoxers is the first female in-game model we see in this kinky little title. But keep your pants on, kid. I'll be showing you any kind of nudity. But trust me when I tell you that if naked women is what you're gunning for, you can do a little better than the polygonal pyramids on display in this video game. And if you're looking for a good action sports game, well, you got other options there too. I've never exactly been great at games like these, but I have always had a blast with the old Tony Hawk games and even other stuff from Z-Axis. And even I can tell you this game just kind of feels off. There's a satisfying smoothness to the Pro Skater controls that just aren't present here. And the level layouts aren't great. Everything is drab and cluttered, and it doesn't exactly get more exciting from level to level. They even made the Area 51 knockoff boring, and the maps aren't helped by the mission structure either. In each level, you are required to fulfill certain tasks. They usually mask mundane chores with comedy, but the game usually leaves it up to you to not only track down the missions, but the actual tasks once they're given out. But if you tolerate enough of these chores, the game will reward you with clips of actual real winning, which you won't be seeing here, you naughty little devils. I will tell you though, while they seem good at their chosen profession, the clips last less than a minute, so get done with that what you can. So both the BMX and XXX portions of this game are pretty lackluster, which leaves little surprise as to why this game sold so poorly. But again, this was made by Z-Axis. What happened? How did we end up with this? Well, for the longest time, we never really had a clear picture, but it was pretty easy to track the failure of this game with the lawsuits, censorship, and bankruptcy. You could kind of connect the dots from there. Back in October of 2017, Blake Hester of Motherboard, the tech arm of Vice Media, tracked down the developers and producers of the game to understand what exactly happened. Prior to the game, Z-Axis was an independent developer who had been contracted out by Acclaim to make the Dave Mirra titles, and XXX was, as many rumors assumed, originally meant to be the third Dave Mirra game. Z-Axis was already well underway to making exactly that, until Acclaim came in with a stupid joke. As the article explains, Z-Axis was not only still under contract to produce another BMX game for Acclaim, the developer was completely bought up by Acclaim during the production of BMX XXX. According to Sean Rosen, a former executive producer for Acclaim, in the middle of a meeting trying to figure out how to get a mature rating, as it's proven to sell better, someone threw out the idea to put strippers in the game as a joke. The room had a good laugh and then spent millions of dollars doing just that. As I said earlier, Z-Axis was well underway developing the next Dave Mirra game when orders came from upon high to show them your boobies! According to the developers interviewed, this required them to throw out a lot of content already developed and start from scratch. And not everybody was on board with the new decision, leaving some team members understandably upset. And the problems only continued from there. As it's pretty well known from anybody who's read up on the game, Dave Mirra sued Acclaim over the use of his name on the title for $20 million. Claiming he had no idea they would be associating his name with this raunchy new direction. For what it's worth, Rosen tells a different story. According to him, he showed the game off to Mirra well before launch, and he was rolling on the floor. He thought it was the funniest thing ever. So they went forward with the understanding that Dave was on board. With the bold new direction, attention, and the name recognition, there was no way they could lose. Obviously, the lawsuit proved that was not the case. It was dropped and they didn't have to pay out the $20 million, but not having Mirra attached to the title was a serious blow. Even worse, it was Mirra who got the other writers and sponsorships on board for the first two games. They also would not be returning for the third entry. And if that wasn't enough, Sony flat out refused to allow the title to show up on their PlayStation 2 without some serious censoring. Xbox didn't make those demands, which is no surprise, but what is a surprise was the fact that Nintendo didn't make a fuss either. Yes, that's right, the same purple box that houses Mario Sunshine and Animal Crossing has a spicier version of this game compared to the cool hip kids over at PlayStation. Didn't stop there though. Australia, being Australia, didn't allow the release of this game until all sexual content had been removed, and some retailers just flat out refused to sell the game. Not having Walmart sell your game might not be that big of a deal to any hardcore gamer watching this, but according to this article, back in 2002, Walmart was responsible for 25% of all game sales in the US that year. What had started off as a hopeful last-ditch effort by Acclaim to keep its head above water ended up being one of their last big mistakes they'd ever make. By the time the game launched, they knew the game's fate was sealed. Regardless of the stupid decisions, drastic changes in development, and knowing full well this game was being sent out to die, Z-Axis was still determined to make the best out of this terrible situation they were forced into. Once you get past the drama and lewd content, what you're left with is, well, while this isn't the best game of its type on the market, and certainly not the best by Z-Axis, it's still made by Z-Axis. Despite the nightmare development, they still got it out the other side as a perfectly capable video game. You can still do tricks fine, you can complete missions fine, you can do everything you would expect from a BMX game just fine. If you actually give it some time, learn the layouts and combos, like most of the Pro Skater games, you're probably gonna have an alright time. I've been watching some playthroughs from others rolling around the game, and honestly it looks pretty fun when you get the hang of things. And the more time I spent with it, the better time I had. And to be completely honest guys, I found this tasteless, immature nonsense somewhat charming. It's like watching a kid desperate to get your attention. I always wanted to see what weird, stupid thing was next. How was this game going to attempt to shock me? And yeah, back in the day, as a younger guy this was targeted to, the idea was somewhat alluring. As Rosen says in the Motherboard article, sex sells, but nobody wants to touch it. It's the same kind of thing where they have the Playboy magazine at the top of the rack, but you don't want anyone to see you grabbing it. And yeah, it's the same idea. I wanted to try it, but I wasn't gonna be caught dead playing it. Now again, if you find this stuff offensive, who am I to tell you how to feel? This was made at a time where video games were absolutely a boys' club. And if they weren't targeting to women, they didn't really care how they represented women. But if you find this toilet humor funny, well, more power to you. I've never believed video games cause violence, and I'm going to trust that this game wouldn't be the cause to treat others like trash, or vandalize local businesses. This game knows it's lowbrow, it knows it's crude, and it knows it's celebrating lust. Honestly, after reading up on this game, that quote at the front of the game almost feels like a defensive maneuver. We know what we made, we're sorry, alright? Just enjoy this for what it is. I don't mind the clips, I don't mind the potty humor, and I don't mind that this isn't quite as good as other games in the genre. Honestly, just looking at it from a mechanic standpoint, I think it's just fine. I even like the minimalistic cover with the bold lettering. Feels like a blacked out window to a seedy adult shop or strip club. And I like all the weird nonsense I run into. And I always like rolling around in games like this, even if I'm not very good at them. BMX XXX wasn't the last thing Acclaim or Z-Axis would do, but it feels like a pretty sad ending all the same. Even though Dave Mirra's name would be attached to future titles, this would be the last one made by the team. In fact, this was the last BMX game they would ever make. And to many, this is considered the end of the BMX trilogy, an end that pales in comparison to what came before. Still, on its own, as problematic as it is, if you're a fan of this genre and you haven't tried it yet, who knows? Maybe you'll find some enjoyment out of this old game. Certainly worth the couple bucks it's gonna cost you. So yeah, maybe it's not as good as Tony Hawk, but at least it's not as bad as Tony Hawk. Oh man, Dragon Ball FighterZ looks amazing! Just look at this! It looks better than the show! I can't wait to cover it all, but oh! No, I don't get to cover that here. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. The Dragon Ball franchise needs no introduction. It's one of the most influential manga and anime series of all time. And of course that goes without saying that it also gets a ridiculous amount of video games, arguably the best of them having recently been released. So of course, we're not going to talk about it, or really any of the games that hit the consoles. Today, we're going to look at the Dragon Ball Z plug and play. This was part of a weird trend pretty prevalent about 10 years back. These themed controllers that housed video games that just plugged directly into your TV and just got straight to the action. They've never really gone away, and technically Nintendo's take on the idea is easily the most profitable these things have ever been. But all the same, the heyday of these things has passed, and I see them littered around thrift stores all the time. Now that I can grab them for a couple of bucks, bucks, I have to admit I find them somewhat alluring, especially when it's made for a franchise I actually care about. There's just something charming about these things. Well, let's plug this sucker in and see what we have. Okay, so our first screen greets us to a choice of 3 games, as well as a MIDI rendition of Rock the Dragon. Doesn't sound great, but then again, Funimation's soundtrack sounded like it was made with a Genesis sound chip, so I guess it's good to hear this again. Alright, normally I'd split these episodes between the good and the bad, but since we have to cover 3 separate games and none of them are particularly deep, let's just tackle these one at a time. So what to start with? Well, let's skip over the pinball for now. Who buys a DBZ game for pinball? I don't know what this Budo thing is, so hey, let's start with Kamehameha Assault. I know what those things are, and it sounds intense. Let's see what we have. The objective is to collect all 7 Dragon Balls to your side of the screen, and you can only do that by ponging this green orb back and forth between Goku and Vegeta. You can also shoot off Kamehamehas to stun your opponent, and man, this is a confusing mess. Your character doesn't really move fast enough to properly volley the ball, and as far as I can tell, you can't really get a second player involved, so you just have the computer to annoy you for a few minutes before you close this game and never touch it again. Honestly, the idea isn't bad, but this is clearly the weakest game of the bunch. Let's move on to Budo Retsuden. Here we go. A fighting game. That's what we're here for. It's not very good. Again, you have the problem of being unable to play with a second person, which I hear is a pretty popular feature for fighting games, and the controls aren't super great since your control is literally a toy dragon you have to wiggle around. Rock the Dragon indeed. Dragon Ball Z! Then the character selection leaves much to be desired. Complaints aside, the rest is fine. This isn't even the worst Dragon Ball fighting game out there. And surprisingly, it has a story mode. It's nothing special, but the extra care is appreciated. From what I've been reading, this actually plays a lot like a stripped-down Super Butoden 2. It's not a game I've played, but if I had, I'm sure I would appreciate that too. Okay, 2 down, 1 to go. At this point, expectations are well set. Obviously, the fighting game is the main draw, and these other 2 games are just stuffed in so they could advertise 3 games in 1 on the packaging. Let's just get this over with. Here's the pinball game, and it has Goku as the ball launcher? Well, that's kind of cute. And this table is surprisingly detailed. Even the flippers look like Saiyan armor. The controls are responsive, and you get objectives. And boss fights. Guys, this game is actually pretty good. Oh, okay, it's really good. I'm not even kidding. There's a lot of content here. Like enough that I'm surprised that this wasn't released as a standalone Game Boy Advance game. I honestly have nothing bad to say here. This is a proper hidden gem. I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed this pinball game. And I found myself surprised with how much time I spent once I started capturing footage for this game. I was originally just going to cover a bunch of plug-and-plays all in one go, but honestly I feel this game kind of deserves the attention on its own. That stupid Pong clone you're only going to try once, and Budo Retsuden is fine, but considering all the other options DBZ gives you when it comes to fighting games, this is nothing you're going to play a second time. The pinball, though, is fantastic, and worthy of a purchase alone, and all of this is housed in this cute little joystick. I love that it's shaped like Shenron, and all 7 Dragon Balls are on here either as buttons or decoration. If you're a game collector and a Dragon Ball fan, I definitely recommend picking this up. And that's it for today, guys. Let me know what you thought about this video. I tackled this because I knew it would only be 5 minutes, and like an actual 5 minutes, not DBZ 5 minutes, and it's lasting half of a season. And because of this, I knew I could get this out a little bit faster. Let me know if that worked for you or not, because I do have a lot more of these stupid toys to play around with, and I need to talk about something besides Sonic every now and then. Otherwise, if you have a game suggestion, let me know. And if you like this video, please lend me your energy and spirit bomb that like and subscribe button. Are all these Dragon Ball references working for you guys? I'm sorry, I'm just gonna go.
Goku. How are you, Dad?
You're all here. I'm really glad to see you two.
And me?
Yes, you too, Dragon.
Guys, did you see? Injustice 2 now features the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles! You can play as all 4 radical reptiles. Leotard, Dom DeLuise, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and Milky Bungalow. And now we get the chance to put them up against some of the greatest comic characters ever created. But why would we do that when we could play all these other games instead? Why did I ever start this show?
Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. Something you'll come to know about me is, as much as I love this guy, or this guy, or this guy, there are few corporate entities that have latched onto me as hard as the Ninja Turtles. Which can be said by so many others because, well, I can say Ninja Turtles and none of us blink an eye at such a ridiculous concept. As with anything as big as the Turts, of course they've been involved with numerous video games. But despite the ridiculous amount of games, rarely have we seen the Ninja Turtles act like, well, ninjas. We have yet to get that stealth action game these tubular dudes truly deserve. But hey, you certainly have plenty of other options when it comes to turtle games. We have side-scrollers, action-adventure games, brawlers, Metroidvania, sports, turn-based RPGs. Seriously? With that in mind, it might not come off as much of a shock to you to learn that there are Ninja Turtle fighting games, especially when the most prominent of them came out during the time when people could not shut up about Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. What may surprise you is just how many fighting games starred the Brothers Green, so I figured we'd take a look at them today. Let's not waste any more time and take a look at the first game on our list, Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the NES. Okay, so the story is Shredder's all like, bet you can't beat me up, and the Turtles are all like, yeah, huh, we can. And then they're like, let's punch each other before we punch this guy to prove it. That's about as deep as the plot got for anything turtle related back then, so it's fine. Alright, let's pick one of the 4 turtles, and oof. They have less coloration than those cheap knockoff toys. Okay, so first problem right off the bat, you don't have many characters to choose from, and half of them are just color swap turtles, and they don't even have their weapons. Ugh, okay, so if they don't have weapons, what do they... What is he doing? Get off me, man! He just came at me like a rabid Kermit. So what's the deal here? Raphael loses his sai and he just reverts to attacking like an actual turtle? Well, I can't talk too much smack because apparently it's really effective. Okay, well, I can't beat this guy, so I might as well play him instead. And yeah, you go all Pac-Man and that seems to work fine for a while, but that's all I could do to make any kind of progress. This game is insanely difficult, like throw your controller across the room difficult. But then again, I've never really enjoyed traditional fighting games, so maybe it's just me that feels like this is ridiculously unfair. But who did these developers make this game for? This is a children's property, isn't it? Maybe it gets easier the more you play it, but first impressions aren't great. And full disclosure here, guys, I will get into the positives as I always do, but we're not doing a deep dive with anything you see today. This is more of a showcase than actual reviews. I didn't grow up playing these games, and I have not given them the time you need to really master the mechanics. And like I said, I've never been a fan of traditional fighters. I love the Turtles, but even they couldn't get me into the Street Fighter craze. So if you are a fighting fan, and you want to dig a bit deeper, I recommend checking this out for yourself, because I can only tell you so much about the genre. All that said, let's talk about the positives I did glean from this title. This rare game is coveted by collectors for some very specific reasons. Not only does it represent a popular brand in a popular genre, but it's also one of the few fighting games for the original Nintendo. It's just hard to pull off games like this on that old machine. And because of that, this game is very ambitious and technically impressive. There's really only so much you can do on an 8-bit system with 2 buttons on the controller. Regardless, Konami pushed this old system to its limits and provided arguably one of the best this genre could do for this aging system. The Turtles are color swapped and weaponless, but they do have some unique moves. And this looks really nice for an 8-bit fighter. And even though you really only have A, B, and the directional pad to work with, you can pull off a surprising amount of moves. Again, I'd recommend coming in if you're looking for a challenge and you're somewhat adept with fighting games, but if you're someone like me who has a strange fascination with games that push boundaries of technical limitations, seen how much game they could fit in with the little provided, check this out, it's pretty cool. Alright, so we have Tournament Fighters out of the way, let's move on to the Sega Genesis for Tournament what? Okay, well, same name but different game. It's another turtle fighter, but this time it takes place in space! We start our game off with the turtles watching themselves, only to be interrupted by Krang, who's kidnapped, well, the only 2 people who ever get kidnapped in this show. Let's go get them back. You can pick your planet, and oh hey, I've never seen this character before, I wonder what... Bad touch bug, bad touch bug, bad touch bug. Who recorded that noise? It sounded like he was doing an impression of Goofy doing things, well, things Goofy should never do. No wonder this turtle fondler's never been anywhere outside of the game. You keep those multiple hands to yourself, mister. I'm serious, get out of here before I get killed over and over again. I can't land a hit on this guy. This is ridiculous. Let's just go try a different play. Oh, what is that? Did I say this game takes place in space? I'm sorry, I meant to say it takes place at the Mountains of Madness. Well, I don't have to look at Cthulhu too long because I'm dead again. Let's just try something else. Oh my god, what
kind of darkness were the developers going through when they made this game? For real, this whole thing is so unsettling. I mean, look at that dinosaur. There's no animation. It just sits there looking at you this whole time with dead eyes. And the sprites look weird. All the turtles have balloon heads, and all the non-turtles have tiny heads. And this game is somehow harder than the NES version. Seriously, even when trying to tip all the odds in my favor, I could only make any headway with this cheap bomb attack. Because, you know, that fits in with Casey's arsenal. Hockey sticks, bats, time bombs. Even then, I still get trounced. Alright, again, I'm not exactly good at these games, and it doesn't control badly. Even if they dedicate an entire button to just yelling. If you're a bit of a sadist, you might enjoy this brutal difficulty and the Lovecraftian horrors. For me, though, I think it's time to move on to the Super Nintendo, where we will now play— oh, come on! Alright. So we have a third tournament fighter, but again, a completely different game from the other two titles that share the same name. But it's still tricking around my shell tuckish. Why are these games so hard? Yes, alright, this game is also difficult, but I don't know. This one feels a little more fair. Like I actually feel like I'm losing due to inexperience, and not because the computer is reading my mind. I still had to put it on the easiest setting, but the controls feel much better, the moveset's much more versatile, and it felt like I was getting better with each and every fight. It's the difference between running up a steady incline as opposed to running into a wall. I spent about as much time as I did with the others, which admittingly isn't that much time, but I actually had some fun here. Plus, the graphics are absolutely beautiful. The sprites are wonderfully detailed, the backgrounds are alive and chock full of cameos, and fly crotch. Out of these three, the SNES version is easily my favorite, but as frustrated as I was, especially with the Genesis version, I still love that Konami went to the trouble of programming three entirely different games. While they all have their flaws, and one is clearly superior to the others, I don't think any of these are bad games, especially if you can play any of them with other people. There's more we could talk about here. I've barely skimmed the surface with these three, but we have to move on. The next time we would see a turtle fighter would be on the PS2 and Xbox with Mutant Melee, based on the 2003 show. Now, calling this a fighting game is a bit of a stretch, as it's basically a stripped-down version of the 3D brawling games based on the same cartoon. It uses the same engine, same assets, and it's pretty obvious that this was made pretty quick to make some more money off the brand. So what you're left with is, essentially, an arena fighter, something similar to the likes of Power Stone. You get a basic story mode if you're so inclined, and some other basic game modes, but all you're really doing is picking a stage, running around, and beating up everybody else. This feels lazy, like really lazy, but not exactly a bad game. It does what it needs to do just fine. The most fun you will have is with other people. Obviously, that's going to be true with any of these games we talk about. Fighting games are designed to be played against others, and this is just another party game. If you don't play 1,000 games a year, you're probably gonna have fun with it. I have friends who played this with their brothers and had a great old time with this thing. Granted, if you spend about 40 or 50 bucks when this thing first came out, yeah, you're probably gonna feel a little ripped off. But if you find it for about 10 bucks like I did, it's a fine addition to whatever collection you have going. Let's move on to Ninja Turtles Smash Up for the PS2 and Wii. Now this game I was actively looking forward to. Ninja Turtles are one of my favorite franchises. Smash Brothers is one of my favorite game series. And this game was bragging about how it got developers from Team Ninja and developers from Smash Brothers Brawl to help make this game. Teenage Mutant Smash Brothers? Yes please. This game was set to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Turtles, and with the Turtles Forever special due out only a couple months after this, I was as excited for the TMNT as I had ever been as a little kid. So like Brawl before it, I eagerly awaited to see what characters they'd cram in from the surprisingly expansive Turtleverse. Bebop, Rocksteady, Slash, Metalhead? God, I hate rabbits. I didn't always. I thought they were hilarious the first time they appeared, but then they didn't go away. And now we get not one, not two, but three of these stupid things in the game. Okay, character selection sucks, but surely we'd get some iconic locations for the stage. Nope. No, of course not. When this came out, I played it once and put it away. Extremely disappointed. All these years later, I think it's about time I gave this a fair shake. And I gotta admit, it's pretty good. Not Smash Brothers good, but what is? If I stop being a whiny little super fan and just enjoy this for what it is, this game's a lot of fun. And even though I would have liked a more robust roster, there are still little nods to Turtle history in this game that I greatly appreciated. And yeah, I kind of like the Ninja Rabbit. Could have done without the Splinter Rabbit. I mean, we already have a character named Splinter in the game. Do you really need to cause some more confusion? Why didn't you just put Sam Fisher in here if you were so desperate to remind everybody that you own the license to Splinter Cell? Whatever, it doesn't matter. For real though, did we need that one with a thong? Who is that for? Now that's all there is when it comes to the console games. But there are actually a couple more fighting games I managed to track down. Here's Ninja Turtles versus Power Rangers in Ultimate Hero Clash. Now that is a crossover I can get behind. And not Next Mutations versus Space Rangers crap. This is a brilliant idea. So why haven't I heard about it before now? Well, that's probably because this is just a browser-based Flash game. And depending on how well you know your Rangers, you may only recognize a couple of these spandex Sentais. I mean, there's only one from the Mighty Morphin series. Granted, it's the only one that matters, so I'm fine. Gameplay is bare bones, and you're going to see just about everything there is to see in about 15 minutes. But the characters are actually nicely animated, and I enjoy a lot of these backgrounds, especially this Megazord hanger. If you're a fan of these franchises, or you have a kid you need to distract for a few minutes, you could do a lot worse than this free browser game. Like, say, with its sequel, Ultimate Hero Clash 2. This time replacing the 2D drawn characters with poorly animated CG ones, and with the most current Ranger team at the time of its release. So, nobody I care about. The gameplay is about as deep as the last one, but now everything's uglier. Seriously, look at those hit animations. Cowabunga indeed. And that, my friends, is all the Ninja Turtle fighting games I could find. If I remember correctly, there are some dual-style multiplayer options available on some of these other Turtle titles, but since they weren't the main focus of said game, I really didn't feel like tracking those down. But hey, if you want to see more Turts, let me know. I'd love a good excuse to keep digging into one of my favorite franchises. In the meantime, that's it for this episode of Game Apologist. I've been Nick, and I'm sorry for wasting your time.
We don't give a
Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. Now, Sonic is no stranger to this little channel. I mean, that's clearly why most of you are here. I mean, I am a fan, and I did promise to cover every single game on this show. But even though I thought I started off at the very beginning, as it turns out, I missed the oldest game to feature Sonic the Hedgehog, Pac-Man. If you aren't aware, Sega and Namco are doing some cross-promotion stuff, and now Sonic's in Pac-Man. Because pasting Sonic in other people's games is the only way we'll get any good Sonic games these days. Calm down, Sonic. No, you calm down. I've spent a lot. Look how many episodes. Look how what I've done with Sonic. I'm allowed to make jokes. I'm allowed to make jokes. Who wanted this? There's no denying that both of these are gaming icons, but icons of different eras, and one would assume different fan bases. But I guess when I think about it, they do have a lot in common. I mean, they're both balls, and they're both Smash Brothers. And probably most importantly, these are two gaming icons that have struggled to remain relevant with constant reinventions, when really they tend to find the most success in just refining the formulas that made them so famous to begin with. All that aside though, this is still a strange mashup. I am more of a Sonic fan for sure, but I do love me some Pac-Man, and I have a hefty amount of respect for the original game. Thing is, I'd never really go out of my way to play, let alone purchase the original game. There have been so many other Pac titles that have just slapped the original game in it. And let's not forget all the compilations, or the many iterations that, dare I say it, are far superior to the original formula. I mean, you could play this game for free inside of Google's logo if you so desire. So unless I was a hardcore Pac fan, I have little to no reason to ever download this game onto my phone. So with all that in mind, I guess the Sonic promotion makes a little bit of sense. I mean, it got me to download the game. And yeah, Pac-Man is also in Sonic Dash. I mean, we could look at that, but I don't want to, so we're not. Yeah, Pac-Man now counts as a Sonic game, kind of. Oh, and would you look at what Sonic dragged along with them? We're in Green Hell again. We might as well just rename this Green Purgatory, because no matter how fast you run, you can never escape. Now, normally on the Game Apologist, I explain what a game is, what makes said game bad, and what good can be salvaged. But if you've been born, grown enough to understand the words I am speaking, and somehow got to this point in life where you are watching a few minutes of this internet show without playing or even having the basic idea of what Pac-Man is, well, friend, I have no problem telling you to close this video and come back later, because you have done some things out of order and you've got some priorities to sort out. I'm saying I'm not going to explain what Pac-Man is. And obviously we're not going to be talking about any kind of bad in Pac-Man, because what kind of monster do you take? Alright, so the core concept of Pac-Man is all well and fine. The only gripes I can come up with is how this particular version of Pac-Man is implemented. This is a mobile game, and everything you'd hate about mobile games are here. Microtransactions, baked-in ads, and touch controls. Now, you can't exactly blame Namco for this setup when the most common complaint on this platform I see is demanding publishers to give away their games for free. I just bring it up because it's stuff like this that keeps me away from mobile games. I would just rather pay a flat price for a video game and enjoy the thing without being asked to buy any imaginary money or watch the same 30-second ad over and over and over. Why does anybody think this is good marketing? I now
hate this thing. And the touch controls have gotten me killed more than a couple times. It's just not as fast or precise as a button or joystick. But with that out of the way, what's good about Pac-Man? Well, surprise, when you get the minor complaints out of the way, it's still Pac-Man, so it's great. And obviously, I've just been rambling like an idiot just so I can make this video a little longer than 30 seconds. Let's take a look at the actual Sonic maps. There are 6 Sonic-themed levels, and they all play perfectly fine because Pac-Man is great. And now it has Sonic in it, so I love it even more. And you can play this completely free. The microtransactions are only there for the surprisingly wide variety of maps. I thought this would just be vanilla Pac-Man, but there is so much more here. But there also is vanilla Pac-Man, and it is completely free. So yeah, even if you're just here for Sonic, the most you'll have to deal with is just a commercial or two if you suck as much as I do with touch controls. The maps are varied, and they do require different kinds of challenges, which is surprising for traditional Pac-Man, but here we are. And of course, I'm not actually upset that Green Hill's back. It's the obvious choice for any Sonic-themed anything. The ghosts have been replaced with Motobugs, which is just adorable. And I mean, that's it. It's Pac-Man, but with Sonic. It's good. You should play this. That's really the only thing I wanted to bring your attention to here. This is a clever and generous promotion of 2 beloved franchises, and I very much approve. We could sit here and nitpick maze design or ask for more Sonic-themed elements, but don't look a gift horse in the mouth. It's a Sonic skin on one of the most classic of classic video games. If this gets you more defensive kids off that Sonic Forces for a few minutes, good. Go visit your grandparents. Pay some respect to your elders, you little brats. I better go call my grandparents. I haven't talked to them in a while.
Come on, tight, you silly faucet! Oh boy!
No. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, these games belong in a garbage can. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. Terrible movie tie-in games are no stranger to this industry, but Spider-Man 3 stung a little worse than others, because the game and movie prior to this release was super good. Spider-Man 2 was, at the time, the gold standard, both as a superhero blockbuster movie and as a superhero game. It was here for the first time you could freely swing around Manhattan as everyone's favorite bug boy. Both the movie and game have shown their age, but at the end of the day, the fun and quality still shine through. So when it came time for the inevitable sequel, and this time on a new generation of systems, surely these games would improve upon what's come before, wrapping up a brilliant trilogy of movies with the most anticipated of villains, a stunning conclusion, and building upon games that seem to just get better and better.
I'm going to die!
Or, not do that. Yeah, like the movie it's related to, this proved to be a disappointing follow-up, in any way you wanted to play it. And you had so many ways to be let down. You had, of course, the cross-platform release of the PC, PS3, and Xbox 360 versions by Treyarch, a similarly plain but separately developed version that came out on the Wii, PS2, and PSP. And you also had a couple other versions for the Game Boy Advance and the DS. That's 8 different versions of essentially the same game. How did you guys screw up 8 separate times? I went online to see how well these games have been covered and found a lot of people calling this an underrated gem. But going back to the reviews of the day, guys, I feel like people were super forgiving of this game. Just listen to Greg Miller doing his best Tobey Maguire impression.
Spider-Man 3 looks really good at first glance. His web sling is very fluid, the buildings look nice and realistic, and just overall you get that initial feeling of, wow, this looks really, really good.
That dude sounds a lot like shirtless Spider-Man. I've seen people call this a hidden gem, but I haven't really found anything too extensive about every version of the game. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. Yes, that's right. We are going to look at each and every game with the title of Spider-Man 3. And I can't tell you how bad of an idea this was. Bruce, I've had it with your sass. I can only hear the same joke so many times.
What would Spider-Man be without his spider powers? I'll tell you, he'd be man. Is that what you came here to play? Man 3?
Regardless of the amount of games on display here, there are really only 4 versions of note. Almost all of them feature an open world where you swing around Manhattan taking on missions loosely based on the movie, but also dealing with extra stories and villains to help fill out your playtime. The only 2 games that really deviate away from this setup are the GBA and DS editions, of course. Both of these are side-scrolling platformers, and yes, even between these 2, you'll find entirely different playstyles. We will get to these differences a little later, but we're starting off with the Treyarch version. That was clearly the major focus on the marketing side of things, and that will be our major focus today. Every other edition seems to have been derived from it, and guys, there is so much to talk about here. Alright, so the first thing we see when we start this game off is not a big sprawling open world to swing around in, but instead, a close-up shot of, who is this guy? Seriously, who is this guy? He's not from the movies. He's not even from the comic books. He's just another jerk in some knockoff Gears of War armor. Well, this nobody is in charge of a bunch of other nobodies, and they're doing a real big naughty by ignoring fire safety procedures.
Leonard, we told you not to put aluminum in the microwave. Now look what you did. I just wanted to heat up my burrito.
This burning building acts as a tutorial, while Mr. Campbell snarks his way through the controls.
What do you do?
And when it comes to the punchy, kicky stuff, it starts off fine enough, but they will sometimes narrate what you're supposed to do, and other times they'll just completely stop the action and tell you what to do, and the spider sense stuff is so weird this time around. You don't click a button to do a quick dodge. You instead hold down a bumper to slow down time and sometimes press X. I don't know, it's not very well implemented. Oh, and the spider sense also acts as a detective vision 2 years before the detective vision. Spider-Man does whatever a Batman can. From here, the game finally opens up into a giant map where we can play more tutorials. Whatever, it's fine. Let's just get to some good old-fashioned web swing. Oh dear. Alright, so this janky lesson aside, the web swinging's actually just fine. It's a lot of fun zipping around New York. Problem is, that's about all there is to do. I mean, you have some racing, you can go on combat tours, defuse bombs with stupid minigames, and pick up hearts. As far as I can tell, these don't really unlock anything. None of these side missions unlock secret bonuses, moves, or anything to enhance the gameplay. It's really only here to give you something else to do or go achievement hunting. You'll unlock new combos and the like with the main missions, but even that feels random. Sometimes you'll get health upgrades, and most of the time you're gonna get combos, all of which are listed in this unorganized mess in the pause menu. And even though the movie is jam-packed full of villains, the game spends very little time on the main movie antagonists. Considering the little time these developers probably get to work with the material provided by the movie, they cleverly just use these as closing missions to acts, filling up the rest of the time taking on other scenarios crafted exclusively for this game. A good portion of that is taken up by these gangs that are, once again, made exclusively for this game. And hey, look, I'm all for original creations, but come on, man, we ain't coming to your game for that. We want some dank references. Also, these guys are super lame. You have the aforementioned H-bombers in your standard generic armor you see in every video game. I still don't care who this guy is. Fallout Raiders that are too ugly even for Fallout. Spider-Man, you can't just be wailing on some random guys wearing spiked shoulder pads. That's profiling. Standard potentially offensive Asian martial arts gang. This is for Iron Fist. This is for Spider-Man 3. I don't know which one is worse. And an army of Lolitas. Welcome to Hot Topic. Every t-shirt is buy one, get one half off. Led by not Harley Quinn.
No!
For crying out loud, Spider-Man, if you can dodge a bullet, you can dodge a bouquet. These guys are at least a little more interesting than the standard thugs you're up against in these kind of games. And they all lead up to an actual Spider-Man baddie, the Kingpin. That's the closest the Raimi movies ever get to the iconic villain. This is his first appearance. There he is, just standing in a corner, grunting while the world's saddest press conference is underway. Honestly, there are a healthy amount of classic Spider-Man baddies, and while it's been a minute since I've played the first 2 movie games, I do remember some of these guys showing up in the previous titles. And unless I'm mistaken, there's at least some continuity between these games. Spider-Man seems to remember everyone he's fought before, and I caught him even making a reference to Mysterio from Game 2. He even recognizes Kraven the Hunter, who only appeared in an Xbox exclusive level in the first movie game. And it's kinda cool to see a character arc for the likes of Scorpion, who starts off looking stupid, then kinda cool near the end of his story. You know, the one where you have to invade Mrs. Doubtfire's giant mecha fortress off the coast of Manhattan. And even though they tease it in the movies, it's only in this game we finally see Dr. Kurt Connors become the Lizard. Granted, it's not a great story. It starts off with you taking pictures of a hot dog stand and Larry the Lizard, and your first encounter with the Lizard Man. Yeah, that one. It's not even Dr. Connors. I'm getting ahead of myself. There's a lot of story for a lot of the villains. Between the Kingpin, Scorpion, the Lizard, and this guy, it feels like 3 or 4 separate stories that could have been in their own games. Problem is, they're all kind of janky. You can tell this game was rushed, and it's not like it came from some inexperienced developer. This was made by Treyarch, and they would go on to become one of the most profitable developers in existence now that they're calling the duties. But here, yeah, the game needed a little more time in the oven. Or, in this case, the spider egg sack. You can see the jank everywhere in this game. The most famous of examples being these insane character models as demonstrated with JJ's best impression of the wacky inflatable tube man. And other janky headaches like that weird quick clip with every transition between the cutscenes, buttons not always reacting when you press them, fights looking like a hyperactive child smashing action figures together, the controls really not allowing for much in the way of precision, and the camera going to war with you anytime you're on a wall. These are all signs of a rushed product. And I do mean product. They slap on not 1, but 2 different officially branded Spider-Man merch logos at the top of this thing.
This gotta demand a refund on his security doors. They don't work.
Peter, I wouldn't be giving anyone any ideas about asking for refunds for a shoddy product. But the real offender are the boss fights. I've seen some other people complain about them, but guys, you just don't understand. There's so many sloppy decisions just put to... You know what? Let me just walk you through a mission to show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so in the Lizard storyline, you take Peter in the sewer. And by the way, get used to that because he's going to spend more time down here than the Ninja Turtles. What is this supposed to be? Where did that come from? Did that come from you? Did you make that? How did you make that? Game, how do you think reptiles reproduce? Is Larry the mother? Anyway, this particular mission sees you running into Kraven. And while this won't be your first experience with the tedium that are the bosses of this game, this one is particularly cruel, as you'll have to deal with the usual nonsense of slowly whittling down his health, but also deal with him anamorphing out of nowhere and making clones of himself. This fight takes forever. It's hard, and even though the game will throw health at you in the most random of places, there is none to be found here. If you die, you have to go through all of this sloppy nonsense from the start, and that's just the first fight of this mission. Yeah, you heard me right. This is the first boss battle of this mission. You then have to fight this idiot a second time, except now he goes invisible, and you also have to deal with Monster Men. And if you thought you were done there, oh no, you stupid baby. You then have to go up against, Godzilla. Well, that explains the mess in the sewers anyway. You have yet another tedious fight that not only rips off Mario 64's Bowser fights, but somehow makes them worse. You have to do this until you drop a shield, and then you continue to smack around this idiot until you're forced to do a quick dodge and just look at this mess. This guy will hop around on the walls and then lunge at you, giving you no time to move out of the way. So of course you use that slow motion spider sense, but look what happens! He was facing an entirely different direction. The game doesn't even hide that he's using a homing attack on you. And if you die, guess what? Gotta start all over again. These are 3 separate, multi-layered boss fights all in one mission. And that would almost be tolerable if this was the end of the game. But it's not. It's just the end of the Lizard story. And they will do this nonsense for everyone. Just one of these fights takes forever, slowly taking down the life bar while you have to do the same thing over and over again. You can do whatever a spider can, but most of the time you're just going to be figuring out what button combination you need to spam to survive a fight. Nothing is super well telegraphed, and all of them end with stupid QuickTime events. If you miss any, and you will, you're forced to do it over and over again, sometimes getting kicked back into the fight to whittle down the life bar yet again. Seriously, the sandstorm sequence moves so fast you actually have to know what button prompts are coming to even stand a chance. And even knowing what was ahead led to my death more than a few times. And you might be wondering why I haven't mentioned the black suit at any point prior to this. Well, that's because you play over half of the game before it's even introduced. And I'm going to take a second to complain about this because I don't know where else I'm going to get the chance. This is what you guys gave us for the black suit? Are you kidding me? I've waited my entire life to see the big screen debut of this thing, and all he did was dip it in ink. Like the suit change, the gameplay change is minimal with the new costume. There's a rage mode, and like everything else, it's not very well implemented. They do at least try to establish some gameplay elements. It will react horribly to sound waves in that lizard fight, and you need that rage mode to survive Kingpin. And when it's time to finally fight Venom, he does get substantially harder when he goes into a rage mode, and you need vibrations to make him vulnerable. And the thrill rides go from collecting hearts to scaring MJ as you swing around, going from cute little tricks to impress your girlfriend to the commands literally saying, do anything. Really, game? Anything? Alright, you asked for it. God, I'm a monster. This also changes the story as well. As you could see from my terrifying slow walk up to her apartment, MJ is freaked out by Peter. Spider-Man will become more aggressive with all these factions and characters he's spent all this time with, totally changing the tone set up by most of the game. Or, implied tone, anyway.
You've hardly said 3 words all night. Is everything all right?
I figured you were talking enough for both of us.
Peter, what's gotten into you lately?
Nothing that's stopping your gums from flapping wouldn't solve.
Peter, sweetie, we've talked about this. Is this a joke or are you actually angry? I can't tell. People give Tobey Maguire a lot of crap for phoning it in with this game. But going back to the movies, I mean, is he really?
Well, Pete's taking the subway. Don't mind us, she just needs to use the elevator.
Wait! Who are you?
You know who I am.
I do?
Your friendly neighborhood
Man, is that what you came here to play?
Don't you worry about it, Toby. You just save up all those emotions for that ugly crying at the end of the movie. I mean, none of these guys are really trying. But if you really want to hear phoning it in, look no further than Topher Grace. Let's take a look at this scene. Here, we see Eddie trying to frame Spider-Man with a crime. Spider-Man comes in and solves it by... Okay, I guess that works. So from there, Eddie gets really mad. Look at that! He's mirroring JJ's signature giant lizard moves.
Giant lizards!
He was just embarrassed by Spider-Man. Then he bellows out towards the dude in a fit of humiliation, rage, and... well, I mean, the dude's on the side of a building. You probably need to raise your voice if you want him to hear you. It's silly, but this is really telegraphing how mad this dude is. Now let's watch that again without my commentary.
Oh, you think you're smart, buddy? Well, think again. I hit a bunch of cameras around here, and now I have an even better shot than I was planning. You punching me in the jaw and taking my camera. So thanks.
These people get paid millions of dollars to act, folks. Oh, and did you know that Elizabeth Banks plays Betty Brant in the movies? Weird, right? Did you also know they brought her in to voice the character in the game? Just to put her character in the most flagrant display of workplace sexual harassment I have ever seen? Peter, what are you even doing? Are you trying to hump her arm? Thank goodness for J.K. Simmons. No matter how bad the movie or game, he always proves to be the standout character.
Parker! That's the 3rd call I got about giant lizards running amok in Gramercy Park. Giant lizards!
And of course, Bruce Campbell is back and as great as always.
Man, you sure do get hit a lot. You know, there's a handy dodge button you could be using to keep that pretty face of yours intact.
Thank goodness the wittiest person in a Spider-Man game is, the narrator. So yes, outside of JK, the movie cast really isn't bringing their A game. I didn't really lay out the movie plot because, well, the game doesn't either. The Sky takes a dump and the symbiote arrives on Earth, Flint Marko falls into a pit and becomes a cat litter incarnate, and Rita Repulsa unleashes her Green Ranger upon the world. And all that happens in a quick cutscene after the tutorial level of the game. You only get these portions as act closures once you deal with the missions pertaining to the other stuff I mentioned. And when we finally get back to it near the end of the game, we are introduced to Venom, who is thick. And look, I appreciate the effort here. They at least tried to bulk him out, even if the proportions are insane. His thighs would make Chun-Li jealous, and his giant head looks like it's one strong puff of wind from falling off the rest of his body. And they actually warp his voice.
Isn't this sweet? Just like in the movies.
Was that so hard to do, movie? Was it? And hey, look at that. They don't introduce the character with a punch in the face. He shows up and threatens Sandman's daughter to force the guy into fighting Spider-Man.
I mean, it all looks ridiculous, and if you think about any part of this for 2 seconds, it still doesn't make any sense. But it's a step above the movies in my eyes. And yes, I know, they give Harry absolutely no reason to give him a change of heart when he turns good. But sometimes, nothing is better than something. It's true the game doesn't really stand on its own. A lot of these plot points make zero sense without the context of the movie. It's almost as if this was a supplemental product that was made to make you go watch the movie. In terms of the game itself, the less of that mess of a plot, the better. I don't really need a dance-off minigame.
Now dig on this.
The other stories exclusive to the game are actually a little more fleshed out. And while Tobey isn't my favorite Spider-Man, I still like him, even when he's not trying that hard. He still made Spider-Man his own, and maybe he doesn't exactly fit the part to a lot of people who expected Jake Johnson to be Spider-Man. It's fine for what it is. I actually had a little more fun with what was essentially the extended universe of the Raimi films. We never got to see their version of the Lizard, Kraven, Scorpion, or Kingpin. And I appreciate when the movie tie-ins don't allow just any character to be used. They had characters they probably knew would never be in a starring role. Maybe that wouldn't have been the case if Raimi kept making movies, but I appreciate the attempt at continuity. That's why you didn't see Venom or Carnage in the first movie game, because that was Goblin's story. And throwing in more popular characters wouldn't make any sense. It would just muddle continuity and outshine the main villain. Anyway, yeah, that was Spider-Man 3 for the 360. It's a rush mess with a lot of missed potential, and with more than a couple of aggravating moments. It's still playable, and the web swinging is still solid, but unless you're attached to the movies, I'd probably just play Web of Shadows instead. Alright, that's one down, and oh god. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on the remaining Treyarch games. You got the general idea from this one entry, but there are differences. The PC and PS3 versions are the exact same game. The only differences are, well, with the PC one, you can play with a keyboard if you hate yourself that much, and the PS3 got a special edition that has some behind-the-scenes videos, and it allows you to unlock and play the new Goblin instead of just that quick little jaunt you got at the end of the game. And it's not bad. I appreciated the original movie game allowing you to unlock and play the Green Goblin, so it kinda stinks that this was relegated to a console exclusive, and since he was already programmed in the other versions of the game, and considering this game is kind of a mess, I would have been pretty annoyed paying full price for this thing. As it stands these days, you can download him as DLC on the 360 version, and yeah, I don't know, it's fine. I like the black slipcase anyway. Those differences are really about it when it comes to the HD versions of Spider-Man 3. We don't start seeing massive changes until we jump over to the PS2, PSP, and Wii versions of the game. All these versions were developed by Vicarious Visions. The basic structure is still here. Open world action game loosely following the plot of the movie as well as incorporating extra elements. A lot of the missions play out relatively similar with some tiny differences. For instance, instead of swinging around grabbing hearts with Mary Jane, you will instead just throw her over your shoulder like a used towel and give her a front seat to your spider hams.
Wow, this is a great way to see the city. You should start charging tourists for rides.
Game, you started this web swinging mission in the middle of Central Park. What did you
This is worse than a roller coaster.
Well, okay, MJ, since you're having such a ball, I guess we'll just keep doing it like this.
Come on in, Spider-Man.
These guys have a very weird relationship. It even reuses cutscenes from the HD version, but only sometimes. They made their own cutscenes for these versions of the game for the exclusive stuff, but also to recreate stuff we've already seen in the HD game.
Giant lizards!
So, I don't know why they doubled up on some, but not others. You also get some different villains this time around, including Morbius and Shriek, as well as some returning favorites like... Still don't care who this guy is. While the story and basic idea are mostly the same, there are some significant differences in the gameplay. There are now sections of the city controlled by different gangs, and you can see everyone's territories and who's encroaching on other people's territories, and help cops take back control of the city. You also now unlock new moves on this cute little web display in whatever order you choose to level up. It's still not super well defined, but definitely a better implementation compared to the HD counterpart. And you get the black suit just after a few missions, and it allows you to swap between the two costumes at any time, provided that you can't be in the black suit for too long, and you're required a cooldown time before you're allowed to put it back on. I also noticed this game doesn't really jank out anywhere near as much as the other version. But don't you worry, it's still there. Now this version of New York might have little to no people or vehicles, but here's a man in a onesie taking a dump in the middle of Times Square, so really this is a much more authentic experience than any other game out there. I feel like there's a lot less jank here because, well, there's just a lot less going on here in general. Yeah, they have some ideas that deviate away from the HD versions, but the PS2 version feels stripped down, even compared to Spider-Man 2. I mean, just look how this dude swings. He looks like a dead spider. That said, I was far less furious playing these versions of the game, and Bruce is actually funnier here.
Feeling lost? Need direction? Well, you could join a cult, or just use the handy point of interest markers that appear on the screen to help show you where to go.
And this version has a little more of that cheesy charm found from 2. Plus, new cutscenes means more Jonah.
Giant lizard.
And look at this!
All those tests and nothing!
Did you hear that? He's actually emoting. Good for you, buddy. Looking at the cutscenes, it feels like they just scripted a bunch of stuff and then cut it up for the different versions of the game. The story still isn't perfect, but here at least we see a little more of that transition into Peter's dark side. And I guess there's actual emotion here. Who knew? Ultimately, yeah, overall it's a lesser game, but better in smart little spots. So what differences can be found between the versions developed by Vicarious Visions? Well, the PS2 one has you use buttons like a sane person would expect, and the Wii one, of course, has waggle. You shake the stupid thing around for QuickTime events, you shake it around for combat, and you waggle for web swinging. But on that particular note, I actually want to contend with a lot of complaints people have. The web swinging isn't perfect, but I honestly found it very enjoyable. You have to use the nunchuck and Wiimote as your left and right web shooters, clicking a button on each to get the guy swinging. And for the most part, it's a lot of fun. It takes a little practice, and the rest of the game around it isn't great, and like everything else, it could have used a little more fine-tuning. But for what it is, honestly, if motion control web swinging sounds as cool to you as it does for me, I'd track down this version of the game for that alone. And the PSP version, I gotta admit, I'm really impressed with this version of the game. Again, you're stuck with bland and kinda janky missions, but this was open world web swinging on the PSP. Might not be as novel today as it was back then, but making this game portable was seriously impressive. But hey, that's not all, kids. Did you want some more garbage on the go? Then look no further than the Nintendo DS version of the game. There's a reason people don't talk about this version, and that's because, well, there's just not a whole lot to talk about. It's your standard beat-em-up game, but like everything Nintendo of that time, they just had to implement the gimmicks the machine was famous for. And in this case, it's the touchscreen. You use it for combat and for putting people in webs, and man, it's fine. Yeah, I don't know. It's a safe, generic side-scroller that's taken down a notch thanks to this ridiculous touchscreen. Would I call it bad? Absolutely not. I just can't pretend to care either. The GBA version is another standard beat-em-up, and again, it's competent, and if you were a kid, this would certainly entertain you just fine. But personally, I found this a little disappointing. See, the first 2 GBA movie games actually tried something different. Far from perfect games, but they had highly animated sprites, comic-style sound effect words upon impact, and the second game got really bold with this 3D hub world. I mean, it didn't play great, but the ambition was commendable. 3 uses that ugly standard pre-rendered nonsense you saw in games like this. It plays similar to the other ones. You beat up crooks as you run around a maze-like level marking off checklists, but really we have more than our fair share of okay-ish Spider-Man platformers. I don't know. I just wish they had kept that gorgeous sprite art from the first 2 games. This one doesn't do anything to stand out. Again, it's perfectly competent, but again, not a lot to talk about. That's it, guys. There's some LCD things with cute gimmicks, but I can't. I'm at my limit. I'm done with this nonsense. It's finally time to play a good Spider-Man game. Yes! There we go. Insomniac Spider-Man will wash the bad taste of 3 with some refreshing new ideas that make sense for the wall crawler. Like the quick time events, or random nonsense mini games that break the flow of the game. Well, at least the side quest makes sense. Is he chasing a pigeon? Pete, I know money's tight, but come on, man. We have to draw the line some. Oh, God! You know, there's a lot of the older Spidey games in this new one. Some things I could do without, but others, well, it makes me wonder what 3 could have been with the proper time and budget. Because seriously, the new Spidey is probably the best this series has ever been. And that's saying something because we've had some amazing games, and some of those ideas started here. Unlike what I normally do in this show, I have spent most of this episode making fun of these games. I really don't recommend playing this stuff back to back. It gets to you. Like the movie it's based on, I don't like these games. Everything about this movie offended me when it first came out. I had dressed up as a black suit Spider-Man for the premiere, and by the end of the screening I was screaming, "Somebody give me a bell tower!" This is the first time I'm looking at something I genuinely hated when it first released, and the age doesn't help matters. But I know a lot of people really like this game, and I was wondering why. But then I realized this stuff's 11 years old at the time of this video. It's old enough now that people can say, I played this as a kid. Still, something about these games latched onto the hearts of people. You psychopaths genuinely love this movie and all of its nonsense. And you know what? I think I kinda get it. There's a reason why 3 has so many memes these days. And yeah, both the movie and games are hilarious and awkward. While I used to think it was unintentional, looking back on it now, I have to wonder if that was the case. There's an undeniable quirky charm to some of this nonsense, and it's certainly memorable. And despite some horribly frustrating fights, I did actually have a good deal of fun, especially with the web swinging. My beloved Spider-Man 2 and Ultimate Spider-Man just don't have the same sense of scale that 3 provides in the HD version. And honestly, I love looking at the collector's edition on my shelf. It's just pretty. And I genuinely recommend you try out the Wii version, if only for the web swinging. Seriously, that's what inspired me to do this video at all. I almost based it solely on this mechanic. I don't know why this wasn't tackled again or made into its own Wii game. Again, it's not perfect, and the remaining game isn't great, but if you're a Spider fan, I highly recommend at least giving it a try. And yeah, the PSP version blew me away. The web swinging is seriously fun, and it's great to have this on the go. Does this game hold up? No. And honestly, if you don't care about the movie connection, if you want to play a good Spidey game with the black suit, you just play Web of Shadows. And if you just want a good Spidey game in general, well, go out and buy the PS4 version. But now that I have 8 different copies of this one title on my shelf, I can't say I hate these games anymore. And yeah, found myself actually recommending some experiences you just can't find anywhere else in the series. Whether you're playing it ironically, out of nostalgia, or you're just morbidly curious, Spider-Man 3, while far from great, had a lot of talent behind this project. And no matter the circumstances, every now and then, that talent shines through. Toot toot, web warriors.
There's something real creepy about you, pal. You want to get weird? Let's get weird. You got a nice face. An anger problem? Living with them? Are you kidding me? It's frustrating. It's like, just get a job. I like your hat. I like how it's not a team or a logo, it's just blue. Would you rather be covered in fish scales or feathers? Scales? Why, you weirdo? You want to see me jump really high? I'm afraid of dying, man. Who am I? The enemy is enemy. The enemy is the inner me. Do you understand a word I'm saying? You just nodded everything. I need to change, and you showed me that. I have an anger problem. Thank you. Can I get a hug?
Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. Now, by most accounts, the game in question today, Jurassic World Evolution, is not a bad game. It is a park simulator where you get to build your own Jurassic World across 5 islands with the goal to get the coveted 5-star rating as you build enclosures for your ancient animals while you do your best to appease guests and your 3 heads of security, science, and entertainment. Each island you unlock will escalate in challenge, be it by using a limited budget, or space, or bad weather conditions, or a combination of any of those issues. Your path through the islands will be narrated by none other than Jeff Goldblum and some other special guests. And while it's a known fact that everything is better with Jeff Goldblum, even when he's in a video game telling you to stop playing the video game,
I got the stink blowing off here.
The real stars of the game are, of course, the dinosaurs. The game features nearly 50 species of dinosaur if you include the bonus Fallen Kingdom species and the deluxe edition. And in the world of DLC, who knows what the final count will actually be when Frontier is done with it. If you're not familiar with that name, Frontier has a long history with park games, including Planet Coaster, Zoo Tycoon, that Connect Disneyland game, a bunch of roller coaster tycoons, and of course, A Dog's Life.
If I go,
looks like you wanted left, right, down.
Yeah, left, right, down.
Oh!
Bam.
I got the stink blowing off here.
What makes Evolution so exciting for me was not only the use of the license, as I am a huge Jurassic Park fan, but also because this sounded a lot like Jurassic Park Operation Genesis, a park builder about 15 years old at this point that seemed to inspire a lot of Evolution. I never thought we'd get another game like this, partially because those tacky mobile building games seem to be where all the real money's being made, and because I never thought anyone actually remembered Operation Genesis. And that seemed more apparent as a lot of the larger outlets covering this game were acting like Evolution was Jurassic Park's first real attempt at the genre, when in fact they've been at this for a better part of 2 decades now. But as I found out with just a little digging, there's a surprisingly large cult fan base for Operation Genesis, and some rather prominent YouTubers still giving that game a lot of love. We'll get in more detail about that particular game when I cover in its own episode, but I bring all of this up because, as a fan of Operation Genesis, the first thing I wanted to know when going into Evolution was how similar the 2 games actually are. And as it turns out, they are very similar, which has its pros and cons. But for the most part, this is a good thing. The most biased of reasons being, I like Operation Genesis. And while it's been a minute since I played that game, Evolution proves to me that the basic gameplay mechanics, while not perfect, are still a lot of fun and hold up very well. And it looks like a lot of people agree. By most accounts, this game is getting solid reviews. By most accounts. You see, if you go to IGN's review, wow. Yikes. Alright, so like I said, the general buzz from critics and gamers will tell you that this is a good game. So really, Evolution has no justifiable reason to be on this show. One guy's review doesn't mean all that much. Except when it does. See, if you do a quick Google search of Jurassic World Evolution, here's the very first thing you're gonna see. Yep. The only review that pops up is IGN's 4.8 out of 10. Granted, you have the Steam average right next to it, but the only official review that Google seems to care about is this 4.8, which, while hardly the average, rubs me the wrong way. To be completely fair, I have to imagine a lot of the editors and reviewers at IGN have to be pulling their hair out with nonsense like this. Are they paid off shills, or are their honest opinions just garbage? When it comes to IGN, a lot of gamers just want to be mad at the website, as I'm sure my comment section will show. It's a no-win scenario for these guys, and I get that, but I'm still gonna complain. I'm torn about this review. Yes, I want some honest opinions, but this is from the largest gaming site on the planet. These stupid little numbers matter more from these guys than just about anywhere else. And while I'm a little nobody on YouTube with no professional review experience and a very obvious fan of this particular franchise, I'd like to think I'm a rational, even-tempered adult, so I can put my personal passions aside, look at this game for what it is, read this review, and comfortably respond with,
"Why don't you like my dinosaur game, damn?"
I've taken a couple of shots at IGN before on my show, but I should make it absolutely clear. I like IGN just fine. I like a lot of their former and current employees. Not that one. And yeah, maybe this isn't the best time to be bringing up a review score when they have much more serious crap to deal with, but I don't know. I have a lot of respect for this website and the reviewers and Dan Stapleton, the guy who reviewed the game. I don't want to be hung up on nonsense that doesn't really matter to what I want to talk about. I tell you all of this because I need to stress that I have no personal grudge against the guy who reviewed the game for their site. But to be completely upfront, just about any time I've come across his work, I usually don't agree with his opinions, or at the very least, how he goes about presenting said opinions. And I have found myself on more than a couple of occasions, not angry, certainly slightly annoyed, and definitely wanting to debate this guy. Be it with that whole Prey thing, that Angry Joe Twitter thing, or using IGN as a platform to complain about Bloodborne for 2 pages. And yeah, actually, let's get into a little more detail there. Look, again, I'm a nobody. My channel's not about exhausting internet drama, but to understand the point I want to make, we need to clarify this Bloodborne article. It's simply this. In March of 2015, Dan published an opinion piece on why Bloodborne, a game well known for its difficulty, wasn't grabbing him. As you can imagine, with a game that has such a rabid following, this piece wasn't taken to very well. And honestly, it didn't sit well with me either. But not because he didn't like the game. It really sticks out for me because while he didn't review the game, he had to be sure everybody visiting IGN knew that he didn't like it anyway. I read through the piece and I was understanding what he was trying to say about it, but honestly, it just felt like he just wanted to rain on other people's parades. He just wanted to go against the popular opinion. He just wanted to complain. And the guy knows he has unpopular opinions. I mean, look at the banner on his Twitter page. And that's fine. I mean, look at the name of this show. But I'm not the executive editor of reviews at IGN. These stupid little numbers that he argues with everyone over make a huge difference. And the way he presents himself, at least in the admittingly limited amount of pieces I've read from him, it seems like he expects the games to cater to his established preferences as opposed to adapting to the playstyle presented by the game itself. I mean, he basically says it right there at the top of the article. Just because you say you come in with an open mind doesn't mean you actually did. You still went out of your way to complain about a game that's just not for you. Again, he's entitled to his own opinion, but he knows the audience that IGN grabs. I mean, they have 10 million subscribers on YouTube alone. Who knows how many people's first impressions of this game were this article? He starts off with a full paragraph building up his defenses against the fans of this game, but he makes it sound like the game is going to be miserable for every new player of Bloodborne. We get that not every game is for everyone, but it feels like he's just actively playing contrarian. And yeah, I know I'm being a total hypocrite here. I mean, just look at my Breath of the Wild video. But to be completely fair, I was mostly whining about the cuts to the Wii U version. That's still probably my favorite Zelda game. And again, I don't work at IGN. They can say on their podcasts or Twitter on how people need to read multiple reviews or stick with personalities that they can associate with and all this other nonsense, but let's be brutally honest with ourselves and each other. You're basically asking people to do your job for themselves. Yeah, I agree, it's good to look at multiple sources before you make a purchase. That's just smart buying. But you're kind of undermining the entire point of these stupid numbers for your reviews. Again, I know this is a tricky rope to walk. This is why I'm so torn about this entire thing. When most people read the reviews from IGN, they think of the review as IGN. They think of it as a singular entity. When you review something for that site, you're telling your audience, this is the general opinion of all of IGN. This is the number we deem worthy for this game. You carry those 3 letters with every score you place. and I'm sure those letters can sway sales. Again, yes, people should do research before buying a game, but not everybody's a huge gamer. Some of these folks are just Jurassic Park fans with very little gaming experience. Not everybody is a huge gamer spending hours upon hours reading into this stuff. Yes, I know I'm making huge assumptions, but these guys make a living off sharing their opinions. If these numbers didn't matter, Dan wouldn't argue over the decimal points. You say games only get one chance to make a first impression, well, what do you think these review numbers are? That's why I'm so laser focused on Dan's review. There are other professionals out there with similar opinions to his, but they're in the minority, and they're not working for IGN. All the same, I appreciate the honesty, but let's trade a little more brutal honesty. If it sounds like I'm saying some opinions matter more than others, it's because, yeah, some opinions matter more than other opinions, especially in a field where you get paid to share your opinions. And to be completely fair, I've come into this game wanting it to be good. I mean, I platinumed this thing for crying out loud. I wouldn't even be making this video if I didn't have some love for this game, but I still appreciate different opinions from my own. I like being able to look at something from a completely different perspective. I like being able to say, never thought of it that way. And Dan's review is not without merit. There are problems here. So let's take a look at some of his complaints, and let me share some of my own while we're at it.
That is one big pile of shit.
The main takeaway from Stapleton's review for me was, I'm bored. He seems to complain a lot about the game making you wait. And yeah, the game will make you wait. You have to wait for fossils to be unearthed, science to be researched, buildings to be constructed, dinosaurs to be raised. Yeah, there's going to be a wait time on all the big things in this game. On top of that, Stapleton compared the dig sites to loot boxes, and I can see where he's drawing the similarities. The dig sites will list what type of dinosaurs you can find in the area, but gives you no control outside of that as far as choosing what type of dinosaurs you're going to unearth. And he also points out that the game does not feature a fast forward feature, something fairly prominent in a builder game. And while he didn't have much issue with the placement of buildings or moderating terrain, I personally found that a little annoying. Nothing terrible, but I wish the game would have been a little more automated. Just line this building up with my road a little nicer. Don't make me jump into an entirely different tool set to even out a bump in a hill. Stapleton also points out the lack of care on the human side of the park, and I took notice of this as well. In Operation Genesis, you had different types of guests to appease, had a little more variety in styling the park, and it required you to hire cleaners to maintain upkeep. Evolution has none of that. And if you're coming into this game expecting a deeper business sim experience, well, it's pretty shallow on that end of things. Here you have to do your best to basically make the traveling between attractions as convenient as possible. Dan actually cheats the system a bit, pointing out how easy it is to manage this aspect of the game, and on that front I agree. Considering that placement is such a huge focus on appeasing the guests, you're likely going to be seeing a lot of similar looking parks between multiple players. The focus is split down the middle between pleasing the guests and pleasing the dinosaurs, and a little more care should have been given to the patrons of the park. That said, the major focus is obviously on the dinosaurs, and yes, here I have found a couple of issues. First and most obvious to me is anything with a long neck freaking out about not having enough trees around it when it gets too close to a wall of an enclosure. You have to keep your dinosaur's comfort level up by paying attention to its needs, which include how many other dinos it's comfortable around, both within its own species and just in general, how much grassland and forest it has to romp around in, and yeah, they can get a little finicky about it regardless of how much stuff you deck out within its walls. You're going to very quickly discover which dinosaurs you favor and which ones you wish you had just left in the ground. That's another thing too. You won't get the stats of a dinosaur until you make said dinosaur. So when you get a brand new animal, you could be releasing it into an environment completely wrong for its happiness. And considering you have a delicate ecosystem to maintain, this means you're less likely to take risks on unknown species when you already have known quantities and can build around their specific needs. And while you are given the option to tamper with the genetics of each dinosaur, I honestly found zero need for it outside of appeasing missions. Yeah, you can raise the popularity on a dinosaur if you mess around with its genes, but even then the base versions will get you a 5-star just fine, and the different skins of each dinosaur are somewhat lackluster. Any Jurassic Park fan is going to notice the lack of the iconic colorations of the velociraptors. Where are my Lost World tiger stripes? Though to be completely fair, that's the male version of the original Jurassic Park raptors, and if all these animals are female, then that makes sense. But where are my Jurassic Park 3 white raptors? Come on! Well, at the very least they included my favorite dinosaur, the Deinonychus. What did you do to my dinosaur? What is that thing on its head? Ugh. Oh well, I'm sure if I modify the genetics a little bit, I can make it teal. So yes, this game has problems. And if the review ended here, one could make the conclusion that this is a bad game. But this is the Game Apologist, and we go through the bad before we get to the good. And while it takes a while to complain about these issues, I wouldn't have platinumed this game if it wasn't a good time. It's just not a perfect time. And while I don't end my review here, this is basically where Stapleton's ends. Alright, let's get to the good.
Welcome to Jurassic World.
I think it's important to understand that most people generally feel this game is between a 6 or 8 out of 10. And I think I'd agree. The game could use some work. It feels kind of rushed like most licensed properties tend to be, but what is here is genuinely fun and a great basis for a much meatier sequel. And while I'm sure more seasoned gamers of this genre can nitpick this to death, for me, well, I'll be honest with you guys. Operation Genesis worked for me because I was here for the dinosaurs first. So having a simple to understand sim mechanic was basically all I wanted. And Evolution is just that. It's baby's first park sim without having to hug Mickey Mouse. What I'm basically saying is, it's really easy to get into without making you feel like a stupid child. The dinosaurs are first and everything else is secondary, and I am perfectly fine with that. Especially since this genre had to work well on a console. As meticulous and overwhelming as these particular games can get, normally it's best to do things with a mouse and keyboard. Thankfully, playing through with a DualShock 4 was a fantastic, streamlined, and easy to control experience. Considering the limitations of both the amount of time to develop and the controller, I'm thoroughly impressed with the game that they gave us. And that's not to say anyone should take it easy on a game because it was rushed. You still have to review the product that you're gonna have to spend $60 on. This is more me saying, I'd love to see what these guys could do with a little more time and a bigger budget, because what they gave us is pretty solid. Let's address some of Dan's complaints directly before we go anywhere else. No, dig sites are not loot boxes. It's true you do not have complete control over what you dig up, but I mean, do actual paleontologists know exactly what fossils they're digging up? And it's nowhere near as random as he makes it out to be. You pick a site, you really only have a handful of animals to unearth, and when it's a brand new species, the game is very quick to give you the DNA percentage you need to bring that animal to life. You don't even need to get it to 100%. It'll unlock more genetic tomfoolery and longer lifespans, but that's not exactly required. And if you have 100% DNA of one animal, but you're lacking in another, the game will focus on the animal you don't have. You're going to get what you want very quickly. The waiting is nowhere near as tedious as the IGN review will make you believe. The way he presents the waiting and then compares it to mobile phones, while understandable, is far from fair in my eyes. See, mobile games, and I can think of Jurassic Park Builder as a perfect example, only give you 1 or 2 things to do and then make you wait as a means to goad you into spending actual cash to speed up the process. They'll keep wait times relatively short at first, but the further you get into the game, the more time you have to spend waiting, and the more actual cash you need to put down to get the limited time unlocks or some other such crap. Evolution has no in-game purchases, so this is obviously not why the game puts wait times on dig sites and dinosaurs. The wait time is here because you don't get to sort out your problems with a quick click of a button. You have too little of one type of dinosaur in your enclosure? Well, you're gonna have to wait a couple minutes to get another one made. If an animal gets stressed out and breaks out of its enclosure, that's on you for not paying attention to its needs. This is the exact same system from Operation Genesis. And yeah, you'll notice the wait time at the very start of an island when you have little else to work with, but even then it's a couple minutes at most. It actually works in reverse of a mobile game, because as you unlock more stuff, you're not even going to notice the wait times. The game never extends the wait times based on a level or any kind of nonsense like that. As the park gets built, you're barely going to notice any wait times unless you're solely focused on getting a dinosaur out in time before one of its brethren freak out due to your negligence. I can't count how many times I've honestly forgotten to resend out a dig team or release a dinosaur because I had so much else to do, and a fast forward button would break that system. Some challenges require you to maintain something for a few minutes. You don't just get to zip through them. And besides all that, you always have contracts to fill your time which help you focus on particular things in your park which you might not have noticed before. And yes, as Dan points out in his review, some of these contracts don't give out as much money as it would cost to finish said contracts. As he points out, some missions require you to sell certain dinosaurs, and if you don't have said dinosaur, you have to pay money to get it made. Sometimes it costs more money to breed a dinosaur than it is to sell said dinosaur, but money is normally only an issue at the very start of any of your parks. It doesn't stay a problem for very long. I've never seen the game ask me for these contracts while I was still broke. It could have just been luck, but you don't actually need to fulfill these contracts. You can just scrap it and try for another one. And while we're on the subject, I actually like these contracts quite a bit. It gives you something more to do outside of maintaining your 5 islands. But like everything else in the game, you need to be paying attention to how much love you're giving to any one of your factions. Otherwise you risk a sabotage. And while it's usually just a slight annoyance, if you ever get one of those lovely open all the gates sabotages, well, you're gonna have your hands full for a minute. Things can very quickly take a turn for the worse if you're not paying attention. One little thing can very quickly snowball into a whole slew of new problems. And sometimes, in the case of tornadoes, all you can really do is react as quickly as possible. And while I can see that as a complaint, I feel like that's just part of the challenge. Operation Genesis definitely has some pros compared to Evolution, but I very rarely had any issues maintaining a park in Operation Genesis. Sabotage and chaos are inherently a part of the Jurassic franchise. And I mean, come on, they even have Ian Malkin rambling about out chaos the entire way through this entry. It's part of the challenge of maintaining these parks. It's true, you don't get to know every little thing about an animal before you bring it back from the dead, but that's part of the risk. It's even part of the novels. In the books, they had no idea what they were bringing back to life until they brought it back to life. And yeah, I know the ultimate point of the book is to say that this is a bad idea, but these guys have a game to make. So yes, eventually, Malcolm's gonna be like,
way to go, way to go.
I guess I'm saying I appreciate that this is where the challenge comes from. Maybe there's not much of a narrative here, but I really don't know what you'd be expecting from a park sim. I think it's clear that with the limitations in place, Frontier decided to focus as much energy as possible into the dinosaurs themselves. Therefore, that's where most of the challenge lies, making sure that they're happy and don't break out and go on a killing spree. But even when they do, it's kind of awesome. I feel like the game gives you plenty to do, but at the same time, I have to agree with the critics. There could be more. But the lack of fountains isn't going to make this a bad game. I'm not here to competitively price my hamburgers. I'm here for the dinosaurs. Complaining about the lack of a fast forward button or waiting a little while to grow a Gallimimus just makes me feel like this game reviewer was trying to hit a deadline and slap a number on this webpage. What I love to do in Operation Genesis, and something I wanted more than anything else from Evolution, was being able to take a break from the management for a little bit and just watch these animals. See how they interact with their environment and with others. Watching them run out of the hatchery for the first time. See who would win in a fight between different species. And just lose track of time enjoying some of the most impressive dinosaurs in gaming. And it's here where the game excels. I'll be honest with you guys, I don't play a lot of sim games. It's not exactly a pick up and play genre, but Evolution is as close as that's going to get. It's easy to understand, it doesn't overwhelm you with things to learn, and while it's not perfect, it's still plenty addictive. This game has a lot of potential, and maybe it's not where a lot of people wanted it to be. If you don't like the base gameplay, I don't know how adding on to it will change an opinion. That 4.8 sticks with me because it's not just Stapleton saying it's bad, it's IGN saying that this is a bad game. Not an okay game, not even a mediocre game, but a bad game. His particular review feels mean-spirited, and considering what I have seen from this guy, doesn't feel very professional. It looks like he's just doing his best to cram in movie quotes as jabs where he can.
There is no need to, as Samuel L. Jackson once famously recommended, hold on to your butts. There's never a must go faster moment. After careful consideration, I've decided not to endorse this park.
It's the type of review you'd expect from an early 90s video game magazine. Doesn't mean he's wrong? Yes. No, it doesn't. He's entitled to his own opinion, but I guess I just have more of a problem where his opinion is being placed. I wouldn't give a crap about Stapleton's opinion, but the podium he stands on to declare it reaches a much greater audience than I ever will. I'm not saying I want him to change the review or lie about how he feels about this game. And again, trust me, I get playing the contrarian. But when you're the executive editor of the single largest gaming site on the planet, I could use a little less pessimism, or be just a little less condescending when speaking to your fans or people arguing with you on these games. I'm not going to IGN to get an outspoken voice. I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm there to get the baseline, general, safe opinion on that game. Maybe that's hypocritical, but that's how I feel. Again, I'm kind of torn about this entire thing. I don't know if I really have a solution here. This review rubs me the wrong way, but I'm not exactly calling for the guy's job. And if I ever ran into him in real life, I'd look him right in the eye and say, isn't it great that we can have debates and discussions with different opinions over a medium we both share a passion for? My problem isn't really with Dan, and it isn't really with his review. I guess my biggest problem is where that stupid 4.8 is sitting. So maybe I should be complaining to Google, I don't know. I guess I'm just doing what he's doing, using my platform to share my opinion. And if for some reason you happen to come across this video after you've decided to give this game a pass because of what you read on IGN, I'd reconsider it if I were you. It's okay to expect more and expect better, especially from Frontier. But as a fan of Jurassic Park who doesn't dabble a whole lot in the genre, there is just enough here to keep me engaged without making me feel overwhelmed. And while not perfect, it's a lot of fun. And if you're here for the dinosaurs, well, you won't be disappointed. But hey, that's just my opinion.
Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives. And I think it's time to draw the line. I know that one place parents want us to draw the line is with violence in video games.
On December 9th, 1993, the United States Senate held a hearing discussing violence in video games. As the medium began shifting ever closer to realism, so too did its depiction of graphic content. Senator Lieberman would lead the charge against the likes of Nintendo and Sega, demanding to know why such a thing would ever be allowed in the hands of children. The senator would use two games as examples of the extreme nature of violence available to the influential minds of children everywhere, one of which was Mortal Kombat, well noted for its extreme violence. And the other...
The second game is Night Trap, which is a game set in a sorority house. The object is to keep hooded men from hanging the young woman from a hook or drilling their necks with a tool designed to drain their blood. Night Trap uses actual actors and achieves an unprecedented level of realism. What is particularly troubling about the scene in this film that we have an extract of is a graphic depiction of the violence against women with strong overtones of sexual violence. I find this segment deeply offensive and believe that it simply should be taken off the market.
I must advise discretion before we go forward. What you're about to see is a scene that would help change the industry forever.
Megan, this isn't gonna work. You're not scaring me. Wait. What are you doing? No!
Yeah, that was it. Seriously, it was that scene that caused such an uproar about this game. This is what United States senators showed up to talk about. And, well, that's what we're talking about today. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. If you know anything about video game history, you'd know about Night Trap. Like I shared at the start of the video, this game, along with the likes of Mortal Kombat and Doom, were used as scapegoats to show how violent video games had become. But as you can clearly see, that violence is a bit overblown. All the same, this newfound attention to the title quickly catapulted from yet another FMV game on the Sega CD into a cult favorite. So much so that it warranted a 25th anniversary edition. And if you don't know what FMV stands for, well, it stands for full motion video. And those were all the rage back in the 90s. And by all the rage, I mean video game companies were trying to make it all the rage. You'd see these things all over the likes of Sega CD. And, well, we all know how well that played out. It was a cool gimmick, but most of us weren't here to watch crappy videos. We wanted to play games. Because that's really all these things were. They're just a video playing out with an on-screen prompt appearing every now and then. React fast enough to keep the video going, or miss it and see a shoddily edited failure screen pop up. Most of these were just QuickTime events. They just demand you to pay attention to a terrible movie.
Don't you love the smell of the sewers in the morning? They smell like victory!
And Night Trap is undoubtedly one of the most famous FMV games to ever be created. But once you get past the Senate hearings, is there anything worthwhile in the game itself? Well, that's what we're here to find. Oh boy, we're just jumping into this, aren't we? So let's say, like me, you just start this game without really understanding it. I mean, you've heard of it, you know about the Senate hearings, you think you know how FMV games work, you've seen silly clips of it every now and again, but you don't really know what it's about. Alright, we got the game, let's not waste any time and jump right in. Huh, that logo, looks familiar. We start off with a magic man made of white noise maniacally laughing as he traps teenagers who could, very easily move out of the way of that thing. Okay, just, alright. You gonna help him? You're okay. Sorry, Brad, it wasn't working out. Bye! We then transition away to a SWAT team who tells us that teenagers have been disappearing from a resort and they had tapped into a security feed of the winery on the grounds. Well, winery and traps, that's the whole thing. They've also sent in an undercover agent to go figure out what's going on. Even though you already have access to the cameras, you got guns, or just, sure, fine, whatever. I'm sure you know what you're doing. What do you guys call yourselves?
I'm Sims, Scat Team Commander.
What?
Scat Mission 230.
Maybe Mr. Lieberman was actually onto something.
I'm a scat man!
So, what? Why are you looking at me? Oh, I'm not comfortable with this. All right, well, we're on our way, and, let's see here. No instructions for anything. Let's It's fine, whatever. It's just an FMV game. There can't be that much to do. Let's figure this out. All right, so I'm just clicking around and, all right, so you can swap between the different cameras of the winery. Okay, easy enough. And there's these walking trash bags, and clicking them doesn't do anything. I mean, are they supposed to be here? That light keeps blinking at me. I don't think they're supposed to be here. What's this do? Is it an option to change the colors of the color? What is this? Hang on, what's this girl doing? Okay, never mind. And then there's this, what? Am I watching a sitcom? What is this? Okay, then there are more of these guys. I feel like there are too many of these guys. Shouldn't I be able to do something? I feel like I should be able to do something. Okay, and then here comes a car full of children singing Row Your Boat. Or, sorry, teenagers singing Row Your Boat. What? Okay, more of these guys. Okay. Game, calm down. There are too many things happening at once here. What am I supposed to focus on? What? Are they singing the theme song to the game? Here come more of the trash boys. You could probably just move around them, or, well, you kind of just let that happen. But, wait, what? But, what? Okay, well, that was confusing. Well, turns out I should have been a little more patient and paid attention to the main menu. There are instructions right here. If you're playing with a mouse like I was, you need to use the left click to swap between cameras and the right click to activate traps. You need to keep your eye on this little green blinking light, which will change yellow when an auger, these guys, are nearing a trap, and then click when it turns red to activate the trap. And these colors represent a house code. You need to be on the correct corresponding color to activate the traps, otherwise they won't work. You need to pay attention to these family members as they'll occasionally announce when they're changing the code out. It's all silly and contrived, but whatever, we got a game here. Easy enough. So let's hop back in with knowledge on our side, and we'll just blast through this. Hang on, what? Oh, there's a guy over, wait, no, what? Stop, calm down. What is happening? How am I even more confused when I know what I'm doing? This game is a nightmare. If you are focused on capturing augers, you're not going to get any of the story, as they'll keep swarming this house constantly, forcing you to swap away from whatever narrative is happening. So things just keep happening and you'll have no idea what's going on. And you can't even rely on the same traps. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. You have to wait for the exact specific time and location predetermined by the game, which really sucks because there'll be multiple augers in multiple rooms, so if you focus on some that you just can't capture, you'll miss the ones you can. At one point, there was only a literal second between opportunities to capture an auger in one room and one in the other. There is no variation, and there are no second chances. Miss too many, and the Scatman pops back up and sends you right back to the start of the game. On top of all this, you're likely going to be missing the rare prompts to switch over color codes.
I'd feel better if we switched the code again to green.
And let me tell you how fun it is trying to figure out what color to use when you're trying to trap these idiots. The only way to get better is to play this over and over and over. You can capture augers or get more story. You can't do both. So if you're playing this game well, or at least with the intention of winning, the game becomes an insane mess. This is what it's going to look like during a good playthrough. So you better get used to hearing this stupid theme for 25 minutes. Even when you're doing a solid job, the game pulls some real cheap curveballs, letting you capture the teenagers or scat members and giving you an instant game over where you get to do it all over again. Even following online guides led me to failure. This game rarely gives you a second to breathe. So, obviously, this game was not designed to be powered through on your first, second, or probably even first dozen attempts. They didn't design this thing with the idea that you'd be following along with an online guide. And honestly, if you're playing this for the first time, I don't know how anyone would have the patience to play through this any other way. That means that the people playing this in '93 would have probably run into the same scenes over and over and over again. So if this isn't much of a game, how's the video portion? Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Film Apologist, where we look for the good in bad movies. It's really bad. Okay, so my first couple attempts at playing this thing didn't really give me an idea of what was happening on screen. There's trash people, creepy glowy-eyed girl with an off-center eye, that's weird. I think there are vampires, scat soldiers, a song in the middle of all this. There's a lot of stupid ideas happening under this roof, and I don't really know what's going on. Well, spoilers, there really isn't that much happening here. like I mentioned earlier, this team is here to investigate the disappearance of teenagers. They've tapped into the security cameras and traps of the Martin house. A family of vampires, or family of people in the process of becoming vampires? I don't know. It doesn't matter, they're vampires. As are the augurs, apparently. These are creatures that need blood to survive, but have none of the characteristics of vampires to sustain themselves. And the Martins are here to do charity work for them, and I don't know, man. They're hobo vampires. I don't know what you want me to tell them. I don't know. Is that offensive? Stupid trash vampires. So instead of having teeth or faces, they instead have to use these tools that look a lot like those extra accessories to action figures, but you didn't actually know what action figures they went to, so they just end up in a pile somewhere, and then you'd find them later, and you're like, I don't know who this goes to. Is this a foot soldiers thing? I don't know. What's this? So these girls roll up, along with a little brother, to the Martin house where they will be spending the night. I could try and name them all for you, but the only one that really matters here is Kelly. She's the undercover agent for Scat. And will often look directly at the camera to address Control, or, well, the player character. Victor and Sheila Martin peace out for a bit, leaving the hosting duties to their children, Jeff and Sarah, and their cousin, Tony. Here we also meet Eddie, a neighbor of the Martins who, I guess is supposed to be a red herring? I don't know. Since the parents are gone, the girls decide to throw a party, and I guess party in this world means badly lip-syncing the theme of the game. After that assault on our ears, Tony and Jeff pop in to alert Sarah someone's been tinkering with the security.
This is my cousin, Tony.
Well, that's all I needed. I would say that's a bit quick, but who can blame the girl? Look at Tony, killing it with that banana cream color, buddy. Who needs a shirt? There's plenty of room in that sweater for two. Well, unfortunately for, whoever this is, Tony clearly only has eyes on whoever this is. Oh, wow. Security cameras that can quick jump to a tight shot. How advanced. Tony mentions to Jeff that one of the girls reminds him of Madeline. Obviously, these masters of narration are setting things up for something truly special. I can't wait to see where it leads. And there goes that plot thread. Whatever, let's just get this stupid thing over with. So everything goes crazy.
Yeah, right.
Everyone's running around and screaming. Kelly is trying to protect the girls from the augurs and the Martins, and depending on how quick you are as a player, they either escape or end up captured, either by the augurs or an accidental click of the button by Control. Oops! Oh, and Eddie runs into that kid from earlier and gives him a laser gun who can kill... sure, fine, whatever.
Wait, don't shoot, it's me! This I don't fool him.
You've done your job, Eddie. You're no longer needed. We take a quick break from the action to sit everyone in the living quarters for a nice healthy slice of expository dialogue, explaining what the augurs are, the Martins' role in all of this, and then we get right back into it. Did they just vaudeville hook that dude? Exit stage left. Once they strip out the side characters, it's up to you to save Kelly from the Martins. If she survives all of them, she'll thank Control for all their help, and you're left with the good ending.
Nah, you wouldn't.
Oops!
Oh, I can't believe you do this to me after everything we've been.
Bye! I know I rushed through this. We could break this down scene by scene and take pot shots at every individual thing that happens here, but this is low-hanging fruit. It's a cheesy bit of film from the mid-'80s, and I'm tired of talking about it. I've seen these stupid scenes so many times at this point, and I'm at my limit, guys. This doesn't work as a game. This doesn't work as a movie. So why does this thing have such a large fan base? Why is this a touchstone in gaming history? Why does this game matter? Well, let's get into it. Look, there's probably no way we'd be talking about this game today if it wasn't for those 93 Senate hearings. Those meetings, ironically enough, helped push this game into cult status. This was a Sega CD game, for crying out loud. It wasn't exactly flying off the shelves, but thanks to all the attention, it got ported to anything that could run FMV games. And as frustrating as the version I played was, it's nowhere near as bad as the original version. In the re-release, you can see what's happening on the other cameras, regardless of what you have on the main screen. The original game just had icons you could work off of. Granted, this original one had some things the new one didn't, like an introduction explaining what to do and, oh my goodness, yes. Of course, the original version will also send you straight into a game over if you watch this scene for too long. Seriously. Regardless of how you play it, this is still pretty bare bones and not very good. But it plays exactly like it should, gives you plenty of tools to succeed as long as you're paying attention and quick to react. it's still a neat little piece of media. The gimmick is interesting and, for the time, very ambitious. Bold, crazy new experiments don't normally pan out perfectly the first time. Night Trap was only one of many FMV games that haven't aged great. Okay, let's be honest, a lot of us hated this stuff even back in the 90s, but I doubt we'd have Five Nights at Freddy's without the likes of this game. And if nothing else, it's hilarious. Without the game element, Night Trap really is one of those it's so bad it's good kind of films. And they know it. Everybody is hamming it up and having a great time, and it shows. This was always meant to be cheesy and hilarious. The interactive element just reminds me of those schlocky midnight spook shows from the 40s and 50s. Everything about this film is memorable. The goofy acting, the insane plot, the quotable lines, that ridiculous song, there's genuine joy and fun all over this thing. That's why I rushed through the movie portion as much as I did. You really should experience it for yourself, even if it is just watching it on YouTube. Still, for $15, the Anniversary Edition does include a better version of the game with as good of a picture quality as they could ever scrape together. It also includes a bunch of interesting behind-the-scenes stuff as well. Again, you can find a lot, if not all of it, on YouTube, but this is the kind of remake we should be pushing for. As much as I love having an already great game updated with a new coat of paint, and there are certainly classics that have benefited from getting modern updates to help make their formula shine, I think it's still pretty great when they take something that was never really good to begin with and at least attempting to improve the thing, even if the final product isn't a masterpiece. This is definitely a case of the story behind the game being far more interesting than the game itself. The congressional hearings are one thing, but the long history of getting Night Trap onto a platform is crazy as well. This game was released in 1992, but it had been filmed in 1987. They originally made this thing for a VHS-based gaming machine. And even when it was finally released, they still had a challenge bringing it back for the 25th Anniversary Edition. It's bonkers. And of course, the tragic story of Dana Plato can't go unmentioned either. They put so much focus on her because, well, she was the biggest name actor they could find, thanks to her role in Different Strokes. Between the filming of Night Trap and its eventual release of the game, she separated from her husband in the same wake her mother died, had most of her money stolen, lost custody of her son, had been arrested for holding up a video store in Vegas with a pellet gun, and then arrested again for forging a prescription the same year of this game's release. She passed away at 34 years old after suffering a short life filled with addiction. There's nothing really else to say there. It's just terrible. This is the only thing I've ever known her for. And I thought she was adorable in this game. I know there's no direct correlation. I just find it kind of annoying that politicians were making such a stink about a problem that didn't exist, while the person on the box was in a living hell. It's crazy what this game was connected to. This silly, goofy, charming thing spun into controversy and forever is connected to tragedy. Night Trap's a bad game, but it proves that even a bad game can tell us an interesting story, be it the one it presents or the one behind the scenes. And for that, if nothing else, deserves our attention and its place in gaming history. Ski bop bop bada bop, Scat Warriors. Ski bop bop bada bop.
And let me say that for the record, I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system. Obviously, it would not pass our guidelines. This game, which as you've indicated, promotes violence against women, simply has no place in our society.